Light Yagami was born on February 28, 1986. Being Japanese, his name is written using the kanji for moon, but read as light. The reason that the meaning of his name is different from the way that it was written is because the Japanese language started as just a spoken language, then later adopted written characters from Old Chinese, and both the Anyomi, the Chinese readings, and the Kunyomi, the Japanese readings, were retained. When a person's name has an atypical pronunciation like this, it's known in Japanese as a Kira name, which is very ironic, because Light would eventually be referred to by the nickname Kira, which is the Japanese pronunciation of the word killer. The Japanese language is kind of a combination of old spoken Japanese mingled together with Old Chinese and foreign words imported from other languages. His last name, Yagami, is written with the kanji for night and god, which also contains a stroke of irony, because in his teenage years, Light would attempt to become a god among men. But how did he get to this point? Light is the son of police chief Soichiro Yagami and housewife Sachiko Yagami. Being raised by a police officer instilled a strong sense of justice in Light. His father's profession allowed him to see things through a law enforcer's perspective, and played a part in him developing the belief that the world is full of rotten people. This is despite the fact that Japan has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. The Yagamis live in the Kanto region of Japan, home to the biggest city in the world, Tokyo. On June 18, 1989, his younger sister Sayu was born, and later comes to admire her older brother for his intelligence. Saying that Light is a very smart kid would be an understatement. In Japan, there's a culture of hard work and competition amongst peers, so many schools rank their students. Not only is Light a top student at his school, but later on, he takes a practice test for college admissions, which is ranked nationally and places #1. He pulls this off multiple times. At the very least, he's one of the smartest young people in Japan, or maybe the world. He's also a gifted athlete, becoming a tennis champion in middle school at Eishu Junior High in 1999 and 2000 during grades 8 and 9, but giving it up to focus on his studies. He's also ambidextrous, something that probably helped him in tennis and would become very important in the future. Being that he was extremely intelligent, and given the passion for justice instilled in him by his father, Light aspired to become a detective, and even helped offer advice to the police department on multiple occasions. The first being in 2000, when he was about 14 years old, and the second in 2002, when he helped police solve a case about an insurance money murderer. He would receive letters of appreciation from the police agency for each of these. And if being a genius, gifted athlete, and prodigy detective wasn't enough, he also had good looks, and was very popular with the girls. Whether or not you're already familiar with Light going into this video probably doesn't make a difference. None of this sounds like a villain origin story. There's no tragic background tale, no horrible betrayal, no desperate circumstances, and certainly no social outcasting. But his lack of typical supervillain qualities is exactly what made Light Yagami one of the most twisted and dangerous serial killers of all time, when he becomes the owner of an occult notebook dropped down to earth by a god of death.
The human whose name is written in this notebook shall die.
To learn how Light's looks helped him deflect suspicion a la Patrick Bateman, why he wanted to get caught, where he got his god complex, if he could have won, if he was even in the wrong, hell, I'm just going full psycho mode on this one. I'm gonna stay in his hotel. I'm gonna fully get in his headspace and attempt to understand the timeline of Light Yagami like no one ever has before. Not just this Light Yagami, but every Light Yagami. For all of the rules that dictate one of anime's greatest minds, stick around to the end of this video. Kyofu no Rikishi e yokoso. I have no idea if I pronounced that right. Welcome to Horror History. My name is CZsWorld. Before I ever did commentary on this channel, I did virtual coasters, I did skits, I did short films, and I did scary stories. But in 2017, the trailer came out for a new adaptation of one of my favorite things ever, Death Note, and I knew I had to talk about it. This was my first ever commentary video.
I know this isn't the type of content you would usually expect from me, but I'm feeling kind of experimental right now. Just something that I thought I'd try out.
Hundreds of millions of views later, I would say the experiment was a success. A lot has changed on my channel in the years that followed, but one thing that hasn't changed is my appreciation for Death Note. Death Note is a manga, or Japanese comic book series, written by Tsugumi Oba and illustrated by Takeshi Obata. First published in the magazine Weekly Shonen Jump in December of 2003, Death Note was the introduction to the multifaceted anti-hero Light Yagami, who sought to create a better world by using a death god's notebook to kill off sinners and eliminate crime. Over the next 2.5 years, Light's story would unfold over 12 volumes and become an international sensation that sparked an anime adaptation, a light novel prequel, live-action film adaptations, sequels to those movies, several strategy games, a musical, a television drama, an American movie, an economy of merchandise, and server rooms worth of memes. But even now, more than 20 years after his debut, Light remains one of the most interesting characters to ever grace the screen and page. I think many of the best villains are those that believe that they are the hero. Victor Frankenstein created the monster to overcome the limitations of human life. Annie Wilkes thought that she was facilitating the creation of a book that would bring joy to many people. Jigsaw thought that he was helping other people to learn to appreciate life and overcome addiction. But none of them really compare to what Light wanted to do. Create a perfect society, a utopia without crime, a new world to replace the old one. But Frankenstein, Wilkes, and Kramer all understand that their goals cannot be achieved without sacrifice. And being the bored genius that he is, Light understands that, and takes the burden of guilt upon himself in order to save society from its current trajectory.
Only I could do it. Who else could have done it and come this far?
But to understand where he acquired such grandiose delusions, or if they even were delusions at all, we've got to take it back to the moment of opportunity. On November 28, 2003, Light is a 17-year-old student sitting in class near the window at Daikoku Private Academy when he sees the notebook fall to the ground from above. After finding and examining the death note, he thinks it's a prank, something like a chain letter, but something causes him to hold on to it and eventually test it when he sees a news report about a man named Kuro Otoharada, a killer who has taken 8 hostages inside of a nursery school. To his shock, it works, and Otoharada dies of a heart attack, allowing the hostages to walk free. He later claims that the notebook has the power to make anyone want to try it at least once. This explains why someone as smart as him would even bother holding on to it and trying it for the first time.
There's something about the Death Note itself that makes humans want to try it out at least once.
On the way home from his college prep course, he notices a thug named Takuo Shibuimaru harassing a girl on the street. Light steps into a shop and covertly writes his name in the book with a traffic accident as the cause of death. 40 seconds later, he gets pummeled by a truck, proving to Light that the notebook really works and making him throw up at the idea that he just killed 2 people. Which I think is an important detail that often gets overlooked. Light is capable of feeling remorse, at least at the beginning, and it doesn't seem like he initially has the stomach to continue. He struggles with the internal debates of whether or not to get rid of the book, but suddenly he gets the idea that he was actually doing a service by getting rid of these bad people.
This world is rotting, and those who are making it rot deserve to die. Someone has to do it, so why not me? The world can't go on like this.
He comes to believe that he's the only one who can do it, because nobody else would have the guts. Light is not the first or last human to own a death note, so what makes him different from all of the others who couldn't handle it? I think that there are 3 factors. Number 1, his ego. I'm sure some people stopped using the death note because they knew it was wrong, but for some, I'd assume that the fear of getting caught was a contributing factor. But Light was not afraid of this. Light always believes that he's the smartest person in the room, and that's because he is. The creators have literally made personality charts for each character, and nobody charts higher in intelligence than Light. Factor 2 is boredom. The name of the first chapter is Boredom. Light is so far ahead of his class that he doesn't have to try very hard in school. I think this has given him a lot of time. Time to think about how he would run the world differently if he were in charge. Factor 3 is optimism. Despite seeing the world as a rotten place, Light still considers himself an optimist. At one point, he tells Ryuk, "If I weren't an optimist, I wouldn't have thought I could make the world a better place." He uses the Death Note over a 5-day period by writing the names of criminals who he deems unfit for society. At first, he's disturbed by his actions. He gets bad dreams and loses sleep while dropping 10 pounds. Although he has the power to specify the cause of death to make them all look like accidents, he intentionally chooses not to. By default, each criminal will die of a heart attack. Light is counting on the world taking notice. He doesn't just want to purge existing criminals, he wants to discourage anyone from ever committing a crime again. This is part of his plan to create a perfect utopian society. On December 3rd, he goes into his room and examines the notebook further when he's confronted with a surprise.
You've taken quite a liking to it.
This is Ryuk, a Shinigami. A Shinigami is essentially a god of death in Shintoism, the dominant religion in Japan. Think of it as the Japanese version of the Grim Reaper. Ryuk explains that he dropped the notebook into the human world for the same reason that Light picked it up, out of sheer boredom. At first, Light believes that he was chosen by Ryuk, the earliest sign of his bombastic ego, but that's not the case. After explaining his plan to Ryuk, the Shinigami points out that if he succeeds, the only bad person left will be Light, but he sees himself differently.
And I will become the god of this new world. It's just as I thought. Humans are so interesting.
Which brings me to my first rule for Light Yagami. Rule number 1, devotion to the God complex. A God complex is an individual's belief in their own infallibility, superiority, and an exaggerated sense of self-importance. In some cases, like Light's case, someone with a God complex may equate themselves with an actual God. God complex is not a clinical term, but it's more of an unofficial flavor of narcissistic personality disorder, a mental disorder associated with exaggerated self-importance, need for admiration, and lack of empathy for other people. The main reason I would elevate my unofficial YouTuber diagnosis from NPD to God complex is the display of this authoritarian attitude, someone who tries to assert control or dominance over others because of their beliefs. In a previous video, I talked about Jigsaw, who sought control over his followers by forcing them into situations where they have to adopt his philosophy in order to survive. Another anime example is Lelouch Lamperouge from Code Geass, who sought to change the world by literally taking control of others. In the realm of gaming, Resident Evil's Albert Wesker injected himself with an experimental virus in conquest of superhuman abilities and godlike powers. Common signs of a God complex include entitlement, excessive control, thinking that they have all the answers, feelings of superiority or invincibility, indifference to others, and refusal to accept criticism. And by Light ignoring Ryuk's comment about being the only bad guy left at the end, he's demonstrating that refusal to accept criticism. We'll come back to the other traits. He dedicates his life to punishing criminals, using his few hours of free time after school every day to write names in the death note. He plays dumb as his school friends take notice of the criminals dropping off in the news. His main worries pertain to the security of the notebook itself, which he's forced to leave at home, probably in case he passes out or something and someone goes through his stuff. Websites began to go up in his honor, which referred to him as Kira the Savior, which comes from the English word killer.
The people of the world can already sense that there's something happening. They know there's someone out there passing righteous judgment.
Nobody will side with Kira because they need to uphold a facade of moral righteousness. But on the internet, their true colors come out, and Kira has supporters. This feeds into his belief that he's doing the right thing. Everything is going exactly as he had planned until December 5th, when there's a special TV broadcast from Interpol.
I am Lind L. Taylor, otherwise known as L.
Taylor publicly calls out Kira, promising that he'll be caught and publicly shaming him, calling his actions evil. This gets under Light's skin and makes him angry and irrational. He feverishly scribbles Lind L. Taylor's name into his death note and watches as the man on screen succumbs to a heart attack 40 seconds later. However, to Light's surprise, a modulated voice overtakes the feed and explains that this was merely a test. That was not L, but rather a criminal whose execution was scheduled for that day. The real L assures Light that he does exist and challenges him to kill him. In order for the notebook to work, Light must write his real name and picture his face, neither of which he knows, so to his frustration, he's unable to kill L. L also reveals that although this was advertised as a worldwide broadcast, it was actually only broadcast in the Kanto region of Japan, allowing L and the police to quickly narrow down the location of their search. With that, the battle between Light and L is on.
I will hunt you down wherever you're hiding, and I will eliminate you. I am justice.
It didn't take long for us to get to the next rule. Rule number 2, get competitive. Light Yagami is as competitive as they come, and he hates losing. It's something so obvious that the police take note of it during their profiling before Light ever becomes a suspect. Throughout his history, this would be both a strength and a weakness for Light. It's a strength because his desire to win is part of what drives him. After this announcement, instead of backing away from the challenge, he focuses more on killing Japanese criminals. He's challenging, almost daring L to narrow in on his location even further. But this is potentially also a weakness. Light could probably go on for a long time by just killing criminals at random and never allowing L to zero in on him. But he wants to face L. He wants to assert his dominance and beat his opponent. This is just the way that Light is. I think there's also something to be said about survivorship bias. Winston Churchill said, "History is written by the victors." If Light wants to truly change the world in his image, he needs to eliminate those who oppose his ideals, and right now, that's L. While taking a break, Light tells Ryuk about an advantage that he has over L. His dad is working on the Kira case, allowing him to siphon information and find out how much the police know. This is how Light discovers that they already have a list of suspects, a list that he is already on. Light is studying to be a police officer, with plans to one day run the National Police Agency as its director. Light is only a student and years away from having that job if, in fact, it all pans out for him, which shows how cocky he is. This is another God complex trait, entitlement. He's already the #1 student in the country, so he solemnly believes that he can become the director of the police if he so chooses, even while continuing to be Kira in secret. His father reveals that the police already suspect Kira of being a student based on the time of each death taking place outside of school hours, but letting the police discover this information is also part of Light's plan. As soon as Light figures out that they suspect a student, he changes his strategy, placing each death at 1-hour intervals throughout the day, so that L will realize that Kira is someone with access to police information. Once this happens, L, who is an anonymous private detective, will start spying on the police and their families. Light's hope is that the police will get fed up with this and track down L themselves, allowing him to discover L's name and face and take him out. Light also starts carrying the notebook around with him during the day, which is dangerous, but it gives him time to make plans to better hide it. Anyone who so much as touches it will be able to see Ryuk, so Light would like to avoid that at all costs. He builds a secret compartment in his desk drawer that will combust if not opened in a very specific way. When walking home from school on December 18th, Ryuk informs Light that someone is following him.
You're being followed by another human. He's watching you right now.
That's a problem. I'll have to get rid of him as soon as possible.
Ryuk reveals that Shinigami have a special set of eyes, allowing them to know the name and remaining lifespan of any human that they're looking at. In exchange for half of his remaining lifespan, Ryuk can grant Light the power of the Shinigami eyes. Since this is Light's main limitation, he can only kill people whose names he knows, it's an attractive offer to him. But he declines, telling Ryuk that it's out of the question because he plans on reigning over his new world like a god, and he wants his reign to last as long as possible. He's even kind of snarky with Ryuk for not telling him about the existence of the deal sooner. Unlike previous Death Note owners, he's not afraid of the Shinigami, and carries himself almost as an equal. Light is careful to make the distinction that he's not a Shinigami, but rather a human using the Death Note for human beings. Don't mistake this for Light denouncing his earlier intentions of becoming a god though. The reason he says this is because it shows that he believes what he's doing is right, which is actually one of the traits that I brought up earlier of someone with a god complex, the feeling of superiority. In this case, he feels that he is morally superior to the common Shinigami. But first things first, he's got to deal with this investigator who's following him, and he's got just the plan to do it. Rule number 3, plan elaborately. What fun would it be if all of Light's intelligence just amounted to him getting his homework done early so he had more time to write names in the Death Note? The main reason his brain is such a dangerous weapon is how he's able to use it creatively. The best way to use your brain, in my opinion. He excels at coming up with plans that make the most of the resources he has available to him. His idea to discover the name of the man shadowing him involves manipulating the clause in the Death Note that allows you to specify the details of a person's death. He tests his theory by killing 6 prisoners between December 18th and 19th in 2003, forcing 2 of them to leave messages or pictures behind in their jail cells before their death, and 1 to escape to a specific location. The other 3 were given practically impossible instructions, which did not come true, so they just died of heart attacks, the default mode of death. The next day, he creates a scenario where a convenience store robber gets stabbed by an employee and dies, and it turns out just as he planned. Something you'll be hearing a lot.
Everything is going just like I planned. Everything went just as I planned. Everything's going as planned. This is going exactly as I planned. Everything's still going according to plan. Exactly as planned. Last night's judgments unfolded just as planned.
So everything's going according to plan?
Oh, it's going exactly as I planned.
No.
Having determined the limitations of the notebook, he puts his plan into action. He arranges a date with a classmate so that the man tailing him, FBI agent Ray Penber, sees this as an ordinary day off for Light. But that changes when a bus jacker gets on board. Sitting in the back of the bus with Light and Yuri, Ray assures them that he can take care of it, but Light acts skeptical.
Do you have any proof that you're not his accomplice? Why should we trust you?
Here's my proof. Take a look.
With that information collected off Ray's FBI ID, Light had arranged to have the situation resolve itself by making the busjacker pick up a scrap of paper from the Death Note, giving him the ability to see Ryuk become frightened, attempt to shoot the Shinigami, and ultimately flee the bus and get run over by a car.
It's not the bus! Let me off!
Just as planned. Instead of killing Ray right away, he decides to give it a week to make it less suspicious. In the meantime, he has more prisoners leave notes for L, trying to make him think that the messages can be combined into a riddle to distract him. This also gives Light a chance to work on his next plan. A week later, on December 27th, 2003, he sneaks up behind Ray Penber in the subway and tells him that he's Kira, and not to turn around if he wants to live. To prove that he's Kira, he kills a coffee shop employee, claiming that the guy was a serial rapist who couldn't be prosecuted because of insufficient evidence. This is further than Light has ever gone before. Previously, he'd only killed prisoners and those he had personally witnessed committing a crime. Now, he was killing someone who had been tried and cleared. There was not enough evidence to convict him. In doing so, Light is making himself the judge, jury, and executioner. The legal system has explicitly split up these roles for a good reason. If one person fills all 3 roles, then this person has all of the power. If this person holds a grudge against someone, they don't stand a chance. Take medieval England, for example. They had this concept called attainder law, where someone accused of a serious crime could be attainted appointed, meaning that they would lose their civil rights and could be put to death without a fair trial. Monarchs like King Henry VIII were known for using bills of attainder to gain political power, taking out bishops and chancellors who opposed his policies. Henry also had a daughter who went on to become known as Queen Mary I. Remember her? I talked about her in my Candyman video. She's the one with the portrait that goes unnecessarily hard. The reason I brought her up in that video is because she became known by a nickname, Bloody Mary, thanks to all the Protestants that she had executed. What I didn't mention then is that she used attainder laws and other measures to take out many of them. In fact, before she was queen, this other lady, Jane Grey, was appointed to the throne. So Mary hit her with charges of high treason so that she could grab the throne, which may be why she looks so cold while sitting in it. As you can imagine, this system of attainder laws wasn't in line with most people's view of justice, and for that reason, they've been barred from credible legal systems of today. I see a lot of people claiming online that Light was trying to make the world a better place by taking out criminals. I think it's important to recognize that what he was trying to do was bring back medieval attainder laws by making himself the judge, jury, and executioner. For someone named Light, his idea of justice is a lot more in line with the Dark Ages. Killing the coffee shop employee was more about proving that he's Kira than seizing power, but what he did next would be a statement against his opponent. Light tells Ray that he's kidnapped his fiancée in order to get him to comply, then hands him an envelope containing several other envelopes. These smaller envelopes contain pages of the death note with the details of death already filled out. This is so Ray can't see the details and doesn't touch the actual death note paper so that he can't see Ryuk and has no idea what's going on. Light instructs him to call his superior and ask for the names and faces of all of the FBI agents in Japan. This leads to a fun detail about Death Note. If you look at the names of all of the English characters, they're very strange. In Death Note 13, How to Read, which is basically a behind-the-scenes / encyclopedia of the manga, Oba reveals that he deliberately tried not to use real names so no one would be disturbed if their name came up. Combine that with English not being his first language, and you get FBI agent names like Freddie Gunther, Arir Weekwood, Leon Zapak, Tors Denote, Ale Funderim, Bess Seklet, Nick Stake, Fridge Copen, Nicola Nasberg, or Jarella Sevenster. After writing all the names, Ray is instructed to ride 30 more minutes and then get off, leaving the envelope behind, at which point he has a heart attack. As the subway door closes, Light boldly reveals himself to Ray.
Farewell, Ray Penber.
This was very risky. It shows Light's cockiness that he isn't going to be caught. While it is likely that Light's plan would work to perfection because of the level of detail that he put into Ray's Death Note entry, there are things that could have gone wrong, like witnesses that just so happen to know Light. He is a popular guy after all. If we look at Ray's entry, it says, passes in front of the Kifil coffee shop in Shinjuku Station around 3 p.m. on December 27, 2003, carrying his laptop computer, and boards a train on the Yamanote line. Dies 3 seconds after getting off the train. Everything else is left intentionally vague so that Light has time to get Ray to write all the names next to the details on the page. Now you may be wondering, why didn't Light just write Ray Penber learns the names of the other FBI agents, writes them in the Death Note, then dies of a heart attack? 2 reasons. Rule page 10 for using the Death Note states, whether the cause of the individual's death is either a suicide or accident, if the death leads to the death of more than the intended, the person will simply die of a heart attack. This is to ensure that other lives are not influenced. Also keep in mind rule page 6. If any part of the instructions written in the Death Note are not possible, the person will just die of a heart attack. So if he wrote that Ray obtains the names of the other FBI agents, planning to just give verbal instructions to write the names down, but Ray was unable to get one of the names, he would just die. And Light doesn't want him to die unless all of the others die, because if only his agent dies, then L knows that he's Kira. Light's plan is creative and innovative, though extremely risky, but the way that he sets it up eliminates the risks as much as possible. I think you could make the argument that a god of death passing judgment on criminals could make a better society. But here's the thing, Light is not as fit for the job as he thinks he is, because he's not a god, he's a human trying to be a god. And being human, he had to worry about getting caught. That's why he takes out the FBI agents. And even though that went according to plan, it may not have been worth the effort. Later, while pondering in his room, he considers the downside. Who'd have thought the FBI sent only 12 agents to Japan? Was I being shadowed so early on just because my father is in charge of the investigation? If L was deliberately using so few agents because he assumed I'd kill them? At dinner that night, Light's dad officially reveals his participation on the Kira task force to the family, and proclaims that he may be killed, but he refuses to back down from evil. Light commends his father's stance with pride, swearing to avenge him and give Kira the death penalty if he's killed. It's an interesting scene because while he is lying about wanting to catch Kira, there is some truth behind it. Light is not the type of guy to back down in the face of danger. He's gonna see justice through to the end. On New Year's Eve, he continues to play the part of a dutiful student, telling his sister to record the emergency news report on TV so that he can watch it later. He's showing just the right amount of interest in the case for someone his age. There's no suspicion from his family. On January 1st, 2004, Light Light becomes paranoid and starts carrying around a scrap of the Death Note whenever he goes out, like when he goes to the police HQ to drop off some clothes for his dad. He has a chance encounter with a woman named Naomi Misura, who is trying to reach the task force because she has information about the Kira case. This is Ray Penber's fiance. Given that she would be one of the few people to make contact with Ray in between the bus-jacking incident and his death, she might have some information that Light wouldn't want getting out, so he tries luring her away from the NPA offices. However, Light has a different set of tactics that he uses with women. Rule number 4, charm to disarm. When dealing with men, Light relies on logistics and reason to get what he wants out of them. But when dealing with women, he relies on emotional manipulation. The task force isn't in, but he offers to hear her concerns and relay to his father, further stressing,
I feel like I can trust her. You can almost see it in her eyes. She's a wise and careful person.
Even Ryuk is taken back by his friendliness. He's using his charm with girls to get to her. Is it sexist to assume that this tactic will work just because of her gender? Or is it just effective? He used a similar tactic on Yuri to get her to never say anything about their dates and the bus jacking that occurred on it so that he would never be connected to it. I told Yuri that our date to Spaceland was our little secret, because I want her memories of that day and everything else in her heart to belong to me and me alone. It's another dumb line that doesn't really mean anything, but is designed solely to make her heart melt. He later attributes his success with women to looks and looks alone. This goes a little deeper than just being able to control women. His looks actually make it more difficult to prove that he's Kira and make him much more dangerous. It may sound ridiculous, but I promise it's gonna make sense. There's a long-standing phenomenon in fiction of the good guys being attractive and the bad guys being ugly, possibly even having some deformity. From the Phantom of the Opera to Freddy Krueger, the horror genre, and even fiction as a whole has a well-established trend of villains with malformed appearances. I'm not saying that deformities are inherently ugly or that ugly people are evil in real life, but it's a pattern many people have noticed in stories, so I think it's pertinent to explore why. Some have suggested that there's an evolutionary reason. When humans lived in the wild, deformity could be an indicator of disease, and our survival instincts would push us to avoid this. Ugliness could also be an indicator of lack of fitness. Humans traditionally lived, traveled, and hunted in tribes for protection, so associating yourself with those who are the most fit means survival. But maybe it's not a case of authors having a bias towards those that they see as unattractive. Maybe it's more reactionary, and less attractive people are more likely to turn evil. I think one thing I've touched on in a lot of videos here on horror history is how human companionship and love is this underappreciated human need. Carrie White, Tiffany Valentine, Vecna. These were all outcasts seeking some type of love who turned evil as a form of coping or revenge on the society that refused to accept them. Whatever the reason, it is clear that the opposite exists too. Humans have an inherent sense of trust towards those that they find attractive. Parents will tell their kids to stay away from characters on the street that they perceive as creepy. In a study conducted at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in 2009, students rated a series of photographs on their attractiveness, likability, and trustworthiness. And the results showed that those who were seen as the most attractive were also seen as the most trustworthy. A University of Buffalo study found that good-looking individuals were more likely to be hired in a job interview, but also acknowledged that their appearance may affect other factors, like for example, they may be more confident and have good body language. I can personally attest to this, because I've been told by sponsors and agents that I'm able to get better brand deals than my counterparts who do not show their faces. The reason for that is because viewers are more likely to buy from a face that they perceive as trustworthy. But to tie this a little more directly to Death Note, let's look at how beauty has an effect on the criminal justice system. This study from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill states, when assessed alone, physical attractiveness significantly decreased the odds of criminal behavior by 18%, arrest by 11%, conviction by 14%, and incarceration by 28%, controlling for race, age, and gender. So a while back, when Light told Ryuk that he's pretty popular with the ladies, it doesn't just affect his ability to get a date, but it also affects everything he does. And this isn't the first time I've discussed a criminal who gets away with it largely on the basis of his looks. Patrick Bateman is one of the most deranged cases that I've ever looked into on this channel, but he never gets taken seriously as a suspect. Even the investigator on a missing persons case admits that he doesn't think Patrick is responsible and only interrogates him to cover his bases. At one point, during one of his many mental breakdowns, he admits several murders to his lawyer, but it's completely ignored because his good looks make him seem unbelievable as a serial killer. Sure, American Psycho is a satire and Death Note is just fiction, but we literally see this phenomenon in real life thanks to these characters. The tendency to idealize the physically alluring has caused people to unironically idolize characters like Bateman, Yagami, Tyler Durden from Fight Club, Tony Montana from Scarface, Jordan Belfort from The Wolf of Wall Street. They're all terrible people with followings that treat them like role models. Anyway, Light and Misada go for a walk, and Light discovers that she deduced Kira must have been on the bus that was hijacked because her fiance, the FBI agent Ray Penber, was killed just 1 week later. She's basically worked everything out. The fact that Kira can kill using other means than heart attacks, the fact that he can control the actions of the victim before death, and the fact that Ray's fatal mistake was showing his ID. Light acknowledges how lucky he was to run into her.
It seems there's a god on my side after all, and not just a god of death.
She gives Light a fake name, so his first attempt at killing her doesn't work. But Light realizes that God is in the details, or in this case, the god of death is in the details. And once he realizes she used an alias, he internally panics for a way to find out her real name. As she heads back to the National Police Agency building, he realizes he only has 5 minutes to find out before she exposes everything. He considers using force to get her ID. Ryuk also offers to make the Shinigami ideal again, but ultimately, his cooler head prevails. He comes up with a story about how she'll never get to talk to someone at the task force because of a security measure to protect their identities, ensuring that they won't meet the same fate as her fiancé did. Then, when she questions why he knows all of this, he tells her that he's actually part of the task force. We've seen flashes of it before, but this highlights one of Light's strongest attributes. He is a really good liar because of his ability to think ahead, predict what other people are going to do, and predict how they'll react to certain things. The scene with Naomi Misada is like a microcosm of the entire Death Note story as a whole, where Light meticulously crafts a lie, and L tries to put him in a position to expose that lie. L is also ultra intelligent and always thinking several steps ahead of his opponents to corner them, which is why Light and L are perfect foils for one another. Misada, who is a former FBI agent who once worked with L, realizes this, telling Light that he reminds her of L, that they are somehow similar. So he offers to let her join the investigation. Again, we see him preying on her femininity, telling her it's fate that they met, something that Ryuk recognizes and says, "Human females always fall for that word. Fate. You could be a god of salesmanship too." Here, we see Light's eyes change as he goes from amiable to sinister, as he switches from the innocent, helpful kid, Light, to the vengeful persona of Kira. Also, it starts snowing, another stroke of good fortune, because as Light writes her name on his scrap of the Death Note, an actual member of the task force, Shuichi Aizawa, walks right by them, but his umbrella seems to stop him from realizing that it's Light. Light writes that she should commit suicide in secret, and when the time comes, he's confident enough to reveal the reason that he keeps looking at his watch.
I guess it's because I'm Kira.
This is the second time he's revealed himself as Kira right before killing his victim, and it's his cockiness and flair for the dramatic that caused him to do this. This is more of a flaw of his, because again, what if Misada had given him a fake ID? What if she was wearing a wiretap? It's never really safe to reveal that you're Kira, but Light simply can't help but celebrate his victory. This would eventually come back to bite him, but not for some time. Light spends the next 4 days restlessly scheduling names into the notebook in order to create a buffer in case he's hospitalized or arrested. Being a Shinigami has become a full-time job for him, and he's really covering any possible cracks that could get him caught. He also sets up a series of tests to determine if anyone is going into his room while he's gone, trying to get a better idea of just how closely he's being investigated. On January 8th, 2004, Light walks home from school and discusses the decline in overall crime as a result of Kira. This ties into his long-term goal. He wanted to use the criminals he kills as an example to discourage crime overall and create a perfect society. The end goal is commendable, it's just how he goes about it that divides people. Is Light really a bad guy for punishing other bad guys? Or are the sacrifices he makes worth it to improve society overall? When he gets home, he realizes that 2 of the 3 checks he placed to determine if anyone had been in his room are broken, causing him to suspect that his house may be bugged with cameras and microphones. This is another example of how he's always a step ahead of his opponent. A normal kid might put in 1 test, like the slip of paper jammed into the door to see if it had been opened. But Light includes 2 more checks so that the intruders think that they had fooled him by placing the paper back in the doorframe when they leave. It's this kind of thinking that makes Light nearly impossible to get ahead of. He also demonstrates that he's a master manipulator, and not just of women. It would look suspicious if Light went home and started looking around for cameras, because again, he's acting like he doesn't know anyone went into his room. However, if Ryuk looks for cameras, nobody will know, because Ryuk is invisible to the eye of anyone who hasn't touched the Death Note. However, Ryuk is a natural spectator. As we've established, he isn't on Light's side. But Light knows one thing about Ryuk. He loves eating apples, and he won't be able to eat them on camera without the investigators seeing a floating apple, which would raise suspicion. So if Ryuk wants Light to continue supplying him with apples, he'll have to help Light by finding all the cameras. apples. By the way, it's no coincidence that apples are the favorite fruit of choice for this god of death. Death Note makes several references to religion, primarily Christianity. In Christian tradition, the apple is often linked to the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, where Eve eats the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, often depicted as an apple. This may seem strange because the Shinigami themselves come from Shintoism, and Christianity is observed by less than 2% of people in Japan, but it's actually pretty common for Western ideas to permeate in pop culture. For example, Christmas is widely celebrated in Japan in a non-religious manner. Ryuk's love for apples is a parallel to the Death Note itself. He's eating the metaphorical forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, and he's the one to drop the forbidden notebook into the human world, a tool that brings about knowledge of life and death, but he who uses it cannot go to heaven or hell. The apple is a major symbol seen all over the marketing for Death Note, along with other religious symbols like crosses, cherubs, the winged babies meant to represent angels, monstrances, aka the sunburst thing often seen in religious settings, and heavenly beams of light. This all ties in to Light's view of himself as a god and his god complex. The first opening of Death Note's anime adaptation is even more obvious about the religious symbolism, with Light superimposed on religious paintings and enough apples to fill an orchard. Misa's apartment is also rife with this kind of imagery. Although he doesn't want to take sides, Ryuk agrees to help Light because he doesn't like the idea of not eating apples. While Ryuk searches for the cameras, Light spends some time looking at dirty magazines to suggest that that's the reason that he was checking if anyone entered his room. At some point, he stashed these magazines away in hidden places just in case something like this happened. He realizes it will look suspicious if new criminals aren't dying while he's being watched in his room with no access to the news. He has scheduled some deaths out for the coming weeks, but if newly reported criminals died during this time, they would have to assume that Light was innocent. So he comes up with a plan for the ages, buying a mini television set while he's out, sealing it inside of a bag of barbecue chips, a flavor his sister doesn't like, and placing it in the pantry for later use. At dinner one night, Sayu is watching a music program when a special bulletin airs, claiming that Interpol is sending 1,500 detectives from various countries to help Japan solve the Kira case. But Light is one step ahead of L.
Regardless of whether this news is real or not, it's obvious they're just trying to evoke reaction from me. L. This is the exact same trick he used last time.
So he puts on a reaction for L, calling the plan stupid and pointing out that they'd be better off working in secret. He even claims that it must be a ruse to put pressure on Kira, which it is. He could just say nothing, but his competitive nature sees to it that he has to dominate L, even if it makes him look more sus by showing L how intelligent he is and how his mind thinks. After dinner, he grabs his chips and heads upstairs to study. And I think we all know what happens next.
I've set things up so that criminals will continue to die over the next 3 weeks. But L is aware by now that Kira can control the times of death of his victims. Therefore, to avoid suspicion, L needs to see that criminals whose names are being broadcast continue to die while I have no access to that information.
Light's ability to multitask would save him again later, but never quite like this.
With Ryuk's information and my preparations, I can continue to kill criminals whose names are broadcast on the news, while masquerading as a typical high school student studying for his entrance exams.
This is also where his ambidexterity comes into play.
Just watch me, L. I'll solve equations with my right hand and write names with my left. I'll take a potato chip and eat it. Now, a criminal who I should have no knowledge of will die of a heart attack in 40 seconds. And the witness to my alibi is L himself.
He has to throw out the expensive mini TV with the chips, but it's worth it. The next day, he buys Ryuk an apple, and Ryuk reminds him that in the end, he'll write Light's name into his death note and kill him. Light realizes that the victims he killed with his potato chip plan were relatively minor criminals, so he continues to kill minor criminals inconspicuously.
I made sure to kill criminals whose names and faces were broadcast when I didn't have access to TV or the internet. But there's a chance I'll look even more suspicious if only these lesser criminals end up dying while I'm not receiving information.
His standards of who to kill didn't change because he ran out of major criminals. His standards changed because he did something to protect himself. This can't be overlooked. It's exactly why trying to play God is wrong. A true God would be able to judge without bias, but that just isn't possible for a human with his own unique motivations and fears. There's always going to be a bias, and in this instance, a minor criminal got the death penalty because of it. L points out that if someone in the Yagami family or Kitamura family was Kira, they're now killing without showing any reaction, which is true of Light. He's become a sociopath, or if his mental condition were to be formally diagnosed, he would most likely be a textbook case of antisocial personality disorder. Rule number 5, traverse the sociopath. The symptoms, according to Mayo Clinic, almost sound more like a list of traits written to describe Light rather than being general things to look out for in potential patients. They include ignoring right and wrong, Light is willing to judge other people's morality but doesn't include himself, telling lies and taking advantage of others. This would become more pronounced later on, but Light is a very talented liar, not being sensitive or respectful of others, another one we'll see more of as more people get involved, using charm or wit to manipulate others for personal gain or pleasure, which I talked about in rule number 4, having a sense of superiority, I also talked earlier about the God complex, criminal behavior, self-explanatory, being hostile, aggressive, violent, or threatening to others. This doesn't initially seem to fit him very well. He's not violent, but I think this goes back to him being a good liar. He has the death note, so there's no need to be physically aggressive. It makes sense for him to keep up his cool, collected appearance. However, if you look at the way he writes in the death note in private, it looks very aggressive. And don't forget that little detail earlier. When he was trying to find Naomi Misada's name, he considers using force, then dispels the idea. Feeling no guilt about harming others, he's now able to kill on camera with L watching and give no reaction. Doing dangerous things with no regard to safety. Being Kira is a dangerous task, and it's going to be a death sentence if he's caught. And lastly, being irresponsible and failing to fulfill work or financial responsibilities. That one doesn't apply to him yet, but later on he would miss a huge amount of school in order to join the Kira investigation. We'll get there. Shortly after the performance with the potato chip, Ryuk discovers that the cameras are gone. After concluding that L must have had his father's cooperation to install and remove the cameras without anyone knowing, Light plans to use his father so that he can eliminate L so he can become the god of the new world. On January 17th, 2004, Light took his university entrance exams, which made him think about how in college he'll have more privacy to freely operate as Kira. During the test, he notices a strange older student sitting with his feet on the desk a couple rows behind him. Light gets into Toho University, which is basically the Death Note equivalent of Tokyo University, which was considered to be the top college in all of Japan. In 2004, it was ranked number 12 in the world. During the entrance ceremony, there are 2 freshman representatives. We don't typically have entrance ceremonies here in the West, so here's a quick description from webjapan.org. School entrance ceremonies are held across Japan in early April, when the school year starts. The ceremony gives incoming students a chance to think about the kind of school life that they'd like to lead and allows older students to welcome their new classmates. At this school, the top incoming student issues a freshman address, but there are 2 this year, Light and a student named Hideki Ryuga, who shares a name with a famous pop star. Light discovers that Ryuga is none other than the strange guy that sat behind him during the entrance exams. On April 5th, the 2 give their address. Here, we see the stark contrast between Light, who is well put together and confidently standing tall in his suit, versus Ryuga, who is unkempt with slouchy posture and baggy clothes. They both scored 100% on their exams. 2 geniuses and both polar opposites. And there's a reason for that. Ryuga claims he has important information regarding the Kira case, so Light decides to humor him, and Ryuga drops this.
I want to tell you I'm L.
Light realizes that even if he's telling the truth, he can't do anything because he might accidentally imagine the face of the pop star Hideki Ryuga and kill him. That would make Light look very suspicious, especially if L hadn't revealed his identity to anyone else. That would make Light the only suspect. Alternatively, if he did successfully kill this strange man, but he turned out not to be L, it would also suggest that Light is guilty. When Light returns home, he is furious that L may have humiliated him. His ego is showing, and this is the most he ever loses his cool. But then, his sinister, calculating side takes over, and he realizes this is his chance to gain L's trust and kill him. 2 days later, they play tennis, but it's not just a game of tennis, it's really a psychological battle. Light knows that L suspects him, and L believes that Light is Kira. Light's goal is to make himself look innocent, and L's is to profile him and see if he shares similarities for the profile that he's created for Kira. Both are calculating their every move and every word. Neither brings up the Kira case, but both know that's exactly what this is about. The match also draws a huge crowd because they're both incredible tennis players. Light concludes that you can't win if you're always on the defensive. You need to attack. Light wins a match by powering a ball past L, a foreshadowing of the end of their entire psychological duel. Afterwards, L surprises him again by straight up saying that he suspects him of being Kira. They go to a coffee shop with a booth in the back to talk in private. First, L claims that he wants to test his deductive reasoning abilities by giving him a series of tests, but the true purpose is that he's trying to get Light to say something that only Kira would know. But Light has spent a lot of time separating public information from private information in his head and passes these tests with ease. He proves his brilliant deductive reasoning skills by stating that he knows what L is trying to do, so L invites him to join the task force.
You see, I'm in a position where even if you are Kira, it would still be to my benefit to have you working alongside us. Do you know why I'd say that?
The debate is interrupted when Light and L both receive emergency calls informing them that Light's father has suffered a heart attack. After arriving at the hospital, he discovers it was a heart attack from overworking. This is a known phenomenon in Japan, and there's even a word in their language just for it, karoshi, or death from overworking. It's hard to determine exactly what constitutes a karoshi death though. Officially, there are about 200 per year, but some say it's actually more like 10,000. Obviously, there's some thought that Kira was involved, since the heart attack is the main method that Kira uses to kill, but Soichiro believes that it was because of the stress of the case. He does confirm that Ryuga is actually L, and Light immediately starts thinking about the logistics of killing him and has to remind himself to focus on being the boy concerned about his father. This really shows how far gone Light is at this time. He's more concerned about his own violent ambitions than his father's well-being, which is definitely another sign of sociopathy. With confirmation that L is who he says he is, Light agrees to join the investigation. He explains his supposed image of what he thinks Kira looks like, an affluent child, too young to consider using the power for personal gain. Using it to get rid of criminals and at the same time making it an example to others to make the world a better place is something only a child would do. Based on this, L tells him that the #1 suspect would be his sister, Sayu, and Light gets extremely upset. Light's dad breaks up the fighting with maybe the most profound take in all of Death Note.
What is truly evil is the power to kill people, and any person who has come to possess this kind of power is cursed.
After leaving the hospital, Light offers to have himself locked up with no TV or outside contact in order to clear his name of suspicion, which L refuses, for now. After L's departure, he tells Ryuk how he doesn't consider finding the Death Note to be a stroke of misfortune. Actually, he's never been happier. And while spending your day seeking out horrible people and writing their names in a book doesn't sound like the most fulfilling life, I think it makes sense if we consider where Light was at the beginning of the story. Chapter 1 was boredom. He was way ahead of his class and headed down a life with no challenges. Becoming Kira has attracted the attention of the world's greatest detective, finally a worthy opponent for him to try to outwit. Light feels like he has a real sense of purpose now too. Before, he was just depressed about the state of the world, but as Kira, he's seeing his work start to make a difference with falling crime rates and a growing cult following. Everything's going great until April 18th, when a second Kira sends a message to Sakura TV claiming to be the original Kira and asking for cooperation from police to show more criminals on TV. During this broadcast, some officers are killed trying to get into the Sakura TV building to put a stop to it, leading Light to believe that this new Kira has both the Death Note and the Shinigami eyes, allowing you to see a person's name and lifespan. On April 22nd, Light watches as another video airs. This time, the new Kira threatens to kill the Director General of the NPA, or L, as punishment for not cooperating. The new tape also confirms that the second Kira needs a face to kill. Light's conclusion about all of this is that if there's a second Death Note and it's fallen into the hands of one of his fans, the gods really must be on his side, further cementing his god complex. He is glad that the new Kira is going after L, but he doesn't like how Kira #2 has altered his image and the public perception of him. He plans to make contact with the new Kira without revealing his name or face and steer him or her in the right direction. The next day, April 23rd, Light gets a call from his father telling him that they'd like to have him join the task force. He learns that it only consists of 4 people: L, his dad, the rookie Taoda Matsuda, and the umbrella guy Shoichi Aizawa. But there's also one secret person on the outside. This makes it impossible for Light to just kill the entire task force without the secret 5th person concluding that Light is Kira. But he probably knew that L would have some kind of security measure like this. When they show him the tapes sent to Sakura TV, Light realizes that they're testing him, and says that he believes that there may be more than one Kira, and the rest of the force is amazed that Light's reasoning is exactly the same as L's. They plan to write a response, posing as the first Kira to try to contact the second, and L suggests that Light play the role of Kira. He writes a script for a video they would send to Sakura TV, claiming that he'll only kill the second Kira if he continues to deviate from his vision. Although most of the task force believes that Light is just acting, for him, this is genuine. He probably knows that L is using this opportunity to match Light's behavior to his profile of Kira, just like what he was doing in the tennis match, but he does it anyway, because this is a message he genuinely wants to send to the second Kira. After 2 days of waiting, they receive a response.
I really want to meet you. I don't think you have the eyes, but you don't have to worry, I would never try to kill you.
The second Kira claims they should meet and confirm each other by showing their Shinigami. Light thinks this person is an idiot for talking about the Shinigami and the ideal in a video that the whole world will see, and L is just shell-shocked at the possibility of Shinigami really existing. L decides to do nothing, thinking the two could accidentally reveal more information while trying to communicate. Another message from Kira 2 comes in before long, a diary page for May 2003, exactly 1 year before the upcoming month, May 2004. Light realizes that the entry on the 30th, we confirmed our Shinigami at the Giants game at Tokyo Dome, is a red herring. But my friend and I showed off our notebooks in Aoyama is real. L plans to investigate all of the locations on the diary page just in case there's a different code word. And it's decided that Matsuda and Light, the two youngest, will go undercover in Aoyama because they don't look like obvious police officers. Before carrying out that plan, L instructs everyone to destroy any photos of themselves, which Light realizes is a measure to prevent him from providing the second Kido with photos of the task force. Death Note was a perfect story for the time period it was created in. Today, it's pretty much impossible to dispose of all photos of yourself thanks to the internet. Even if you're not on social media, chances are there are photos of you floating around online if you participate in society whatsoever. Even faceless YouTube channels doing whatever they can to hide their identity usually end up on the net eventually. I can't think of anyone who has redacted from the yearbook. Plus, it's way easier to capture and share photos using microscopic cameras and SIM cards in the modern day. Newer adaptations, like the Death Note TV drama set in 2015, do have ways around this, like an airport security type thing you have to go through before seeing L. But it necessitates other changes in the story. Sticking to the canon, there is a Death Note chapter where a notebook falls into the human world in the modern era. Most of it is set in 2019, and they do talk about how much harder it would have been for Light in the current world, where you can't walk down the street without being on hundreds of cameras. I'd love to analyze that story further one day, if there's interest. That night, Light grills Ryuk for information about what would happen if two Shinigami met. Ryuk claims that he wouldn't say anything, but the other Shinigami could. When they go to Aoyama, he brings a bunch of school friends to make them all seem even less suspicious as cops. It was also Light's plan to throw off the other Kira, who would just see the Shinigami hovering over a crowd and not know which person Ryuk was attached to. On May 25th, the police receive a tape claiming that the second Kira was able to make contact with the original. L plans to send out a message offering leniency to the second Kira in exchange for the identity of the first, which makes Light nervous because he doesn't know how number 2 will react. He doesn't like having this second variable because it means that he's not fully in control. Remember, trait number 2 of the God complex is excessive control. But besides that, he's kind of on the right track with that way of thinking, because much later on, the unpredictable behavior of another party would eventually lead to his downfall. Before he can make a move, he gets an unexpected visitor at his door that night, a girl claiming that he left his notebook at school. He immediately suspects the word notebook could be code for Death Note. The girl introduces herself as Misa Amane and hands him a notebook, which sure enough is a Death Note, allowing Light to see her Shinigami. She explains that the Shinigami eyes allow her to see everyone's name and lifespan unless they own a Death Note. She was able to identify him because she couldn't see his lifespan. Her request is to cooperate with him in exchange for being his girlfriend. Upon interrogating her, he discovers that she covered her tracks, and she's not quite as dumb as he thought. She tries her hardest to gain his trust, even allowing him to take her Death Note. She desperately wants to help him because Kira apparently killed a burglar who had murdered her parents. Light accuses her of killing the innocent police officers who had tried to shut down the TV broadcast, which she argues was a necessary sacrifice to defeat evil. Misa represents another moral viewpoint in the story. Death Note has a way of creating characters that represent different schools of thought, which can probably be applied to any social issue. So far, we have Sociopath Yagami on one end of the spectrum. He opposes Kira, but he's not willing to make even a single moral sacrifice to defeat him. Even going so far as carrying a gun as a civilian would break his code of conduct. Next is L. L is willing to break a few rules. He's got no issue with illegal surveillance. It seems like he has no problem with cheating the rules to beat Kira as long as there's no major harm. Later on, we see him steal things, illegally collect evidence, and even partake in false imprisonment in the name of justice. L has created his own code of morals, and he's following that in order to stop what he sees as evil, which is very similar to Light. Light and L are both willing to do wrong in order to accomplish what they see as the greater good. In Light's case, he kills Ray Penber and Naomi Misada, and he wants to kill L simply because they are a threat to Kira. Finally, Misa Amane is the most desperate to achieve her vision of justice. She's willing to kill totally innocent police officers who may or may not oppose Kira, and even offers to kill her friend who helps her pack the envelopes sent to the police station. The reason these characters are so resonant is because in our world, everyone falls into one of these 4 categories, or at least somewhere in between them. For example, I think there's a similar debate with national security. You have those who want safety but aren't willing to give up any privacy to get it. That's Soichiro. Then you have those who believe everything should be monitored because we have to catch terrorists even if it means sacrificing privacy. That's Misa. There are plenty of Lights and L's in between. And by the way, I'm not saying that Misa is definitely the type to oppose privacy. You could easily flip this chart and say Soichiro is the one who is unwilling to compromise national security in his pursuit of privacy, and Misa is willing to give up anything for privacy. My point is that everyone thinks that they're working towards a better, more just world, with varying levels of sacrifice required to achieve that. You most likely fit into one of these categories, and that's probably the character that you're rooting for in Death Death Note, right? Unless, of course, you're the type of person who just supports whatever character you find the most attractive, which goes back to rule number 4. Humans will naturally try to associate with attractive people as a means of protection and survival, and that may play a role in why Misa wants to team up with Light. Anyway, after realizing he can manipulate her because of her obsession with Kira, Light embraces her, explaining that he can't become her boyfriend, but he can play the part. But we can see his true motivations in his expression. It's not the face of connection in a loving embrace, it's a sinister grin, because he realizes that he can use her to kill L. He's even planning on killing her after that. As the only person who knows he's Kira, she's a liability, even if she isn't as stupid as he initially thought. This is another example of Light using his charm to manipulate women. Misa fills him in on how a Shinigami can die, what it's like having the Shinigami eyes, and how she's been sending the tapes to the TV station. Light gives her additional instructions, including orders to send one last tape in, claiming that the second Kira plans to spread the power to more people. In order to confuse the investigation, he tells Misa that he'll have to date other girls. It would definitely raise suspicion if Light, the #1 suspect, suddenly became exclusive with Misa right after the two Kiras supposedly made contact. Just like he did when he was manipulating Naomi Misada, he has to use different language, calling her sweetie and talking down to her. But when that doesn't get through, he switches to other tactics.
I think you're forgetting I have both notebooks. If you don't obey me, I can easily kill you.
I would never allow that, Light Yagami. If you do anything that results in this girl's death, the first thing I'll do is write your name in my death note. I will kill you.
Even if you're unwilling to give Light credit for anything else, you have to admire Light's focus and dedication to spreading his message. Misa had already gotten two Shinigami to fall in love with her, to the point that they would both be willing to give their lives for her. Not to mention, she's a model with a legion of adoring fans, yet Light is seemingly the one person who doesn't fall for her. He reminds me of the stereotypical entrepreneur who puts off getting in a relationship while working to get that degree or build that business. Only instead of building a company that will benefit himself, he's building what he believes will be a better world. However, since he can't kill Misa, it does create a challenging situation, because now she'll always be a liability. Details about her parents being killed by a burglar and avenged by Kira are already public knowledge online, which gives L a possible motivation to use against them as grounds for an indictment. Light puts a band-aid on the situation by telling his mom and sister to keep Misa a secret because she's a model who's not allowed to have a boyfriend. Light is genuinely so good at coming up with lies, but I'm telling the truth when I say that that is our next rule. Rule number 6, a liar's worst enemy is the one who believes him.
One lie after another, you make it look easy.
Broken down into simplest terms, Light's story is that of someone trying not to get caught in a lie. Only the stakes are incredibly high, and that someone might just be the best liar we've ever seen. But what makes a good liar? To find the answer, I wanted to ask some of the best liars in the world. But since I don't know any politicians, I settled for the next best thing: other entertainers. There were a few patterns I picked up on. A big one was consistency. A good liar sticks with one story rather than trying to keep track of different versions of the story for different people. When asking people about their most successful lies, I also noticed that there's often some kind of diversion, usually in the form of unnecessary details to distract the victim from what the real lie is. I also did some research online, and one article mentioned physical attractiveness, which should come as no surprise given the research that I mentioned earlier about the link between good looks and trustworthiness. I also learned that environmental factors such as color can play a role. It turns out that wearing cool colors and muted tones can set a person at ease and make them more susceptible to the lie. But how is that possible? It's not. That one was a lie. But you probably believed it because I said it with confidence, which is definitely a big factor in making a good liar. This ties into the broader idea of emotional camouflage. One topic that I've discussed in several videos is incongruent affect, when a person's feelings do not match their appearance, or do not match what is appropriate for the situation. We get creeped out by characters like Michael Myers and Art the Clown because their facial expressions do not match their horrifying actions. It's a survival mechanism which primarily helps us spot predators who are trying to deceive us. We've evolved to get very good at picking up on this, which in turn gives us the ability to sense when someone is lying. L, for example, has an uncanny ability to detect lies in this manner. But the liars have evolved too. Some people, like Light, are very good at tuning their emotions when telling a lie in order to make them fit what is appropriate for the situation. That's why I said earlier that I researched this by speaking to entertainers. If you think about it, actors are professional liars with the ability to tune their emotions to be believable believable to an audience. Other traits of a good liar are intelligence, a good memory, and being manipulative, all characteristics that can be found in Light. These traits also happen to be present in many cult leaders, and Light would become something of a cult leader himself, the cult of Kira. So let's take a look at Light's lie about why his family should keep Misa a secret from his dad. I think the biggest reason that it works so well is because the lie is mostly the truth. She really is a model, and it probably would be a good career move for her not to be extremely public about her dating life. Sorry to all the people who are just incessantly Googling CZsWorld girlfriend every day. I also think it helps if the lie is inconsequential. It's best not to lie if you want to be seen as trustworthy, but if you have to, it's better to lie about something small like this. It benefits Light, but it's unlikely his mom or sister would try to disprove it. The most effective tactic that I've pinpointed, though, is just withholding information. A good liar doesn't say a lot and lets the person he or she is trying to deceive come to a conclusion on their own. This reduces the chances of being caught in a contradiction and makes the victim more likely to second-guess themselves than second-guess the liar. This is also something that Light does a lot, particularly a bit later when the existence of death notes becomes known to police. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Anyway, Misa goes home and Light's family stays quiet. But as he promised, he does go out with other girls as not to raise too much suspicion about Misa. He starts dating a fellow classmate named Kiyomi Takeda, who is very intelligent and popular, gaining her the nickname Miss To-O. She's basically a more believable match for Light, or at least that's how it comes off. It would be kind of expected for the revered heartthrob at the top of his class to go out with one of the school's most sought-after women, with similar academic prowess. He also seems to spend some time with girls named Shiho and Emi, though we never actually see them in the manga. On May 27th, 2 days after the final tape was sent in, L sees right through Light and Misa's ruse to make it look like the two Kiras had not made contact. There are actually so many levels to Light and L's mental tennis match here, it's kind of insane. So let me try to break it down in the simplest terms possible. L suggests that if Light were Kira, he should have used the opportunity to bait L into appearing on TV. But Light did not do that, so L is pretending that this all means that his suspicion of Light has gone down, but that's not actually the case. In reality, he's testing Light, trying to see if Light will point out the obvious flaw in that logic. Light tells him that if he were Kira, that would mean that Kira knows L's personality and knows that he would never go on TV. Light figures out what he's trying to do though, and although L concedes his plan, he still gains valuable information by forcing Light to reveal information about how his brain works if he were Kira, or if he is Kira. I hope that makes sense. In any event, L shocks everyone by telling them why he hopes Light isn't Kira.
It would be a problem if you were Kira, because I feel you're the first friend that I have ever had.
Light, the great liar that he is, convinces Ryazaki that he's a friend and misses playing tennis with him at the school. This was definitely an intentional reference by Oba, because what we just saw was just like the tennis match. You have the match you can see on the outside, but you also have the mental push and pull each of them is making for more information about each other going on underneath. It's one thing for me to be able to sit here and take my time unpacking each move that Light and L throw at each other, but I'm not too confident that I would have the processing power up here to unpack this all in real time, which is really what makes Light and L such interesting characters. Death Note was published in the Japanese manga magazine Shonen Jump. Most Shonen Jump characters are basically superheroes or supervillains because of their muscles or being able to shoot energy waves or something. But Light and L's super abilities are strictly tied to their brain power. Playing detective or playing criminal is something we can all do, but they do it on such a high level, and that's why the character endures even today. As he walks home, thinking about how it's now even more dangerous to meet with Misa, he is ambushed by none other than Misa, leading to one of the funniest out-of-pocket lines in all of Death Note.
This is the first time in my life that I've been provoked to hit a woman.
Realizing that Misa is going to continue to create problems for him, he takes a different approach and asks her Shinigami, Rem, to kill L if she really wants Misa to be happy. And surprisingly, Rem agrees. Misa once again starts to make romantic plans in her head. Clearly, she doesn't think about safety quite as much when in Light's presence. He kisses her and orders her to go home, which leaves her dazzled and compliant. This gives him time to consider his options. While it might seem like the obvious move to kill Ryazaki, the man who introduced himself as L, if that's not actually him, then Light could be in even more trouble. However, he decides he's going to go through with it. But the next day, May 28th, L throws a wrench into his plans by appearing in person at the university. This throws Light off because the last thing he heard from L was that he was planning on going into hiding again. L is trapping him once again by telling him he's instructed the task force and the other L's to assume that if he dies in the next few days, then Light Yagami is Kira. This gives Light a lot to think about, but to add even more drama, Misa shows up.
I've won. Misa will be able to see Ryuga's real name.
Her presence starts to attract a crowd, and she's ushered away by her manager. Given the recent developments, it's clear that he has to kill Ryuga, so he steps away to call Misa, planning to use the full extent of the 23 days of control the Death Note gives over a victim to make him die unsuspiciously in 22 days. However, he soon discovers that L pickpocketed both of Misa's phones, leading him to believe she's already suspected of being the second Kira. He soon learns that her DNA matched the physical evidence found on the tape sent to the TV station. The credit here goes to Mogi, the one task force member that Light hasn't met who reported back to Elle on all of the girls that he's seen Light with. In just a few minutes, Light went from believing that he's won to almost certainly being caught. In the metaphorical tennis match, Light's attack is skillfully returned, and now he's being forced to play defense again. Under this newfound pressure, he removes the Death Note scrap from his wallet and diffuses the trap in his desk drawer in case he's arrested. But Light is not the type to cave under pressure. On May 31st, he continues to plan his response when he's approached by Rem in his room and she announces that Misa has given up her ownership of the Death Note. This is probably the best case scenario for Light, because she'll lose her memory and won't be able to snitch on him. But it comes with a caveat. Rem informs him that if he cannot save Misa, she's going to kill him. So as always, he comes up with a plan. And this is what I consider to be the most genius plan anyone has ever come up with. Forget Light for a second. The fact that Oba was able to write this plan and put it in his manga makes him probably the smartest person on Earth. Am I exaggerating? I honestly don't know. There is no short version of this plan without leaving out important details, but the main goal is to hide one Death Note underground and give the other to an evil businessman, then give up the Death Note, causing him to lose his memories, be proven innocent, rejoin the task force, catch the new Death Note owner, touch the Death Note to regain his memories, and then go retrieve the underground notebook. But again, that's the very short version. The details are what make this plan great, because they take advantage of what is maybe Light's strongest attribute. Rule number 7, if you're good at anticipating the human mind, it leaves nothing to chance. You may recognize that quote. It comes from John Kramer in Saw 5. As I discussed in my Jigsaw horror history, Light and John have a lot in common. They both have a god complex, and they both excel at setting up plans where they are mentally several steps ahead of everyone else. Light does this using 6 steps, so let me break them down into a mini section with all of the major aspects of the plan. Step number 1, reverse the chain of ownership. First, he brings both notebooks to the middle of the woods at 4 a.m. to work in secret. It gets a little confusing, but luckily, in Death Note Volume 13, How to Read, there is a full breakdown of Death Note ownership. First, he forfeits Misa's notebook to Rem, then asks her to give it up to Ryuk. Then, Ryuk drops it on the ground, essentially the same thing that happened when Light first got the Death Note. Light picks it up, and this makes Light the owner again. Then, he buries this note underground with the intention of Misa going back for it once they regain their memories. Although it appears that it's just gone in a circle back to Light, the order of command has now been reversed. So now, when Light gives it up, it will go back to Ryuk, not Rem. And when Misa retrieves it, Ryuk will be the Shinigami attached to her. This is to keep Rem from interfering with Misa. He also includes a letter to Misa, instructing her to kill his friend Ryuga from the university and he'll love her forever. The letter also instructs her to touch him with a piece of the notebook so he can regain memories of it. Probably the only dumb part of this plan is that he signs his full name at the bottom. I mean, if someone had just happened to dig this letter up, it totally could have incriminated him. I imagine the reason he signs his name is to give it the feeling of a love letter from Misa, another part of his emotional manipulation over her. But still, I think the signature aspect is kind of stupid. He could have just signed his name as Kira, like he did in the TV drama. Then there's his original notebook. He forfeits ownership back to Ryuk, who gives it to Rem, and instructs her to give it to a greedy human who will use it for personal gain.
Rem, I want you to give the notebook to someone with status who lusts for power and money. They'll end up using the notebook to satisfy that urge. If you do that, I can guarantee that Misa will be released from her confinement soon.
Light is so confident that he'll be able to catch the new Kira and come into contact with the notebook again that this doesn't even seem to be the part of the plan that he's most worried about. Step number 2 is to doubt his own innocence. Light creates a fake diary showing notes and hard work put into solving the case, but ending it with "I might be Kira." He's going to make it look like he subconsciously is Kira and offer to have the task force lock him up so that they can clearly see the killing start again while he's in captivity. They'll have no choice but to release him and Misa, which leads to step number 3, catch the third Kira. It's very narcissistic to assume that he'll be able to find whoever ends up with it, especially knowing the advantage that the person who has the notebook has over the person who doesn't know it exists. On top of that, he has to catch the new owner before Elle, the world's greatest detective, or before anyone else. Or at least work together with Elle so that he has the opportunity to touch it when it's discovered. Then he can kill the owner, and as long as he's still holding the notebook, he will regain ownership. This particular notebook has instructions written in it in English, so it's perfect to give to someone else. I just love how every little detail has purpose, and this detail has more than just one purpose. Step number 4 is add fake rules. Since this notebook has instructions, he has Ryuk add in 2 fake rules in exchange for an apple and the promise of entertainment. The 13-day rule states, if the person using the note fails to consecutively write names of people to be killed within 13 days of each other, then the user will die. This will ensure that Light and Misa's names are cleared while they're in confinement and unable to write names. The other says, if you make this note unusable by tearing it up or burning it, all humans who have touched the note till then will die. I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is to prevent L from burning the book, causing Light to lose ownership and memories again. Another example of details with more than one purpose is the reason that he had to reverse the chain of ownership on each death note. He's already thought a couple of steps ahead of what will happen when he retrieves it. The ideal scenario is for Misa to remember Ryuga's real name and write that in the notebook, but there's a chance that she won't remember. Misa, due to her complete devotion to Light, will do anything to help him, even doing the Shinigami ideal again, cutting her lifespan in half for a second time. Rem cares about Misa and would never let her do this, but Ryuk would. So it's important that Ryuk is the one attached to the death note that she retrieves from the ground. Light is mentally so many steps ahead of everyone else. The tennis match analogy doesn't do this one justice. It's like a chess match where he's already figured out his opponent's moves for the next several turns. And finally, this includes predicting his own moves. Step number 6, old habits die hard. He puts one scrap of the death note inside a watch which has a secret compartment. Although he won't keep his memories, he relies on his daily habit of wearing the watch so that he'll have it on hand, or I guess on wrist when the time comes. And he installed the secret compartment when he was Kira, so he'll only remember about its existence after regaining his memories. This is what he plans to use to kill the third Kira and regain ownership of the death note. If you didn't fully appreciate the complexities of this part of the story before, I hope this mini section made you acknowledge just how mind-meltingly brilliant it is. The John Kramer quote says that if you're good at anticipating the human mind, it leaves nothing to chance. But would that hold true for Light, or would L find a way to spoil his plans? The fact that Oba was able to write such a brilliant plan for Light is really impressive, especially knowing the circumstances. If you, as a mangaka, are writing a physically strong character, you don't have to be strong yourself. You just draw them with big muscles and let them lift a lot of weight and punch really hard. But in order to make a character as intelligent as Light, you really do have to be a genius yourself, and that's exactly what Tsugumi Oba is. It's well known in the Death Note fandom that L is a self-insert for the author, who uses a silhouette of himself crouching over an apple as his personal emblem, the same way that L sits to improve his deductive reasoning ability. But in this instance, we see Oba sort of insert his way into Light's character as well. When manga is written, it's initially released in chapters in a weekly or monthly magazine, which are eventually compiled into volumes, also known as tankobon. These are the books that we read manga out of in the West. Death Note came out in a magazine called Weekly Shonen Jump, then there would be a new volume every couple months, spanning from April 2004 to July 2006. There's a tremendous amount of pressure to meet deadlines, because you want to keep up momentum. Each issue has reader surveys at the end, and you want to rank high in the polls for your manga to continue. This is something that's talked about in their follow-up series Bakuman, which I'll be talking more about at the end of this video. The reason I bring all this up is because Oba had to mentally be several steps ahead of the audience and his editors when coming up with the storyline. We see the first breadcrumbs of what Light is up to in Volume 4, which was released in November 2004. But the full scope of the plan wasn't unveiled until Volume 7, which came out in July 2005. There may have been a rough overall outline, but the bonus Volume 13 makes it clear that he did write the actual story volume by volume as he went along, because there are several instances where he mentions things turning out differently than what he had originally planned. This is backed up in Bakuman as well, as there are always things that pop up to necessitate adjusting the story. So his experience writing the thing is reflected in Light's experience coming up with his plan. He had to be several steps ahead of everyone and predict exactly how everyone would react while keeping them in the dark about his true intentions. As someone who has paid a lot of attention to Death Note discourse over the years, I've seen this growing sentiment where people believe that Light's confinement plan is essentially him cheating. They say that it's not fair because he's playing a different game than everyone else, a game where he knows the rules and nobody else does. But I kinda disagree. I mean, he's using all of the tools at his disposal to confuse and trick the Kira investigators. It's no different from what he's been doing all along. To go back to the tennis analogy, if Light were playing with a tennis racket and his opponent was using a baseball bat, then his opponent is going to have a huge disadvantage, yeah. But it's not Light's fault that his opposition doesn't know how to play with the proper equipment. The best analogy I can make is actually something that happened last night while I was playing Tears of the Kingdom. There was this one shrine puzzle called A Precise Strike, where you have to knock the ball into this hole that's moving back and forth. It's pretty hard to get the timing right, and it's too far to simply drop the ball in. I found myself thinking, wouldn't it be easier if I just went over there and brought the ball to me? I figured out a path to go on this ledge, glide to the moving platform, and the ball was too far away to grab. But what about this giant cube they give you to strike the ball with? I thought if I stuck the ball onto the side and leaned it over the edge, then I could reach it from the other side. And this worked perfectly. A slam dunk. Slam! I I felt so clever because I essentially outsmarted the game. And it's not like I cheated, I just used the tools that the game gave me and found my own solution. When asked in an interview, Tat-K director Hidemaru Fujibayashi addressed the ability to solve shrines unconventionally like this. That was definitely one of our goals. That's totally all according to plan. A big theme of this game was that there should be multiple answers, multiple methods, multiple ways of doing anything. All the dungeons, we wanted to make it so that the players would be able to solve problems in any way that they wanted to without us even being able to know what they would do to solve it. And while Death Note is a completely different medium made by completely different Japanese people, I think a similar philosophy kind of applies. In volume 13, How to Read, Obata talks about how he created the rules early on and seemingly tried to build the story within the sandbox that he provided to himself. One of his unused ideas was laminating the pages of the Death Note, for example. It seems like the idea was to find out how creative he could get within the simple framework of a notebook that kills people, and that is exactly why Light is such an exciting character to watch. So we got a little sidetracked here, but that's okay. Let's reel it back to June 2004. When Light is confined, newly announced criminals stop dying immediately. On day 7, he covertly tells Ryuk to get rid of it. This is him giving up ownership of his Death Note, meaning that Ryuk is free to leave and Light loses his memories. After doing this, we see his eyes, which have been narrowing during his time as Kira to illustrate him becoming more and more sinister, revert back to the way they were in the beginning. He immediately starts bargaining to be let out. On day 15, 2 weeks worth of criminals all die at once. This is the work of Kyosuke Higuchi, the immoral businessman who had begun using Rem's Death Note under the agreement that if he kills the criminals he sees on TV, he may use the Death Note for his personal business. However, L doesn't inform Light that the killings have resumed. He's kept in the dark, pun kind of intended, until day 53, which falls on July 23rd, 2004. Light is told that he is Kira, and he's going to be executed alongside Misa because the killings have not stopped, and L has promised that their death will put an end to it. Can we just take a moment to appreciate the attention to detail here? Light's hair has grown out to reflect his time in confinement, and his eyes are wide with fear because he doesn't know what's about to happen. Death Note was illustrated by Takeshi Obata, an experienced manga artist who has become Oba's one and only partner. I gushed about Oba in the last section, so it's only fair that I give Obata some love in this one. The gothic, pseudo-realistic style not only worked great for a dark detective story, but it helps Death Note stand out amongst its neighbors in Weekly Shonen Jump. I would say most anime characters never really change in appearance, other than getting a bunch of scratches on them during a fight, but Light ages up throughout the series, and his character arc, which is maybe the most important thing we're supposed to notice in Death Note because the main message is tied to him being corrupted by power, comes across visually in details like this. I feel like I've been saying it the entire video, the reason Light can't truly be a god is because of his human biases. So the fact that he's drawn in a realistic way, using details like this, gives the character the impact that it's supposed to. Amazingly, Obata wasn't privy to what was about to happen in the story. He only received drafts about 4 or 5 chapters ahead. Each of the 12 volumes typically contains 9 chapters. In the bonus volume 13, Obata revealed that this was actually the biggest curveball. I really freaked out while preparing for chapter 35 when my editor told me that Light loses his memories and I needed to return to how I drew him in chapter 1. It was like I had to forget everything I learned. Back to the story, Light finds it odd that L would end the case like this without hard evidence, but before he has too much time to think, they pull over in the middle of nowhere where Soichiro says that he's going to kill Light, then kill himself, part of a responsibility he feels as a police chief and as a father. However, unlike Alec Baldwin, Soichiro's gun contained a blank, and he soon explains that the whole scenario is fake. The only way they could convince L that Light and Misa were innocent was to put them in a situation where they had to enact their Kira powers to save their own lives. L informs Light that they'll be spending 24 hours a day solving the case together, which he's excited about until he learns that they will literally be chained together. L doesn't fully trust Light, but he's basically forced to let him free for ethical reasons. Due to his memory loss, there are a few holes in his story, like not remembering that he made Misa his girlfriend. L asks him to pretend like he likes her for investigative purposes, but he refuses.
As much as I want to help you, and as important as the Kira case is to me, I can't manipulate a woman's feelings like that. Please try to understand. To me, exploiting another person's feelings for personal gain is unforgivable, and I won't allow myself to stoop that low.
This is super interesting because Light had absolutely zero problem with manipulating her emotions for his benefit when he was Kira. This could be an example of the curse of the Death Note causing him to act differently while in possession of it. Or it could be that when he was Kira, his priorities changed, making him go mad with power and go against his own morals in pursuit of more control. Again, like I just mentioned, the changes that Light goes through after gaining power are emblematic of the main theme of the story, so it's likely a little bit of both. Shortly after, Light learns of the new headquarters L had built. And I knew with the video this long, I was gonna get sick of being in the horror history classroom before long, so I had a new facility built as well. And it's ready for its grand opening. And we have Light. Pun intended. Because of the chains binding together Elle and Light and the 24-hour surveillance on Light and Misa, Elle joins the young couple on one of their dates, where Light is annoyed to learn that Elle has become depressed after their names were cleared, because it appears that Kira's power has moved on from them, and this would make it impossible to ever solve the case. Elle has never been defeated before. Light is more optimistic, offering that there are still too many unknowns, but Elle's refusal to snap out of his depression leads to a physical fight between the two, with Light outraged that Elle is seemingly giving up just because he isn't Kira. This is indicative. It's no longer a tennis match, it's become a war of attrition. This fight is only broken up when Matsuda calls to inform them of Misa's getting a new movie role, and they both sympathize over Matsuda being a little slow.
I can hear you, you know.
After much research involving going back to the beginning and analyzing all heart attack deaths, including non-criminals, Light develops a theory that punishing criminals is not actually Kira's main intent, but rather a camouflage for his actual goal, taking out people working at competing companies for monetary gain. It takes a few months to figure it all out, but on October 2nd, 2004, he determines that one multi-purpose company, Yotsuba Group, seems to be benefiting from abnormal deaths in the business world the most. And if his theory is correct, Kira is able to kill in other ways outside of just heart attacks. Everyone does their part to start investigating Yotsuba. For Light, that means hacking into their computer systems. However, he soon gets word from his father that Kira has begun bribing politicians and threatening others, and they've officially been ordered to stop working on the Kira case by the government. As a reminder, the task force is led by Elle, a freelance detective from England who is being funded by many world powers. Watari, the man on the computer screen, also works for Elle. The rest of the task force, Soichiro Yagami, Shuichi Aizawa, Taoda Matsuda, and one other cop, Kanzo Mogi, are all Japanese police officers who were brave enough to volunteer to help. Now, they must choose between keeping their jobs as police officers and continuing to fight Kira alongside Elle. Although Light isn't directly forcing anyone's hand here, it is his actions that caused the world to get to this point. He prides himself on his ability to anticipate the human mind, but that doesn't just include staying a step ahead of the investigation. He's also predicting the reactions of the general public. From their point of view, criminals are dying and crime is going down as a result, making them feel safer. And Kira really is creating a safer world, which is why I can't completely blame anyone who takes Light's side. Maybe sacrificing some fairness and justice in exchange for safety is worth it for a lot of people. I'm not saying that I share that belief, I'm just saying that I can see why the Light versus Elle debate will never truly be settled. This is also the first time that Light is meeting Mogi, who has been kept secret from him up until this point. This allowed Mogi to spy on him when he started dating Misa and several other girls, and ultimately, he's the reason that Light and Misa were almost caught. Part of the genius of Light's plan to give up his position as Kira and work with the task force is to gain more of their trust, learn their secrets, and meet people who may have been kept from him up until this point. Elle had alluded to the possibility of other L's, which we will get to. But for right now, Watari and Mogi are the two others who are actively investigating. So meeting Mogi brings Light one step closer to success, even if Light himself doesn't know that he's Kira at the moment. The ultimatum issued by the government leads to Aizawa, who has a family to worry about and is frankly just fed up with Elle's manipulative ways, to quit the investigation and go back to working with the National Police Agency. 3 days later, Light discovers the death of a major manager at a rival to Yotsuba's banking business, and his dad adds that the deaths of Yotsuba's business rivals seem to happen on weekends, which is contrary to Light's initial patterns, where deaths would be scheduled out randomly throughout the week. This is another example of Light being the best man for the job of Kira. He covers his tracks better than anyone else could have. Giving up the death notes was kind of one of the most un-Kira things that Light could have done, because there was always a chance that whoever inherited the death note would use it for evil. In fact, Light maybe even kind of knows this to be true. When he first found the death note, he wouldn't even dream of using it. It's implied that the default Light would not find it morally acceptable to kill criminals, but it was the power of the death note that coerced him to try it. This is proven by what's happening here in fall 2004. Light no longer remembers the death note, and by default, he has a desire to catch Kira, not help him.
Would I punish evildoers and criminals if I could kill by just seeing a name and face? Is that what I'd do if I had that sort of power? I mean, it's true that there are lots of people around that the world could frankly do without, but I don't think I'd become a murderer just to change the world.
They decide to investigate the entire company, but with over 300,000 employees at Yotsuba, that's a tall order. Elle brings in Iber and Wedi, a conman and a thief respectively, to infiltrate the business. Their suspicions are confirmed when Watari gives word that Yotsuba, using a number of proxies, is trying to hire a detective to uncover Elle's identity. However, Elle is one step ahead. Several of the world's top private detectives are actually just pseudonyms of Elle, just in case something like this were to ever happen.
Elle, Coil, and Deneuve, they're all actually me. It's been my experience that people who try to find me usually fall for this. I'll give you this strawberry if you keep it a secret, okay?
Since Elle believes there's a chance that the Kira power can be passed to another person, he wants to investigate very carefully and quietly, in stark contrast to his previous strategy with Light, where he simply showed up and introduced himself as Elle. However, this plan is completely thrown into jeopardy when they receive a distress signal from Matsuda, coming from inside the Yotsuba building. Operation Save Matsuda commences. The plan involves Misa inviting over the Yotsuba guys for a party, entertaining them with some other models, and ultimately faking Matsuda's death so that nobody bothers trying to kill him. Light contributes by coordinating the plan with Misa. He plays to her motivations by saying, "With your beauty, it should work," which seems to distract her from the possible danger. Light and L also have to play the part of the paramedics, but the plan works, and as an unintended side effect, they narrow the Kira search down to 8 suspects, who Matsuda saw in the board meeting. L's next plan involves contacting the Yotsuba group as his alter ego, Iraldo Coil, agreeing to find L in exchange for $10 million and planting hidden cameras in their boardroom. On Friday, October 15th, they basically reveal everything on camera. That they're connected to Kira, that they want to kill L, that they can kill using methods other than heart attacks, and that they can set the time of death. L plans to confirm that Kira is among them by waiting to see if the people mentioned in the meeting actually died, which Light and his dad vehemently object to. We can see that with or without the influence of the Death Note, Light is horrified at the idea of even a single innocent person dying. Someone proposes contacting Yotsuba, letting them know that they're onto them, and hopefully this will prevent them from doing any more killing for the time being. This, of course, would make it very difficult to obtain any evidence, so Light comes up with another brilliant plan. To carry it out, we see Light temporarily take on the moniker of L. This is the beginning of a theme that we would start to see cropping up more and more. The idea of Light putting himself in a position to become L's successor. Even though he doesn't have memories of being Kira, we can see that gaining power is something that interests him. He calls Reiji Namikawa, Yotsuba's head of marketing, and tells him if he can delay the upcoming execution of Yotsuba's rivals, the board members who are not Kira will be given immunity. Namikawa is able to successfully delay the killings, so Light is praised not only for saving lives, but also for getting Namikawa on their side. Impressed with his work, L brings up the possibility of Light becoming his successor. Once again, like the tennis match, like the deductive reasoning test at the cafe, and like the previous discussion about L going on TV, this is another test by Ryuzaki for Light. Ryuzaki still suspects that he is or was Kira. As usual, Light is the only one to realize that it was a test.
Ryuzaki, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to tell everyone what you're really thinking right now. He thinks that if I am Kira, then there are 2 possibilities. Either I'm just pretending I'm not him and putting on an act, or Kira's power has passed on from me to someone else. He thinks that I would have planned to have it returned to me once I'm safe from suspicion.
To be fair, he's spot on. That's exactly what he planned, even if he himself doesn't know it yet. This leads to another physical fight. I noticed that Light always tries to throw hands, while Ryuzaki prefers to put his legs to work to kick his opponent. It's one of the few times that their differences are highlighted rather than their similarities. Specifically, L's fighting style resembles capoeira, a martial art developed by African slaves in Brazil during the 1500s to help them escape from their masters. They are both still handcuffed to one another, part of L's ongoing surveillance of him, so this could represent Light gaining the upper hand and becoming the master, so to speak. It's also worth noting that Obata claims he never intended it to look like capoeira, but Oba, possibly coming to the same conclusion I just did, liked this idea enough to declare it canon. L develops a plan to have Misa work a modeling gig for Yotsuba to get closer to them, which Light is against because it puts Misa in danger, but is kind of roped into going along with it. Or I guess I should say chained into going along with it. During Misa's interview, Light starts to think about the change in behavior of Kira, concluding that the new Kira is entirely different from the one before he was confined, even mentioning that the original Kira was frighteningly close to his ideals. However, Misa doesn't quite follow the plan as instructed and comes back to the headquarters with a recorded confession from Kyosuke Higuchi, the head of technology development at Yotsuba, something she was able to get from him by suggesting that she would marry him if he were Kira. Light realizes that this could put Misa in danger of being killed and argues that they should capture Higuchi right away, which L doesn't want to do because they haven't figured out how he kills, and L worries that the power will just be passed on to someone else. So L devises a plan to rig Higuchi's cars with cameras and microphones and put him in a situation where he urgently has to kill by making it look like Matsuda, who had been posing as Misa's manager, survived, and is going to reveal Kira's identity on television. Light adds the idea to have Namikawa, the marketing head that they're in touch with, call Higuchi to let him know about the broadcast, and the idea to have Matsuda announce that the other Yotsuba board members were just victims, thereby putting more pressure on Higuchi to act. Light and L both shine here with their ability to predict their opponent's future action, laying out all the steps Higuchi is likely to take after finding out about this broadcast. They plan to set things up so that Higuchi thinks he'll find Matsui's real name in a resume at a production office, which they'll have cameras on to capture him in the act. Of course, it shouldn't actually work because it wouldn't be Matsuda's real name. October 28th, 2004 is the day of reckoning. When Light contacts Namikawa to instruct him to alert Higuchi, he makes a rare mistake. Namikawa acts like he already knows that Higuchi is Kira, but really he's only guessing. But Light accidentally shows his surprise.
What? You know that it's him?
Which pretty much confirms it.
So even the great L can be tricked.
It doesn't really make a difference, but it's interesting to see someone get the better of him, and Light's reaction shows us how much he hates to lose, even if it's something so small. With everything in place to catch Higuchi, Light sits back and watches as his suspect panics exactly as they predicted he would. He grabs his death note and a gun and rushes to the Yoshida production office, but on the way, he starts talking to his Shinigami, Rem. This confuses Light and the other investigators. They can't figure out why Higuchi appears to be talking to himself. Although Light doesn't remember Rem, he is the first to figure out that Higuchi isn't talking to himself, that Rem is another entity. They observe Higuchi as he finds the resume they planted there and writes the names in the death note, but grows frustrated when Matsuda doesn't die on TV. They hear him agree to make the trade with Rem. This is the deal to acquire these Shinigami eyes in exchange for half of his lifespan, and Light starts to wonder if Rem is a divine power that he's speaking to. They see him kill a police officer using his newfound power, and L orders his team to capture Higuchi, who speeds off in his sports car. Light and L decide it's best to leave the control center and follow Higuchi by helicopter along with Watari. Now, I don't usually let my opinion sway my analysis in these videos, but this chase scene is my favorite part of the show. I can't help myself. There's something so much more satisfying about an action scene that is properly built up to with tension and suspense. In the anime, it's been 22.5 episodes of talking and thinking and characters testing each other. The biggest action scene to this point is a tennis match, and finally, with Kira identified and on the run, all of the building tension is released in a high-stakes chase through the heart of Tokyo. The only other chase scene that lives up to this is the one at the end of the 2014 film Nightcrawler, which comes under similar circumstances and coincidentally also features law enforcement and a red sports car. It's the first action sequence in a movie filled with thoughtful conversations and sneaking around. It's a very low-budget chase compared to anything you might find in a big spy film or a superhero movie, but it hits so much harder, because the audience at that point is conditioned to expect drama, not action. For the same reason, I'd take Death Note's chase scene over any fight from Dragon Ball or My Hero Academia. It's the perfect way to end the Yotsuba arc. Anyway, had to get that off my chest, but back to Light. He and L pursue Higuchi from the skies. After searching the Yotsuba security footage for Matsuda's face, he heads to Sakura TV to try to get a look in person, but finds that it's filled with dummies. Investigators try to apprehend him there, but he surprises them with a gun, which is illegal in Japan, and he tries to get away. Interestingly, Light has pretty much no reaction to learning that his dad has been shot. He's laser focused on catching Higuchi. This shows that Light isn't emotional, even for his family, and is more goal-oriented. But he also refuses to use a gun when L offers him one for protection. It's not clear if this is a test by L, but regardless if it is or isn't, it shows Light's stubborn sense of justice and how he takes after his father. Higuchi makes it back to his vehicle and begins to pull away, but Light and L are both surprised when his progress is halted by a total blockade of police cars. They both realize there's only one person who could have been helping them in secret.
The only one who would do this is...
Yes, you must be right.
After apprehending Higuchi, Light, once again posing as L, asks him how he kills, and Higuchi mentions the notebook and reveals its secret. When Light touches the notebook, he has the most intense reaction out of anyone, literally screaming as all of his memories as Kira come flooding back to him. Immediately after this, we see his eyes narrow and his face goes back to looking sinister. His reaction is suspicious, but it doesn't matter.
I've won exactly as planned.
As long as he can kill Higuchi while in possession of the notebook, ownership will transfer back to him. While pretending to verify the names written are the names of the victims, he covertly opens the secret compartment in his watch, pokes himself with the needle, and writes Higuchi's name in his own blood and eats the scrap of paper. The moment Higuchi dies, Light is in possession of the notebook, and ownership transfers back to him. Now he can let go of the book without worrying about losing his memory. As Light expected, the team decides to lock up the notebook. With Light and Misa cleared, the task force pressures L to end the surveillance on them, and they get a little freedom. L assumes that they'll no longer be seeing Misa, but Light claims that he's developed feelings for her after she risks her life for him. This makes L suspicious, but it's necessary for Light to continue using her. Now that he's Kira again, he seems to have no problem manipulating her feelings. He instructs her where to dig up the other notebook so that she'll find his letter instructing her to kill L. By the way, I'm sure he knows that Misa is unlikely to remember L's name, but that's part of why he reversed the chain of ownership before going into captivity. It was by design for Misa to end up being attached to Ryuk, not Ren. Actually, remember earlier when I was raving about how genius and well thought ahead his plan was? I'm just now realizing that it's actually 2 steps ahead of where I thought it was. He probably knew that there was a good chance Misa wouldn't be able to remember L's real name from so long ago. He also knew that once Misa was free, L wasn't going to reveal his face again. With Misa having a notebook, it's only a matter of time before she slips up and comes under suspicion again. That's the way he set things up. Rem will be attached to the notebook that the task force has and be in close proximity to L, putting her in a situation where she has to kill L to save Misa from being suspected again. Doing so would also kill Rem, but Light is a sociopath. He doesn't care. And maybe it'll even allow him to pick up Rem's death note once she's gone, so he has another one in his arsenal. In other words, the main main reason he baited Misa into doing the eye deal again was so that he could use her eyes for other purposes later. We do see in his thoughts that it would have been preferred for Misa to remember Ryuga's real name, but he was always prepared for the possibility of that not happening. So he sets things up so that Misa is the one to write criminals' names. By this point, everyone knows that Higuchi was actually a third Kira, and Kira 1 and 2 still have to be caught. Light obviously knows now that he and Misa were the first two Kiras, so he basically just has to pretend to continue investigating. He still spends all of his time at the task force headquarters though. There are a number of reasons for that from what I can gather, the main one being that Rem is his Shinigami now, so he can't leave without her leaving. That would kind of give things away. His main priority is to kill L, so he has Misa begin killing criminals again, forcing everyone to stay at HQ to investigate. Knowing that L is a brilliant detective, it's only a matter of time before he finds a way to catch Misa. Light knows it and Rem knows it. He's putting Rem in a position where she has to kill L to save Misa. She even realizes that there's no point in her killing Light, because that'll just lead to Misa getting caught even sooner. I know you're probably tired of hearing me gush about Light anticipating the human mind, or in this case, anticipating the mind of a Shinigami, but this is the perfect example of him setting up the pieces and letting them move on their own. And just as he thought, it doesn't take long for the gears to start in L's mind. He creates a plan to test the notebook by having a criminal scheduled for execution in 13 days write the name of another criminal scheduled for execution. But this would play right into Light's hands. Doing so would put Misa under suspicion again, and this is what forces Rem's hand. On the 5th of November, 2004, she kills both Watsuri and L.
Everyone, the Shinigami!
As when he killed Rei Penber and Naomi Misada, he looks down and gives L a smug grin, something only the two of them can see in L's dying moments. Once L passes, he gives a huge emotional outburst, but it's just a performance for the others, giving him an excuse to storm out of the room and find Rem's death note before the rest of the task force. Ryuzaki, Watsuri, Rem, everyone in my way is gone, and the rest of them are confused but trust me completely. From this point on, it'll only be a matter of time before I control the police.
I am the god of the new world.
The end, for some people. Couldn't be me. Light points out that they'll have to keep L's death a secret and act like they're still working under him. He also goads them into nominating him to play the role of L. And with Ryuzaki gone, the rest of the force is so easy to manipulate. Light's cockiness after defeating L eventually causes him to underestimate his opponents, but for now, he would have free reign. And with L's prying eyes finally laid to rest, he would go on an epic purge fitting of a true god of death. Over the course of the next 5 years, Light got more and more comfortable as a world superpower from the seat of his own apartment, which he convinces his dad to rent him for use as the Japanese task force's new headquarters, seeing as how they wouldn't be able to access the headquarters that L had set up without Watsuri to facilitate. Which seems like a massive waste of resources to just abandon a multi-million-dollar facility like that, but the more I think about it, the more that it makes sense. L probably relied on Watsuri to take ownership of the place if anything happened to him, and Watsuri probably left the building to L in his will. If there were a scenario where they both died at the same time, then the rest of the task force would probably be dead too. And L wouldn't want Light to have both the satisfaction of killing him and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate to work out of. So the building should become inaccessible or unusable if L and Watsuri die in tandem. Along with getting his own apartment, Light invites Misa to move in with him and claims this is the beginning of the creation of his new world, that the new enemy will be the public opposition to Kira. He takes them out gradually so as not to raise suspicion. On January 10th, 2005, Mary Kenwood, aka Weddy, dies in a motorcycle accident. On April 7th, Thierry Morello, aka Iber, dies of liver cancer. The anime goes unnecessarily hard by having him die in front of his kid. We don't know how Light got their real names or why he wanted to kill them, but I can speculate. Iber and Weddy were not officially part of the task force, if you'll recall. Iber was a con man and Weddy was a thief. They worked for L as some kind of favor that they had to pay back. They were criminals known by other criminals, but not to the public, because they had never been caught. With the ability to manipulate fellow criminals that may have worked with them, and using the death note with the power of Misa's Shinigami eyes, it wouldn't be that difficult for Light to obtain their names and kill them. Iber and Weddy were also proof of another massive hole in Light's vision for a new world. If he kills all of the criminals announced in the news and police databases, he's not creating a world without crime, he's creating a world without criminals who get caught, leaving the most potent evildoers on the streets. Also, you could argue that dying of a heart attack is a relatively quick way to go that shouldn't be too painful. Light made Iber fight with liver cancer for 3 months. That sounds so horrible, and it might be the most brutal kill in all of Death Note. On April 10th, 2005, the other Yotsuba employees, Ui, Kida, Misa, Shimura, Takahashi, Namikawa, and Mido all die of heart attacks. This was easier than killing Ibra and Weddy, since Light already knew their names and faces. His motivation was probably that even if they didn't know about the notebook, they did know about the rules, and they could be a liability if they spread that information. Also, they might be criminals in his mind, since they were in the meetings where innocent people got killed. There's some debate to be had here, because some of them felt coerced to join the group. I think it's more about creating a clean slate. On May 1st, 2005, L requested that criminals' faces be hidden from the public eye, but he probably felt comfortable doing this because it doesn't matter at this point. Vigilantes post the faces on the internet anyway. At first, I didn't think this was a good idea, because what if people started posting the pictures of people that they just don't like on these sites in order to get them killed? But then I realized that as long as Misa gets the names from official sources, the person won't die unless the name and face match. Unless someone just so happened to share the same name as a criminal. And this could easily happen. If Zachary Morris commits a crime and some hater Googles the name, finds my picture, and posts it on a Kira fan site, I might be kinda screwed. I mean, I'm sure Misa is a fan of horror history, so hopefully she'd recognize that. We stan Misa here on Horror History. We're big Misa fans. Please don't kill me. Death Note was written in the 2000s decade, so it's unlikely that this was supposed to start a conversation about biometric data privacy. But we can start that conversation here in the 2020s. I was actually part of a biometric privacy lawsuit because I lived in Illinois in 2011, where there was a class action lawsuit against Facebook for using facial recognition data in its tag suggestion feature. The law in Illinois says that companies can't collect biometric data without user consent. So I got a nice check, close to $400 in this settlement. In the years since, biometric data has only become more and more ingrained in our everyday lives. Maybe you use a fingerprint or facial recognition technology to access a device, make payments, or even gain entry to a building. Even showing an ID at airport security would technically be considered biometric data recognition. One of the biggest use cases for biometric data that you may not think about on a daily basis is in law enforcement. Police agencies use databases to identify and track criminals, including everything from facial images, fingerprints, DNA, and sometimes dental records and other markers. In our world, where notebooks can only cause death if you get a whole lot of paper cuts, there are still plenty of potential disastrous outcomes for your data getting leaked online. The obvious one is identity theft, someone using your likeness to gain access to your accounts, sensitive information, and banking info. Another potential danger is unauthorized surveillance. Imagine the same technology used to track criminals by law enforcement agencies falls into the hands of stalkers, kidnappers, or even business rivals or paparazzi. I love meeting fans of my channel, so feel free to say hi if you ever see me, but what I don't want is people tracking my every move and whereabouts. There's also concern about misusing biometric data in criminal investigations, which is probably the closest parallel we can draw between the concerns in our world and the concerns in Death Note. The technology we have to identify people by their faces is impressive, but no replacement for the Shinigami eyes. There may be cases where a person is incorrectly identified and wrongly arrested. Everyone has their own lines for what they consider to be acceptable in terms of privacy. Some people just don't like the idea of another person having the ability to look at their face, even if there's no specific bad outcome associated with it. Personally, I find that kinda ridiculous, but then again, I chose the life of a popular internet personality. I'm probably the last person who would take issue with it. But it's obviously still important to take security seriously when it comes to other biometric data, like fingerprints. In the 4-year gap before the continuation of Light's story, he continues to date Misa, lead the Kira investigation as L, and presumably go through college studying to be an actual police agent, which he previously was not. He was only invited to investigate by L. In April 2009, a now 23-year-old Light officially entered the National Police Agency and was assigned to the Intelligence and Information Bureau. As part of his work there, he develops a technology called cell phone sharing that allows multiple cell phones to overhear all calls made to any phone within a group. This calls back to Light's familiarity with technology, putting him a step above the other, older investigators. It started with Light hacking into his dad's police computer undetected. Now he's taught himself to develop mobile software. It's one thing that I really appreciate about Death Note overall. It's firmly set in the 2000s, and like any story centered around spies and detectives, there's some cool tech, but it never feels anything too over the top to exist in that time period. Things go smoothly for him, both as Kira and as Light, and there's even talk about marriage between him and Misa. That summer, Kira divides the world in the court of public opinion. Some countries express their acceptance of Kira, while others remain silent or continue to fight him. And when I say fight him, it's not like there are actual wars going on, because again, the problem is that they don't know who their target is. But it certainly has similar energy to previous world wars. In World War II, you had an evil dictator hungry for power, and many countries took sides. You had the Allies, which included countries like United Kingdom, Soviet Russia, and the US of A. They were opposed by the Axis powers, which even though they were the bad guys in this one, they did kinda have a cooler name. It included countries like Germany, Italy, and Japan. In what I'll call this informational war against Kira, we don't know exactly how each country was aligned, but we do know that officially, Japan has decided to stop fighting Kira, while the US continues to oppose him by creating a new organization called the Special Provision for Kira, or the SPK, in order to hunt him down. And the SPK employs the use of British detective Nate River, who goes by the name Near. Is it a coincidence that the allegiances we know about match those of the previous World War? Maybe, maybe not, given the themes I've already discussed about the tendency for absolute power to corrupt absolutely. From this point forward, Death Note continues to be a detective story, but also kind of becomes a war story. And like previous real-life wars, the war on Kira is an ideological one. It comes to feel like the similarities to other ideological extremists are intentional parallels. Light's story picks back up on October 9th, 2009. During a tea session at the now promoted Deputy Director Yagami's, the task force gets word of the police director, Kenichi Takemura, being kidnapped. The kidnappers are willing to trade the director for the notebook. Light decides to kill Takemura with a death note, but tries to make it look like a suicide. And this is one of his biggest blunders. After not having a real opponent for so long, he may have been a little rusty and not realized that he might be dealing with another intelligent foe. It's been 5 years since he took care of L after all. By killing Takemura, the kidnappers are able to determine that Kira is someone in the task force or the NPA, because they are the only ones who know about the kidnapping. It's a mistake that Light seems to make over and over. He killed Lind L. Taylor, not stopping to consider that the broadcast was only going to be out in Japan. And again, he does this because he doesn't know how smart his opponent is. He also slipped up to Namikawa during the Yotsuba investigation, letting him figure out that Higuchi is the one that they suspect by reacting to his comment on the phone. All three of these slip-ups are examples of Light overreacting when he would have been better off just doing nothing. In any event, Light's focus on the Kira case is renewed, and he's not letting anything distract him. They receive a call from Takemura's phone, and it's the kidnappers, announcing that the director is dead and that they have now kidnapped Sayu as their new bargaining chip. Everyone is panicked after Sayu's kidnapping, but Light is kind of a voice of reason, proposing the idea that Kira killed the director. He creates this idea that Kira is someone who has access to police information. He wants the task force to investigate the kidnapping privately, which again is a perfect solution under pressure by Light. It protects him from being suspected as Kira, and it also gives them a chance to save his sister. The kidnappers call the next night to organize the exchange. Deputy Director Yagami makes plans to take the notebook to LA, where the call is coming from, and potentially make the exchange. There's no time to make a plan, so Light equips his team with the cell phone sharing system and staggers their travel to LA so that they all go separately. He also plans on alerting the United States using the persona of L. However, when he contacts the American FBI, he's shocked to talk to someone who knows one of their secrets.
I'm pleased to meet you at last, L number 2.
This new voice explains that he goes by N, and he's part of the group called the SPK, the Special Provision for Kira, a collective of FBI and CIA members gathered to capture Kira. The SPK's top members are aware of L's death. Light gets a little unnerved because N's demeanor reminds him of the real L. The SPK agrees to help by providing satellite coverage and some standby agents. The next day, Light and Misa head to LA as a couple, thinking it'll be less suspicious because Misa is going to Hollywood for a movie shoot anyway. Before leaving, he makes his dad promise not to die in front of Sayu. At this point, it's unclear if he really cares about his family or if he's just using that as a convenient reason to make sure that his dad doesn't sacrifice his life and lose the notebook. Light oversees things from his temporary command center in LA, where he receives word that Soichiro was intercepted by the terrorists and put on a different flight, which happens to be the flight that Aizawa is on. They track this plane as it deviates from its flight path to drop off a passenger. This puts Light in a tough spot for the first time in several years, and he lashes out at Misa. This is one of the first times we see his emotions get the best of him since Lind L. Taylor, and that was probably one of the biggest mistakes he ever made, so losing his temper is not a good sign for him. He asks the SPK to hold off making any moves with the police and the army. I mean, we've already established that Light has a big ego, but if you think about it, this is a very big ask. Like, there are other people on that plane besides his dad, including probably mostly American citizens, but the Americans still comply with his request. And by doing so, I think he's playing right into their hands. He thinks he's in a dominant position by ordering them around, and he doesn't respect their potential ability to discover him like he respected L's abilities. And because of this, he lets his guard slip and makes some mistakes. For example, Mogi sends him a screenshot of a surveillance camera containing an image of the man who got on the plane with Deputy Director Yagami, and Light uses Misa's Shinigami eyes to quickly identify him and order the SPK to look into the guy. However, his ability to identify the man so quickly comes off as suspicious. Light then receives an email from his father asking to avoid any reports about the hijacked flight in the media. Also, on a completely random side note that I do not have the self-control to overlook, the actor James Caan is sitting in first class on this flight, and he completely freaks out when he realizes that they aren't landing in LA. Anyway, the plane lands in the desert, which Light finds out thanks to satellite image updates from the SPK. He watches as an underground bunker opens up and laments that they won't be able to track via satellite anymore. Light hasn't been under pressure like this in a long time, and it's starting to show. In the past, he's always been the one who is 1 or more steps ahead of his opponent. But now, the tables have turned, and it seems like the kidnappers are the ones with the counter for each of his moves. He even considers killing Sayu to nullify the exchange, but quickly realizes that would narrow down the suspect list to those that know about her kidnapping. He falls for yet another misdirect when they find a helicopter parked in the desert, and Light assumes that this is the kidnapper's getaway vehicle. His plan is to have the SPK follow it and retrieve the notebook. He thinks he's figured out their plan, to drop the notebook out of the helicopter, but again, the criminals are 1 step ahead. A missile emerges from the ground and shoots off, making it impossible to track by radar. They also watch as the helicopter is detonated in mid-air, proving that it really was a distraction and the notebook was actually on the missile. Several hours later, the SPK locates the remains of the missile in the Hudson Bay in Canada, and conclude that the kidnapper's associates have likely already retrieved the notebook from it. Soichiro and Sayu are rescued by the American military, but Soichiro tells Light that he's planning to resign after this, because the shame of giving away the notebook for his own daughter's life is too great. En expresses his disappointment in the new L, and declares that he doesn't want to cooperate with him on the investigation anymore. The original L gave his life and proved to the world that a mass murderer named Kira is lurking somewhere in Japan. He was even able to find out what Kira was using to do those killings. But even though you've taken over L's place, you've done nothing. Not only that, but I think that Kira's public approval has even increased because of you. I can't expect anything worthwhile from you. We'll catch the kidnappers and Kira by ourselves. En boldly assumes that he'll be able to catch Kira, much like Light did when he gave up the notebook. This agitates Light because of his competitive nature. Even though Kira is gaining public approval in the world, his ego is such that he can't stand En thinking that he's a failure. Light thinks to himself that he's going to get the notebook back first and then kill the kidnappers and En. He even catches himself losing his cool and tells himself to calm down, remembering that getting emotional is how L cornered him. While they're still on the call, a series of gunshots ring out, and En eventually informs him that most of the SPK members have just been killed. Light doesn't know how big of an operation the American organization known as the Special Provision for Kira was, but if he's taking En's word for it, it just got cut down by over 50%. Let's take a moment of silence for those brave souls like Elix and Gardner and Ill Rat. I'm sorry, I cannot take the attempts at American names seriously. En thinks there must have been a spy connected to the kidnappers, because the only survivors were those whose true identities were sealed. Light and En fight back and forth on who's to blame for this, but ultimately, Light convinces him that it's in their best interest to share information even if they don't work together, so they can stop the kidnappers as soon as possible. So En shares that he believes the leader is a man named Mello, an orphan from Whammy's house. This is the orphanage founded by Watsuri with the goal of developing a successor to L. There were 2 students at the top of the class, Mello and Nier. 4 years ago, Mello backed down and left the orphanage, while Nier went on to take charge of the SPK. Light concludes that they must both be going after Kira in different ways, and rises to the challenge of finding and defeating them both.
L's successors. It looks like I'm still fighting L after all this time.
Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it kind of feels like Light misses L. We know that L considered him his first friend.
It would be a problem if you were Kira, because I feel you're the first friend that I have ever had.
And it seems like even if Light didn't reciprocate those feelings, he does miss having a worthy opponent to go up against. I've talked about this before in my videos. Those with the drive to succeed will always look for that next challenge. For example, I could probably cut back and just make some average commentary videos and still have the funds to live my life in moderation. But I'm so much more fulfilled when I'm going after a big goal. So 4-hour Light Yagami documentary it is. And for Light, this is part of the problem with the idea of a human taking on the role of a Shinigami. His desire to conquer his opponents is a human trait, and if not Mello and Nier, he's gonna naturally find an enemy. It's rule number 2 in this video. He's competitive, which means he can't just sit by as a neutral judge. When he decides to square off with these 2, we can see his eyes narrow into that sinister expression once more, almost as if this new challenge is lighting a fire under the evil side of him. At some point, he asks Misa to search through archives of photos online, because when she sees the owner of a death note with her Shinigami eyes, his name will be visible, but his lifespan will not. This is the same method Misa used to find Light in the first place. About a week later, on the morning of October 18th, the kidnappers contact Deputy Director Yagami asking for info about the notebook, particularly how Kira is able to kill with a face and no name. Soon after, Nier calls, asking for info on the same question. Light doesn't want to divulge anything to either of them, but he does learn that Mello and Nier were rivals at Whammy's house, and to them, it's a race to see who can catch Kira first. Since Nier is working with the US government to catch Kira, Mello goes with the polar opposite approach, trying to use the world of criminals to solve the case. Remember the spectrum of how much each character is willing to to sacrifice in the name of justice, Nier would fall somewhere around the same spot as L, and Nier is maybe even a little bit less risk-averse than L was. But Mello is way on one end of the spectrum, killing off criminals, innocent law enforcement guys, and even kidnapping an innocent girl in order to catch Kira. This could be because catching Kira isn't what's important to him. He's more interested in beating Nier, but that would be something I'd have to analyze if he ever got his own episode of horror history. So why is it important to my analysis of Light? Because Mello has managed to rattle him and get the better of him more than anyone else has so far. Light thrives because of his deductive reasoning ability, allowing him to predict how his opponents are going to react. L highly suspected that Light was Kira, but Light knew that he had to obtain evidence that could be used in court, so he felt relatively safe. But Mello introduces this element of chaos. He's demonstrated that there's really no telling how far he might go. As the Japanese task force continues to look for Mello, they receive an unexpected call from David Hoop. Who is David Hoop, you ask? Only one of the greatest US presidents ever to grace the Oval Office. Actually, if we're being honest, he's a pretty shit president. He just has a cool name. Like, as far as we know, he does almost nothing to stop Kira, and he allows himself to be manipulated by Mello without much fight. I think I just relate to him because he looks so tired. Anyway, President David Hoop asks for information about how to escape death if your name is in the notebook, making it clear to Light that he's been threatened by Mello. So Light plans on using President David Hoop's trust to his advantage. Rule number 6 in this video is a liar's worst enemy is the one who believes him, and that would ring true for Hoop. Light tells him that he's already discovered the identities of most of the kidnappers, which is a falsity devised to make him look competent in the eyes of the president. He requests a team of 15 agents that he can use to break into the kidnappers' hideout, since sending in Japanese agents would look very suspicious. He asks that this be kept secret from the SPK, and in exchange for that, Light will keep him updated. And the good news keeps rolling in for the younger Yagami. Misa has found a photo of someone with a name but no lifespan, meaning that they've identified the owner of the death note. Light immediately heads out to see her, telling the rest of the task force that he has to go on a date with Misa that he's been postponing. It's a pretty lame excuse and raises some eyebrows, but it works for the time being. But it also shows that Light doesn't respect the intelligence of his fellow officers very much, and this would eventually come back to bite him. Light rewards Misa by feeding her with another corny romantic line. Misa, thank you. Your eyes are my treasures. No, they're treasures of the new world. Oh, Light. However, he then goes back to the office to do more investigating work, proving once again that he only keeps her around to use her. By looking into some criminal databases, he finds that the Death Note owner, Cal Snydar, is likely headquartered in Las Vegas. The next day is October 19th, 2009, which we know because Light would write a name in the Death Note using this date later that day. I also know because all of the dates are documented in Death Note 13, but I didn't realize that when I started making this video, so I did it the hard way using context clues and counting days and making a huge spreadsheet when I didn't have to. Anyway, Light begins this day by speaking to one of President David Hoop's mercenaries. His main objective is to retrieve the notebook, but he asks if he can kill the gangsters if need be, which Light says he can. This seems to shock Aizawa, but Light explains that it's for the greater good, since many lives can be saved by retrieving the notebook. It's a very suspicious take because, for one, it's a complete 180 on his previous stance. When he didn't have his Death Note memories, he was unwilling to sacrifice a single person. And for two, it lines up perfectly with Kira's ideals. Kira is killing criminals for the greater good, and Light is giving this mercenary permission to do the same. But with his dad having resigned, Light is basically in charge at this point, and everyone goes along with his decision. The JTF is not the most confrontational. Light decides the safest course of action is to use the Death Note to have Snydar simply mail the address of their hideout to Misya Amon at their hotel room before eventually dying of a heart attack. If you're wondering who the hell Misya Amon is, remember that the details of death have to be written in the Death Note, and if Light wrote her actual name anywhere in the Death Note, she would still die. But what he writes is close enough that the hotel employees would still understand that it was for her. My first instinct was that I would personally have set up a PO box or virtual address instead of mailing to the hotel room that they're actually staying at, just in case one of the mafia guys finds out what Snydar was doing and follows him, but then I realized his plan is actually safe, because the rules state that if the circumstances written in the Death Note cannot come true, the victim will simply die of a heart attack. Light specifies that Cal will write down the address without bringing attention to himself, so he physically can only write the address if he can do it in secret. The address is mailed to Misya Amon, and she receives it on October 23rd, 2009. 945 Clydown Ave, Los Angeles, California is not a real location, but 945 Clybourne is. So I looked it up on Google Maps, and it's blurred out, which means it must be the Mafia's hideout. I decided to go there undercover to see what I could learn. Alright, so I am here in the area where 945 Clybourne should supposedly be. It seems like it just doesn't exist anymore. Right here you can see 934 and 936. To the right, that's 922, so that's not the right direction. Over here, there's this abandoned building. So this is the Retro Dairy Mart. but if we look at this, the address is actually 4420, which is not even close. So I think that's 4420 Magnolia. This does kind of look like it could be a mafia hideout, though, I'm not gonna lie. In any event, this seems like a nice neighborhood. I'd hate to think that the mafia would take up residence over here. By the way, the name of the hotel that Light, Misa, Aizawa, Matsuda, and Ide are investigating from is the Holy Chateau Hotel. That name is also changed slightly for the same reason that the FBI and SPK agents have irregular names. Oba didn't want people to be disturbed if their names came up, and probably didn't want people staying in that hotel to freak out if they saw the name. However, I, CZsWorld, don't care if people get freaked out. In fact, I encourage it. The name is pretty similar to a real hotel in Hollywood, the Chateau Marmont. The anime uses a different hotel, the Hotel Roosevelt, which is also a real hotel in Hollywood, but they don't bother changing the name at all. Modeled after the famous Chateau Royal d'Amboise, the hotel's tagline is always a safe haven, always open. The safe haven thing is in reference to celebrities wanting to stay here to stay out of the public eye, which happens to make it perfect for secret agents investigating a serial killer. Right now, the rooms at the Chateau Marmont range anywhere from $600 a night to $4,200 a night. And it seems the Japanese task force has at least 2 rooms. One, which is the investigation HQ, and one that Light and Misa are staying in together, which stacks up to a lot of money. Well, gotta do it for the vid. By design, the hotel is a great hiding spot for the JTF because of how secluded it is while still being in the thick of the Sunset Strip. This is Hollywood, and here's the hotel up in the corner at the foot of the hills. But there's room to move around in the hotel. And thanks to these high walls and vegetation, the agents can be outside without fear of being spotted by the mafia members. There's even this atrium where they can be outside and get fresh air without being detected by satellite. The pool is not covered, but I doubt they even had time to go in the pool. I can see why it's a popular romantic getaway for celebrities, making it the perfect spot for Light to continue his manipulation of Misa by telling her he loves her reward for helping him track down Snydar. We're not really sure what Light tells the Japanese task force in regards to how he found the mafia's location, but they monitor the place and realize they've hit the jackpot. On October 27th, 2009, Light gives the order for his new American mercenaries to charge in with protective face coverings. But when they get inside, some invisible force air yeets their helmets off of their faces, and as each one is exposed, they are killed via heart attack. Light realizes there must be another Shinigami who is pulling off the helmets. Light lashes out at his team under the pressure of this dire twist. How could anybody have predicted that a Shinigami would be there? We would have definitely succeeded if this hadn't happened. Once again, it's Mello's unpredictability getting under Light's skin. I would like to note that these are the same kind of twists that he once threw at L on a weekly basis, but L never lost his cool like this. He steps away from the command center and goes back to his own hotel room to talk to Ryuk, or more like he yells at Ryuk. His lack of fear towards the Shinigami cements his view of himself as a Shinigami. Ryuk tells him that the original death note that he dropped at Light's school in 2003 wasn't his to begin with. It was just a notebook that he found in the Shinigami realm and decided to have some fun with. Now, the other Shinigami has come to take it back. This creates additional pressure because Snydar is set to die in 14 days. When the time comes, it'll be obvious to Mello that Kira was behind this invasion. After learning this, Light asks Misa to quit the movie that she's working on and marry him. And once he makes this proposal, she is ecstatic because she still has this unexplainable love towards Light. But the whole thing isn't very romantic, is it? So is it true that she's finally won him over? No, of course not. It's really a protective measure. Since Snydar has the Shinigami eyes, it's likely that whichever mafia member picks up the notebook after him will also get them. If that person sees Misa in a movie, then he'll know that she has a death note, the same way that they figured out that Snydar has a notebook. He'd like to reduce the risk of that happening, so for the millionth time, he's using her love for him to his advantage, forcing her to retire. He also considers just killing her, which would be safer, but he doesn't want to lose her Shinigami eyes, and it would be suspicious if a healthy 25-year-old woman previously suspected of being Kira just died. Light decides if he needs to, he can always have her give up ownership of the notebook for a short while, then regain it and make her do the Shinigami ideal for a third time, meaning her remaining lifespan would only be more or less 12.5% of what it was before she got a death note. He's confident that she will do this because he knows he can manipulate her love to make her do anything for him. I think I have a pretty high tolerance for f***ed up stuff. Like, for example, I enjoy dark humor, but the idea of Misa throwing her life away for him when he's willing to throw her away without hesitation almost makes me feel bad for her. I say almost because the only reason she loves Light is because she's a serial killer as well, and she idealizes Kira's vision. So while Light decides to keep Misa's life intact, the same cannot be said, sadly, for President David Hoop. No! Light stages this one as a suicide, which tricks Mello into thinking that the president was the one to order the attack on their base. He ordered an attack, but it failed. Fearing that he'd now be forced to press the nuke button, he decided to commit suicide. If that's what happened, he sure is a fine president. See? I told you he was one of the greatest presidents of all time. After finding out his notebook originally belonged to a Shinigami named Chateau, Light orders Ryuk to help him as repayment for not telling him that his notebook was stolen in the first place. It's part of a new scheme to get the notebook out of the hands of the Mafia. Long story short, he instructs Misa to use a text-to-speech voice to contact his father, claiming to be Kira. This fictional Kira will be sending his personal notebook to the Japanese task force and says that on November 10th at 11:59 p.m., all known members of the Mafia gang will be killed. That will be their chance to retrieve the other Death Note.
I believed you to be enforcers of justice, and gave my silent consent to you having the notebook, but it has been taken from you.
On November 1st, he gets Ryuk to deliver the notebook to the task force, and as Light predicted, Matsuda is the one to offer to make the Shinigami ideal in exchange for half of his remaining lifespan. However, he's surprised when his father volunteers to take the eyes instead. Soichiro has been struggling to live with the fact that he let the notebook fall into the hands of terrorists in order to save his daughter, so he sees this as a way to repay his debt by using the notebook against them and dying 13 days later. Light's prediction was wrong, which is a rarity. He doesn't seem to have any moral reservations about his father dying. Because of the fake 13-day rule that Light introduced to clear his own name, he'll have to kill his father 13 days later if he writes in the book. So they plan to invade the Mafia hideout on November 10th at 11:59. In preparation, Light relinquishes ownership of his note again, but keeps a page of it touching him at all times under his clothes so that he doesn't lose his memory this time. That way, when Soichiro makes the ideal, he won't see that his son is a Death Note owner. With the pieces in place, Light is ready for round 2 against Mello. During the week leading up to the invasion of the Mafia hideout, Light and the team monitor the place remotely. And when November 10th arrives, Light once again operates from a command center, with everyone else wired up with cameras and protective facial coverings. After getting word that Ryuk has convinced Chateau not to interfere, Light instructs his father to make the ideal. He's having his own dad give up half his lifespan, and he doesn't seem to even get emotional about it. This is certainly the part of the story where rule number 5 about Light's sociopathy is going to come into play the most. As promised by Kira, Soichiro is able to confirm the deaths of many of the mob members at 11:59 p.m., and that's their cue to break inside. By following Light's orders, they capture 2 of the mobsters alive and retrieve the notebook, but Light wants them to press on and find Mello. However, when they arrive at the last room, Mello's got another surprise waiting for him, in the form of explosives rigged inside the building. Mello uses the intercom to warn the task force members that he's capable of blowing up the whole building and that they need to do as he says. Light is once again basically stumped by Mello's unpredictability, stating, "He's unbelievable. Who knows what he'll do next?" Mello orders them to destroy their cameras. At first, Light is upset that he won't be able to get an image of Mello if the cameras are destroyed, but then he realizes what that means. If Mello is ordering them to destroy the cameras, he must not suspect them of having someone with the Shinigami eyes. Mello instructs the one with the notebook to go into the room unarmed and return it, which Light is fine with, thinking that his dad will be able to see Mello's face and finish him. Though, Light is without any visuals at this point, so I'm not sure how he knows that Mello won't have a face covering. I guess he's just assuming that because none of the other mobsters were wearing face coverings inside of their own hideout, and Mello wasn't expecting the attack. It wouldn't make sense for him to be wearing one. Light thinks he's won, but then his dad hesitates. Soichiro, the dutiful police officer that he is, gives Mello the opportunity to surrender before writing his name down in the book. I guess this is what Kelly Meeker meant in Halloween 4 when she had that shirt that said, "Cops do it by the book." Light hears gunshots inside, then, shortly after, the building explodes. When the debris settles, Light gets the first communication from Mogi. Aizawa and Soichiro are unconscious but still alive, but Soichiro has been shot in the neck. Mello and one other thug seem to have gotten away, which Light attributes to Mello setting bombs in every room other than the control room that he was hiding in. Light arranges ambulances for his team and local police reinforcements to search for Mello, but what he's really worried about is the possibility of Mello surviving. The problem is how much Mello knows, especially about the fake rules. Even though his dad is dying, he rushes to the hospital with one goal in mind: to get Soichiro to write Mello's name in the notebook. When Soichiro sees him, it's truly one of the saddest moments in a story that becomes more and more tragic with each chapter.
Light. I still have them. I still have the Shinigami eyes. According to that Shinigami, Ryuk, I can't see the lifespan of someone who owns a notebook, but I can see the numbers above your head. Light, you really aren't Kira. I'm so glad. My son.
Light is in a tough spot because it would be strange for him to ask to write Mello's name when these are essentially their final moments together. But then he has the idea that if he goes into a manic panic, the others would just think that he's cracking under the weight of the emotion of losing his father. So he goes for it. Remember, a person with antisocial personality disorder may lack remorse or regret for their behavior. Because of this, a sociopath can do things that no normal person could do without being affected by any emotional baggage. But still, it takes a special kind of sociopath to pretend to have an emotional outburst in order to try to kill his enemy during his dad's final moments. I love talking about Death Note to anyone who's seen it, and one of the things that comes up a lot is the morality debate. We'll get into this more later, but some people believe that Light was justified in killing criminals because he's overall making the world a fairer place. I've actually talked to a number of people who were on Light's side until this moment beside Soichiro's deathbed. I think some of these comments really say it all. To be honest, I cried in this scene more than L's death. All this time, his father loved his son Light. He wanted to prove that he wasn't Kira. Seeing him die happy because according to his Shinigami eyes proved that Light wasn't Kira. His father is a nice man. The really messed up thing is that Light is willing to literally sell his father's soul to defeat Mello. Think about it, no one who uses the Death Note can go to either heaven or hell. Assuming that Light believes there to be a heaven and hell, that would mean he's willing to deny his father eternal rest just to beat a wannabe L. That's messed up. When I first watched this as a teenager, I thought Light was the good guy, and while egotistical, he was lowering crime across the world. So I thought he was evil, but ultimately for a good reason. But hearing Light's thought process as he tries to manipulate his own father on his deathbed was when I realized how heartless and deceptive he truly was. He sees all life except his own as absolutely worthless and existing for his own benefit. Even L felt a little affectionate toward him, while Light regarded him as nothing more than a boulder in the way of somewhere that he wanted to go. And despite losing what was left of his real-world fans of the anime and manga, his father dies without writing Mello's name.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Dad, wake up! Come on, damn it! Don't you die on me, you idiot! Dad!
Easily one of the coldest things in anime history. Even if it wasn't all acting, the real reason that Light is upset is because Mello got away. His dad, in the end, was just another tool used by Kira. After that unpleasant incident, Light and the rest of the task force return the notebook to its rightful owner, Chateau, who brings it back to the Shinigami realm. Still desperate to overcome his chocoholic challenger, Light asks Mogi to look into every medical facility Mello could have gone to treat his injuries from the explosion. This never turns up any results. Light tries to contact the people at Whammy's house orphanage, hoping he can trick one of them into writing Mello's name, but he's unable to get in contact. Meanwhile, Nier pesters him every day for a week. Once they get back to work, still seemingly working out of LA, he finally talks to Nier, who has some very valid questions. Why did they believe Kira had scheduled the deaths of the known mafia members? And why did Kira ask to get his notebook back? Light neglects to give any information to hide the existence of the Shinigami and the ideal. For a guy named Light, he sure does like to keep people in the dark. The Vice President of the United States, who I believe is set to be sworn in as president any day now, goes on TV to announce that the US will no longer oppose Kira. This is a major goal accomplishment, and Light has to act furious on the outside while actually wanting to celebrate on the inside. It's just another showcase of why people find him creepy, a standard case of incongruent affect. The VP isn't saying Kira is righteous, but he sees Kira as an overall positive, with crime and war being almost entirely wiped out. It appears the decision may also be related to fear of Kira. We've also found that the president's death is connected to his attempts to capture Kira. Light feels that other countries will soon follow suit, and he's closer than ever to achieving his new world. Matsuda even admits that he has a hard time seeing Kira as completely evil. Other countries make similar announcements over the next 3 days. The rest remain silent. Let's just take a second and imagine if the US announced that it would no longer oppose terrorists. Actually, let's not. I don't want to start a political discussion. My point is, it would be freaky though. Aizawa argues that the world might be more peaceful, but it's only because people are afraid of the totalitarian force of Kira. Light is forced to weigh in on the conversation, so rather than lying about his own feelings again, he uses hard data. It's a fact that many anonymous surveys now show a majority of people are pro-Kira. What I'm saying is that Matsuda's idea is not wrong from that standpoint. Kira is a mass murderer, evil. That's true.
I'm sure that on some level, Kira probably knows that what he's doing is evil. But he'll try to change the world even as a martyr, at the cost of his soul. That's his brand of justice. I bet that's what's going through Kira's mind.
I love this speech because it allows Light to speak freely as Kira. He does know what Kira is thinking because he is Kira, and this is one of the few chances he has to sort of speak as Kira to his fellow investigators. A rare glimpse into what Light actually thinks about the morality of what he's doing. He actually knows that he's evil, but thinks his actions will result in a net good. In my Villains Who Were Kinda Right video, I talked a lot about how there are many villains who think that they're carrying out some kind of vigilante justice, and it can often be linked to the trolley problem. If you have one person tied to one side of the track and 5 people to another, do you pull the lever so that the trolley kills the 1 instead of the 5? Most people would, but when you start applying that to real world situations, I guess that is a real world situation, but when you start applying it to other real situations, it can be harder to justify. The Kita problem is almost like the ultimate trolley problem. Innocent lives may be saved in the long run, but who are you to decide who deserves life or death? Light brings up another wrinkle to this as well.
If Kita gets caught, then that makes him evil. But if he wins and rules the world, then I guess he's justice.
It reflects the entire world history that helped shape the phrase, history is written by the victors. Let's use our World War II example here. Even though it's boring and cringe, at the conclusion of World War II, the sequel to World War I, the Allies conducted the Nuremberg trials. You know what, this is boring. Let's do the Harry Potter example instead. After the First Wizarding War, which took place throughout the 1970s and saw the rise of Lord Voldemort, he was defeated by a baby, forcing his followers, the Death Eaters, to go into hiding or obscure their affiliation, as many of them were captured and brought to justice. But had he been victorious, it would have been the Death Eaters prosecuting those that they regarded as inferior. Both parties believed they were in the right, and would have taught future generations that the other was the true evil. And the same is likely to happen in Death Note. If Kita wins, governments will be forced to accept him, and before you know it, history teachers will revere him as a revolutionary who helped take out the evil criminals. We will talk about what the history books actually ended up saying a bit later. The main difference is that Light, unlike Voldemort, will not be defeated by a literal child. Or will he? In the coming days, I assume, other world leaders and media personalities weighed in on the US's decision. The other investigators started to wonder if they'll soon be out of a job, but Light assures them that there are still wealthy people who support L who will probably continue to support them. Unable to find Mello, he has to come up with fake reasons that it's important to keep looking for him, telling them that Mello knows many of their names and could try to take them out. What he's really afraid of, though, is Mello contacting Nier. The freshly inaugurated President Saris soon announces the disbanding of the SPK, causing Light to wonder why they would announce the disbanding of an organization that nobody knew about. This makes him nervous that it's all a part of Nier's plan, which it is. He thinks once Kita reaches a support rating of 70 or 80%, no one will be able to oppose him, including Mello, Nier, or the Japanese task force. But he soon after realizes he already has enough public support to start using that public support to his advantage, and formulates another new plan. Posing as Kita, he contacts President Saris, thanking him for his support, but also telling him that disbanding the SPK was not enough. He also needs to find and disclose their names. He threatens to kill the president if he doesn't comply. Yeah, he's threatening a world leader now because he wasn't compliant enough. See how it just keeps escalating? I could lay down this next rule at basically any time, but I think I'm gonna do it now. I mean, I'm definitely gonna do it now, because if you haven't noticed, these videos are scripted. Rule number 8, absolute power corrupts absolutely. In other words, when one person has power that goes unchecked, it almost always leads to corruption. There always has to be a system of checks and balances in place. For example, in the media, journalists often have editors and fact checkers to ensure that stories are accurate and unbiased. Or at least they used to. I kinda doubt that most publications do that anymore in the age of social media, where everything has to be as polarizing as possible, but that's an entirely different topic. We talked about Light making himself the judge, jury, and executioner. The fact that these roles are usually split up is another example of checks and balances. The executioner can't go around taking out anyone he doesn't like because he's not making the decisions. The jury is kept in check by the judge, who is responsible for making sure that legal proceedings are followed correctly, only admissible evidence is considered, and the law is correctly enforced. I'm intentionally oversimplifying it, but the point is that no person is given absolute power. In our story, the Death Note represents absolute power, and there are several examples where it's suggested that the power is what corrupts Light, as opposed to the idea that Light is inherently evil. For example, Light doesn't agree with Kita's ideals when he doesn't have possession of the notebook, but when it returns to him and the memories start flooding back, he wants to rule the world again. I'm sure people will be hesitant to accept the idea that Light was actually a victim, but Oba comes right out and says it in his interview in Death Note 13. The moment he got his hands on the Death Note, his life was ruined. In many ways, he was a victim. He has good intentions, but he was also very conceited. The classic example of absolute power is Macbeth by William Shakespeare, about a general who receives a prophecy from 3 witches telling him that he's going to be king, and when he becomes king, he murders everyone he sees as a threat to him keeping the throne, and it just gets more and more out of control. Whether he realizes it or not, Light is in the same situation, and he's now threatening the president of the United States. And his power trip continues as he hires Demigawa to be Kita's spokesperson on TV on November 22nd, where he claims that trying to capture Kira is an unforgivable sin, asking the people to turn in anyone who opposes Kira. He's truly going for full totalitarian rule at this point. Demegawa even states that there will be no more due process. I will use my power and staff to do extensive research on them, and ultimately, Kira, God, will do the final research and administer justice upon the sinner. Which is the first time anyone other than Ryuk has likened him to a god, validating his god complex. But despite his growing cult, Light's challengers would not back down, as his innocence would be called into question. On November 23rd, 2009, Nier calls claiming that he captured Mello, but he escaped. However, he did learn a few things, such as the existence of Shinigami and the existence of a fake rule. Nier makes him admit out loud that if there was a fake rule, it would have to be the 13-day rule. If the person using the note fails to consecutively write the names of people to be killed within 13 days of each other, then the user will die. He's forced to ask Ryuk if there's a fake rule, to which Ryuk says no. That response is interesting, but might be more relevant to a Ryuk video. His conversation with Nier resembles the tennis match conversations that he used to have with L. And right now, Nier is on the offensive. In order to win, you have to strike. When Nier poses the question to the task force, could one of them be Kira if the 13-day rule is fake, Light, for the first time, thinks this guy is worse than L. Light tells him that they've decided not to test the 13-day rule out of respect for human life, which honestly is a little ridiculous considering that L and the task force were willing to put a death row inmate on TV pretending to be L in 2004, knowing he very well may die. I mean, I kind of understand the difference. In one scenario, you're putting someone in danger, and in the other, you potentially are the danger. I still think it's a little ridiculous. I posed this question to my community, and 86% of you agreed that it was fine to use a death row inmate to test the rule, seeing as how the person was going to die either way. Someone in the comments even brought up that you could probably even find a death row inmate who would be willing to volunteer. Also, Light was perfectly willing to have his dad write Mello's name in the death note, although he would probably just argue that he was emotional and wasn't thinking straight at the time. However, Nier offers to write Mello's name in the notebook. Light says he needs a minute to talk it over with his team. Matsuda is in favor of letting Nier kill Mello, but Ide, Aizawa, and Mogi are all against it. All of these ridiculous double standards are really just evidence that Light has earned the trust of the task force and is currently reaping the benefits of that. He'd already successfully predicted what they were going to say, which is why he had the team talk it over. Light suspects that Mello is going to contact them too, and right on cue, Mogi gets a call from him. Light and the others listen in as Mello invites him to meet IRL in New York City immediately. Light has already briefed his team on what to do if Mello contacts them, so they're already prepared with a plan to tail him. But instead of exposing himself to Mogi, Mello was actually directing him to the location of Nier and the SPK, with the intention of listening in on their conversation from a safe distance. Mogi is not the type to let any information slip, but Light is still concerned because the other Japanese task force members can hear the conversation, causing them to have to consider the idea that Light could still be guilty if the 13-day rule is fake. Mello pushes the issue further when he claims that he's tested and disproved it. It's decided that Mogi will stay with the SPK for a bit. Light trusts him to stay silent and gather information for their team. 2 days later, Demegawa and his cronies fly into New York on a helicopter and announce the location of the SPK headquarters to the world, prompting an angry mob to attack the building. Obviously, Light was able to issue this order to Demegawa because he's tracking Mogi's location, but having the mob attack makes it look like these Kira supporters aren't connected to him or the JTF. We see the true power of the public's support for Kira like never before. The huge mob is unopposed outside the SPK's building, which does make things a bit obvious for Nier.
Think about it. With all the anti-Kira groups around, why is it we're being targeted and right after I start suspecting you? Pretty convenient if you ask me.
In Light's mind, it probably doesn't matter if Nier knows that he's Kira, because if he's able to kill Nier and Mello, he can kill his own task force, and then he'll be the last person who knows about the notebooks. Unless there are more successors who are receiving information from Nier from another location. I guess we would call that person O, but it's pretty unlikely that someone like that exists, considering Whammy's house seems to have gone dark. But it is possible. Light, after 6 years of this, seems to be getting impatient. However, Nier is able to figure out a way to escape. He distracts the crowd with money, which they emit from an upper floor of the building, and the investigators are able to put on riot gear and blend in with the police who are actually trying to control the riot. By the way, this may seem stupid, but I've actually seen this work before. When I was in high school, I was waiting in line for Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America, and there's this part where the queue crosses under a section of track, and someone had money fly out of their pocket on the ride, and the money came raining down on the people waiting in line, and they pretty much had the exact same reaction reaction as the angry mob in Death Note. I actually have a picture of one of the kids who overreacted the most because I thought his shirt just looked so stupid and his hairdo was just completely insane. I hope that kid invested that money well, and I hope he got a new haircut. After this, Mogi's cell phone is confiscated, so the task force no longer knows where they are and can't track them anymore. To distract his team, Light brings up the idea of questioning Demigawa, since Kira likely made contact with him. This, of course, is just a red herring. Light is working on some secret stuff of his own. He wants to find a Kira worshipper to take over for Misa when he loses her, or is forced to erase her memory again. He has Demigawa collect information about his biggest supporters by offering to bring people onto his show, and decides on a 27-year-old named Teru Mikami. He plans to eventually make Mikami the hand of Kira. He also creates 5 plans on Misa's computer. We never learn what all of them are, but I think it speaks to his thoroughness and desire to be prepared for anything, especially after all the turmoil lately with Melon. That same day, Nier contacts them again and claims that Mogi died of a heart attack. This is one of those situations that L used to like to try to use where he's presenting 2 options, both of which will make Light look more suspicious. If Light knows that Mogi is not dead, then he must have the Shinigami eyes. But if he says nothing and accepts that Mogi is dead, then it looks like Light killed him to shut him up. Nier also provides everyone in the Japanese task force a number to call if they suspect someone in the force of being Kira. Light feels that Aizawa will likely contact Nier, so he asks Misa to execute plan number 3. Write as many criminals as possible over an extended period of time in the notebook, especially those who you must use the Shinigami eyes to kill, and get rid of the computer, communication equipment, and any other object that might be used as evidence, according to my written instructions. Also, place the notebook and envelope B inside a B4 envelope and send it to the address I specify. Then, abandon your ownership of the notebook. It is not long before Mikami receives his instructions from Misa and the spare death notes. So at this point, Ide and Aizawa are still in New York because they tailed Mogi, who is still there with the SBK, while Light and Matsuda are still at the hotel in LA. Ide gives Light a BS story about a witness who spotted Mello, claiming that they're going to stay in New York to investigate. Light sees right through it. It's obviously just to give them more time to meet with Nier and the SBK, but in order to give the impression that he's not Kira, he can't really say anything about it, so he just says okay. It isn't long though before Aizawa returns to the hotel room in LA. It's actually the same day according to the timeline, and reports on what he's been up to. He confirms that Mogi is alive, and he confirms that he's met with Nier, and he can't say with 100% certainty that Light is innocent. So Aizawa, Ide, and Mogi will be keeping an eye on Light until he has 100% certainty. On a future episode of Kira's Kingdom, Demigawa announces that he'll be taking donations to build a chapel dedicated to Kira, which will also be called Kira's Kingdom. It's truly turned into a cult, more so than Light intended even. He thinks about how Demigawa has gone rogue because he's not getting direct orders from Misa anymore after she gave up her death note and memories again. The creation of a chapel to worship Kira is not part of Light's vision, but he can't do anything to Demigawa because he's being watched. Just then, Light sees Demigawa and his associates all die of heart attacks on TV, and he knows that he's made the right choice by hiring Mikami. Mikami's ideals and way of thinking is very similar to his own, so Mikami was able to act on his own. There are many similarities that Mikami has to Light to make this possible. A strong sense of justice, Mikami is a lawyer, Light is a cop, and a black and white view of good versus evil, and being at the top of his class. He even believed that deleting criminals would make the world a better place due to an incident back in school, where the bullies got into a car wreck and he saw a more peaceful life for everyone manifest at that school. Still, Light wants to get in contact with Mikami as soon as possible, because if he goes on too long without contact, the gap in their ideals will become apparent. Kira's influence continues to grow. TV stations compete for the chance to host the next Kira spokesman, and companies cave in and start broadcasting advertisements making it clear that they support Kira. As a YouTuber, my main source of income is obviously related to advertising, and in my 7-year career as a content creator, wow, I'm pretty ancient at this point, I've seen advertisers switch up their rules and standards to fit popular demand so many times. So seeing them support Kira because the general public supports him comes as no surprise to me. They're willing to do whatever out of fear of losing sales. Which means this is yet another example of the people supporting Kira out of fear. There's even a plea broadcasted on Sakura TV that sounds like a corporate apology, and honestly kinda like a YouTuber apology. We intend to learn from this experience and strive even harder to create the truly ideal world that Kira wants. All they really care about is getting Kira's next spokesperson on their network for good ratings. It's during this broadcast that Light notices his new scribe, Mikami, in the crowd, where he gives a statement as a Kira supporter.
I'd like to hear Kira's voice. I want to hear his thoughts once again. We should follow his teachings, exactly as Kira ordered. To me, it's obviously the quickest path to lasting world peace. We need to consider what Kira has taught us, determine what he wants most, and make our own decisions from there.
He's covertly asking Light to give him the next orders, and Light is impressed by his loyalty and his intelligence, so he decides to allow Mikami to choose the next spokesperson. 4 days later, it's announced that one of Light's college girlfriends, Kiyomi Takeda, who is now an anchor on the NHN Channel 6 News, will fill that role. Light realizes this is an unfortunate coincidence. He already had one romantic partner suspected of being involved once before, but despite that, he still recognizes that Mikami made a good choice. He even thinks he may be able to use this coincidence to his advantage, probably because it would be easy enough to prove that she was busy living her own life from 2004 to 2009 and not connected to Light anymore. Also, there's a reverse psychology aspect. Light is aware that he's suspected of being Kira, so if he is Kira, it would be too obvious to pick one of his ex-girlfriends to be the spokesperson. She announces a new set of rules. Kira will not tolerate even the slightest of crimes. Kira will also not tolerate people who harm others, even if their actions are not considered crimes by present laws. The rules are getting stricter as time goes on. With this, Light tells his fellow investigators that he'd like to go back to Japan to continue the investigation there. As Kira, this makes sense so that he can make contact with Takeda and Mikami. But as L, this makes sense because Kira was originally thought to be in Japan, and he now has the opportunity to disclose his past relationship with Takeda under his own terms. He tells the team he could try to reach Kira through her. Ide thinks getting through to her is gonna be tough with the increased attention she's received from being the spokeswoman, but Light still has her cell and believes that she'll definitely agree to meet him if he asks. Just as he did back then, he's using his charm as part of his advantage, a la Patrick Bateman. He tells the task force that when they dated, she was a steadfast Kira worshipper, and thinks that they can use that to their advantage by claiming that the police are on Kira's side and would like to receive orders from him. Even if these orders come through Takeda, it's still an opportunity to get closer to Kira. And so, they head back to Japan, where it all started. There is narratively something very satisfying about this to me. It started small in Light's bedroom in Japan, and then it got bigger and bigger. State-of-the-art task force headquarters, a crazy police chase through Tokyo, a wild kidnapping into the American desert, mafia raids in Los Angeles, riots in New York. And now it's coming back to the island where it all started for the thrilling conclusion. And because I don't have a budget to spend another night in this room, I think it's time that I return to where I started. So I'm gonna pack up and head back to the horror history classroom to cover the final arc of Light's story. Light calls Takeda as soon as they land at Narita Airport. This panel is one of the most sinister faces Light makes in all of Death Note. He plants the idea that things aren't going well with Misa and asks to see her. He hasn't lost his Riz yet. He plans to build a relationship with Takeda so that he can control her. Light tells her it's destiny that they should cross paths again. Ryuk picks up on this. There it is. Light's use of destiny with women. He actually uses the same trick a lot. They plan to meet at a hotel room that night to talk. Meanwhile, Light is impressed at the rate at which Mikami is killing criminals, but doesn't approve of him killing people who committed crimes without evil intent. However, he's willing to live with this because his current priority is being able to control Takeda. However, Takeda announces that people with an ability for good who do not use it will not be tolerated. Light agrees with the sentiment that lazy people who don't contribute do bring down the society, but he feels that it's too early to impose a rule like that. His intended message is starting to slip with other people in charge. If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself, but you can't do everything. This is another area where I can relate in a way. In an attempt to turn Kira into a world governing force, he eventually needs to bring on help. It's kind of like growing a small business. His first hire was Misa, someone who can take over a repetitive task, writing names in the notebook. This allows him to focus on the administrative stuff that requires his attention, like the battles with L, Nier, and Mello, and managing the public perception of Kira. He eventually hires Demigawa to be his spokesperson, but managing his employees turns out to be a big task on its own. But his support is growing, and that allows him to bring on Mikami, someone who can be like a mini Light and make decisions for him. Mikami fires Demigawa and brings on Takeda. Together, they reduce Light's workload, but because they are not Light, their ideals don't match up exactly, and he has to decide how big of a gap from his intended message is acceptable. I've gone through this exact process as a YouTuber. I started by myself in a room, and when I got big enough, my first hire was an editor, someone to take one of my most time-consuming tasks off my plate. All of a sudden, I've got over 1 million subscribers, I'm dealing with a bunch of editors, researchers, designers, because I don't have time to do it all anymore. So it's time to bring on a business operations manager. This is my Mikami, someone who can coordinate all the other people and to do things that I was previously doing, like taking meetings, drafting social posts, and sending tax forms. It frees up time for me to work on creative aspects and the overall strategy and vision for my company. But the hardest part of growing a business, especially a creative one, is that none of the people you bring on are literally you. So there are going to be little things where the work being done is not exactly what you envisioned. But if you want to save time and not waste the money you spent hiring these people, then you have to decide how close is close enough. And that's basically what Light is doing here. And it's something that I'm figuring out out as I go. It was always going to get to the point where Kita was going to need help, which ironically trends back in the direction of there being a judicial system. If Light is not able to make all the decisions for himself, there needs to be a system in place to make sure that justice is being served close to the way he sees fit. That night, Aizawa rigs a hotel room with microphones and cameras so they can watch Takeda's interactions with Light. The conversation they have is very interesting. He greets her by saying he missed her so much, then walks it back, claiming he couldn't help saying it. It's a scene that undeniably gives off a romantic mood. We can see that they have a beautiful view of the Tokyo Tower from this room, and if you look at the actual lighting on Light, it's very contrasty, like something you would see in a romance scene from a movie. Takeda's side is similar, with cinematic eye light and a gleam coming off of her lips. Light has zero doubt in his abilities, thinking it'll only be a matter of time until Takeda falls for him, at which point he'll be able to get in contact with Mikami without the others finding out. But the longer he waits, the more Mikami begins to falter. The next day, my 16th birthday, Takeda announces that anyone with a criminal record will be killed, which Light does not agree with, his line of thought being, Kita exists to prevent people from committing crimes. Killing those who have already paid for their sins will only bring fear to the people. Although Light's plan is mostly sound, there's a glaring problem with it. Light has no problem manipulating women's feelings about him to get what he wants, but this is different because he has to do it in front of the task force. If you'll recall, back in 2004, he specifically told L that he would not use Misa to help them out in the investigation. Even after some prying from L, Light vehemently refused to do this. So this is inconsistent with his previous behavior. Now he's forced to do it in order to get in touch with Mikami as soon as possible. Light's idea to have Takeda ask Kita to give orders to the police and armies of the world is meant to stick out to Mikami, because Takeda has always been neutral before this. That night, he meets Takeda again and hugs her when they see each other. But right at the outset of their meeting, she gets an urgent call from Kita, aka Mikami, aka ex-Kita. He claims he's going to kill a stupid commentator on Sakura TV who is raving about getting Kita back on their network, and it happens 40 seconds later. Takeda tells him that she's in a hotel room with a friend, and based on her comments on the air that night, Mikami gathers that this might be the real Kita and asks to speak with him. Mikami asks if he is God, to which Light replies yes. When asked to prove it, he says,
5 pages on November 26th? I don't get it.
This makes it seem like he doesn't understand what he's being told, but he's actually referencing the date that Mikami received the death note and the instructions. Mikami and Light are the two most intelligent people here, so they're able to understand what the other person is trying to communicate without Takeda or any of the task force spectators knowing what's really going on. The timing of the call was perfect. Luck is on his side once again, just like it has been in the past. You have to think he's starting to believe that there really is a god on his side. Light's move here is also pretty genius. He claims that Kita has asked Takeda's bodyguards to check the room for wires, using this as an excuse to take out the wires and cameras. If Light was really in this situation, he'd logically be fearing for his life and remove the cameras. It doesn't do him any favors in terms of clearing his name in Aizawa's eyes, but there will be plenty of time for that later. It's worth it to finally be able to talk openly with Takeda and Mikami and get them all on the same page. Just like with Misa, Takeda's admiration for Light only grows after finding out that he's Kita. He sweetens the deal by telling her he'll be the god of the new world and she'll be his goddess. From this point, they stop using cameras at the meetings, going sound only so that the wires can easily be hidden if another situation arises. When Light makes it back to the HQ that night, he tells the task force that he learned most of the communication with Kita was through emails sent to one of Takeda's bosses at the network. He suggests that they start by investigating that. On December 9th, Misa announces that she'll be making her comeback to the limelight by performing a concert on New Year's Eve. This is no longer a problem for Light because she no longer has ownership of a death note. During their next call, Light's particular choice of words feels like a direct challenge to Nier. When Nier tells him he's planning to come to Japan, Light responds, "I'm already in Japan doing just that." Did you say I? Yes, I have personally gotten in contact with Takeda and am making headway in the investigation. This is partially Light's competitive nature wanting to rub it in Nier's face that they're closer to Kita than the SPK is, but partially him flaunting how Nier will never be able to catch him. He challenges Light's ego, telling him he looks forward to meeting him face to face in the future. Light determines that Nier will most likely try to win by getting him or Mikami to write in the death note, then arrest them with that as evidence. Light continues the nightly meetings with Takeda. With no video feed, he's able to communicate with her via written notes. I don't think I'd be able to do this. Have you ever been writing and then heard a word out loud and accidentally written it, or vice versa? Light has an incredible amount of brain RAM to be able to carry out one conversation out loud while having a different conversation via written text. But he warns her to suspect anyone who gets close, as they may be a part of the SPK. He also fills her in on his grand plan. Mikami is to send her 5 sheets of the death note, at which point he should stop using the real notebook and make a duplicate. Then use that instead and make it look like he's still bringing justice justice to people. With both Light and Near carrying out their final plans, the mental tennis match between the two gets to an insane level, even while continuing to play their expected roles as L and N respectively. One of Near's agents, Hal Linder, gets hired as a bodyguard for Takeda. Light realizes she must be one of Near's people, but also realizes that it was too obvious. Near wants him to know that Linder is a member of the SPK so that Light will try to use her to get Near's location, like how he used Cal Snydar to get Mello's location. But Light is too smart for this and assumes Hal doesn't know where Near is. Meanwhile, in order to make it look like his continued meetings with Takeda are worthwhile, he claims that he's unable to trace Kira's emails to the NHN, but he thinks he can coax Kira into contacting Takeda again via cell phone and work back from there. At some point, Light decides to have Mikami send even more Death Note pages to Takeda so that she can be the one to write names for an extended period of time. This is one of the only events in the entire timeline that I wasn't able to get an exact date for. However, I'm guessing this was on December 19th, because he initially gave her 5 pages, they're double-sided, and Mikami was said to be filling out 1 page per day. This would also explain why Takeda has extra pages on December 25th when Mikami witnesses a girl being harassed on the train and appears to write the man's name down in the notebook. But this is the replica notebook. Takeda was actually the one doing the killing. I'm guessing it was also around December 19th when at one of the nightly meetings, Light tells Takeda to be most careful about Mello and has her carry a scrap of the Death Note inside of her bra at all times in case of emergency. He also explains what to do in a situation where someone wants to hurt her. For example, if it's Mello, she's supposed to kill him with the Death Note scrap and write a scenario in the instructions so that she ends up with his phone so she can alert Mikami. That way they're covered in a case where she's unable to move for a couple of days. Light tells his mom that he can't come home again for Christmas and tells her to promise Sayu that he'll come home again next year so they can spend some real family time together. This will be their first Christmas without Soichiro, so Light has gone 100% cold at this point. All he cares about is manipulation and lies. During the meeting with Takeda on Christmas night, Light continues to flirt with her, and she tells him about her dinner with Misa. Light is annoyed by the rivalry between the two and the antagonistic nature of jealous women in general. Still, he finds a way to use this to his advantage and explains that he only used Misa because he was forced to, whereas Takeda is someone that he has chosen. This makes Takeda feel special. He continues to not only manipulate her feelings, but he's also playing the task force like a fiddle. As they're listening in, he's sometimes writing exact lines for her to say. By doing so, he creates this scene where he makes it look like Takeda is so in love with him that she'd cooperate in trying to get Kira arrested so that they can be together. The final day of the 2000s would be December 31st, 2009, which would also be the day of the New Year's music show. Misa is going to announce her engagement, but not use Light's name, and Light says he's going to allow her to do whatever she wants. On the show, Takeda announces a TV drama about a real-life samurai which will star Hideki Ryuga. That's not really important to the story, I just found it noteworthy that the real Hideki Ryuga is still around. If you'll recall, that was the pseudonym that L used. Takeda also reports that Misa has not arrived, and the task force is surprised by this, especially since Mogi is acting as Misa's manager and he hasn't said anything. They panic to find the two, and Light eventually calls Near, who explains that he's taken them into custody just to play it safe. He puts Mogi on the phone, and he explains that he's agreed to the confinement, which tells Light that Mogi is on Near's side now. Near straight up tells him that he's gonna end this by pinning solid proof right in front of Kira's face. He has figured out that Light is childish and hates to lose, so he's really leaning into using that against him. On January 3rd, 2010, Light and Takeda discuss Misa's disappearance and the progress of the task force investigation into Kira's emails. He's very good at making it seem like he's advancing the investigation while not actually getting anywhere. But in their secret notes, he tells her to have Mikami confirm that his fake notebook has been tampered with, and to send him a message once she has. The idea here is that once the SPK thinks that they've confiscated the Death Note, they will actually have confiscated the replica created by Mikami. And when that time comes, Mikami can switch back to using the real notebook and take them out. It takes a few weeks, but on January 23rd, Light receives word from Takeda that Mikami has confirmed it. And with this, Light believes he's won and waits for Near to arrange a meeting with him where this long drawn out game will finally come to a close. In fact, we can see how confident he is right here on the 25th when Aizawa comments on how they haven't made any progress in 3 weeks, to which Light thinks to himself, "Say what you want, Aizawa. This game's as good as done. I'll put you all out of your misery very soon." And the reason Light believes it will soon be over is because he thinks Near is waiting 23 days to make sure his agent, Giovanni, isn't being controlled by the notebook. This is because of the 23-day rule. The Death Note can only operate within a 23-day window in the human calendar. Once again, he's spot on with his assumption. Near calls at 11:05 a.m. and invites them to meet in person to show him something. Light asks him why he's okay with showing his face, and Near says that showing it will bring the case to a close. Light is one step ahead of his enemy as usual, so he's already got Nier's plan figured out and plays along with him. Nier outlines that all of the investigators from both sides must attend their meeting, and they're to meet at a location that can't be seen from the outside, a warehouse on Daikoku Wharf known as Yellow Box Warehouse. Remember how I said that Light's story was coming full circle as the investigation moved back to Japan? This meeting brings the story even more in touch with its humble beginnings. We first met Light at Daikoku Private Academy, and now his fate would be decided at a place called Daikoku Wharf. Nier also asks that they bring the death note that they have in their possession so that it's not left unguarded, but somebody apart from L should carry it. Light agrees to all of this with the belief that he knows what Nier's plan is and that he's going to win. The date is set, January 28th at 1 p.m. I hereby proclaim this to be Death Note Day, and have celebrated it every year by consuming some kind of Death Note media ever since I first discovered the series 9 years ago. In the car on the way to meet Takeda that day, Light tells Aizawa that he's nervous about the meeting, and plans to tell Takeda not to make any big announcements for the next 3 days. During the meeting, he doesn't say much, but slips her a note containing the location and time that he's set to meet Nier and the SPK. The next day is January 26th, 2 days away from the meeting. Light sees breaking news that Takeda has been kidnapped and can't get a hold of her. We see him get flustered again, and in the past, there's only been one person who can really get under his skin, Mello. Light and Nier agree to both track them down with everything they have. Before they come face to face, they're going to have to work together to save Takeda. It's a mirror image of Light's final months with L. They had to team up to catch Higuchi, then Light finished off L shortly after. But this time, there's an X factor. Takeda calls him from a restricted number and confirms that she successfully did what Light asked her to do if Mello kidnaps her. She explains that she's in the back of a truck, parked indoors somewhere in the country, then hangs up when the guard gets close. They track the location of the call. It's about 30 minutes away. Light asks Aizawa and Ide to go with him, then mocks their intelligence in his head while boarding the car.
I don't believe this. Aizawa and Ide are just too stupid. They jumped the gun and got in the front seats without even thinking.
This allows him to use the Death Note scrap in his watch without them seeing. He's worried about Nier getting to Takeda and finding her Death Note scraps, which would be bad if he found out that Takeda had access to a notebook. He might realize that she's actually been the one writing names, not Mikami, and then the plan would be ruined. Light believes he doesn't really need her anymore because the meeting with Nier is already set and will be happening in 2 days. And he was planning on getting rid of her after Nier's death anyway, so he just decides to play it safe and kill her off now. He writes Kiyomi Takeda, suicide, January 26, 2010, 2:32 p.m. Burns to death by setting fire to everything around her, including the things that she wrote on. He assumes that he and Mikami are operating on the same wavelength, and it's safe to assume that Mikami would write Takeda's name in the fake notebook once he found out about how she died on the news. With both Mello and Takeda out of the picture, the meeting at Yellow Box Warehouse truly will be the end. And so, the day arrives, January 28th, 2010. In the morning, Light tells his team that he doesn't think Nier will show them anything that will help them solve the case, but they have no choice but to go anyway. That morning, Nier calls to confirm that Misa and Mogi have been released, and Aizawa retrieves the notebook that the task force had locked up. On the way to the warehouse, Light thinks about how this is the beginning of his new world. He's totally confident that he's going to win, as always. The God complex is as pronounced as ever. When Light steps into the warehouse, he sees the SPK members, and Nier is wearing an L mask. Light believes Nier is far inferior to L, and doesn't deserve to wear that mask. It's interesting how they both take on the identity of L. Nier with the mask, and Light has taken L's name. Matsuda is quick to defend Light, saying that it isn't fair because they agreed to meet face to face. His loyalty is a sign of his stupidity, but also a testament to Light's ability to manipulate him. He knows why they're there, yet his instinct is still to stick up for Light. It's one of the most heartbreaking relationships that Light has, right up there with Misa and Soichiro. Light brushes off his concerns, confident that he knows Nier's plan, and Nier will eventually remove the mask. If you're wondering what the real purpose of the mask is, it's to prevent a possible scenario where Light had already scheduled the deaths of all the other investigators. If this were the case, everyone but Light and Nier would drop dead. Then, Light could just pick up the notebook from Aizawa and write Nier's name into it. So, Nier's plan is to wait for 30 minutes to make sure nobody dies before removing the mask. When Nier tells him that his evidence can only be shown after he takes the mask off, he can barely keep himself from laughing, because he knows that Nier's plan is exactly as he thought. After 30 minutes, Nier takes off the mask and explains that they're going to have to wait for one more person to show up. X-Kira, the one Kira is using to write the names. When X-Kira shows up, he will have to open the door, the only way to see into the warehouse. Logically, X-Kira will write all of their names into the notebook other than Kira's, so the person whose name is not written must be Kira. He doesn't tell the Japanese task force that he swapped Mikami's notebook with a fake, so they're all safe from actually dying. But Light already knows what Nier's plan is, so he's not concerned. Sometime after, Mikami arrives, and using the Shinigami eyes, writes down the names of everyone with a lifespan. Light's name has no lifespan attached, so he sees him as God, Kira, and allows him to live. The rest of the task force freaks out when they see this, understandably thinking that they're about to be killed. So Nier fills them in about how the SPK tampered with Kira's notebook and replaced the pages with ordinary paper pages. When Light hears this, he can hardly contain himself. Exactly as planned. He thinks Nier's foolish pride to obtain hard evidence is his downfall. He considers Nier to be far below L, because L would have tested Mikami's notebook. It could have been an evil person. You should have sacrificed a life or two to test it. It's interesting that Light still comes back to this idea of sacrificing lives for the greater good. He assumes that he was able to defeat Nier because Nier was unwilling to do this. After all, the whole reason Nier wants to catch Kira is because he believes that Light's philosophy is wrong. Nier invites Mikami to come inside, and Light, wanting to rub his victory in Nier's face, lets Mikami know that it's okay to come in. And 39 seconds after the names were written, he does just that, smirking and gloating to his opponent.
Well, Nier, looks like I win.
Light just has to celebrate too early. This almost got him caught by Ray Penber and Naomi Misada in the past, and he gloated in a similar way after defeating L. But this time, it finally comes back to bite him. Nobody dies, and Light is bewildered as to why Mikami's death note didn't take effect. To make matters worse, Mikami addresses him directly as God shortly before he's apprehended by the SPK. When Nier picks up Mikami's notebook, Light's name is the only one missing from it. I kind of wonder if it would have been a good idea for Mikami to write Light's name just in case, but just picture somebody else's face. Doing so may have been too risky for Light, in case Mikami accidentally had Light's face pop into his head. It would be hard not to, plus they had no reason to think that their initial plan wouldn't work. So Light resorts to a tactic we've seen once before, although when he freaked out to try to get his dad to write Mello's name down, it was calculated. This freak out seems to be real, because Light fears that he's actually going to be arrested. He claims that the whole thing was a setup, and he doesn't know Mikami, and he dashes away before Mogi can slap the handcuffs on him. But in an empty warehouse, there's nowhere to run. Nier goes on to explain that Light nearly won, and he would have if not for Mello. Nier brings out the real death note and explains that they confiscated it from Mikami, created an exact copy, and returned the fakes to Mikami's possession. This was all made possible 2 days earlier when Mello unexpectedly kidnapped Takeda. Mikami panicked and went to his secret bank vault to write Takeda's name. This is how Giovanni and the SPK learned that the notebook that Mikami had been carrying around was not the real notebook. For the entire Mello and Nier arc, it was Mello's insane spontaneity and unpredictability that had created headaches for Light. And although it ended up getting him killed, it also ended up being the deciding factor that allowed Nier to beat Kira in the end. We can also take this one step further and conclude that the true hero here is Matt. Okay, just kidding. It was Soichiro, who was potentially moments away from killing Mello with the death note, but due to his righteous sense of justice, didn't go through with it, probably hoping that the task force would catch him and give him a proper trial. So in the end, you could say that it was the ideology of Light's dad, which he was consistent with throughout the Kira case, that overcame the ideology of Light, who sought to punish criminals to death without a fair trial. It's also interesting to me that Light wouldn't have gotten caught if he hadn't found such a perfect assistant. Their similar way of thinking is demonstrated early in Mikami's employment, when Light thinks that Demigawa ought to be killed, and Mikami, at about the same time, kills Demigawa. Their minds are so perfectly in sync, so Mikami does exactly what he thinks Kira would have wanted him to do. When the same thing happens with Kiyomi Takeda, neither one realizes that the other had written her name, and Giovanni recognized Mikami's unscheduled trip to the bank vault as unusual, leading to the discovery of the real death note. I made comparisons earlier to Light's similarities to the real concept of totalitarian rule and dictatorships. In finding someone too close to himself, he effectively made his situation more vulnerable. Just like many dictators or business leaders, expanding the operation led to a downfall. Also, in Mikami's real death note, we see probably my favorite name in the entire franchise, Weezri Petra. Though Zerqui Poi and Freddy July are definitely strong contenders. Nier admits that he or Mello would never individually pass L. It could be that I lacked the action and he lacked the calm. And seeing that he's soundly been defeated kind of breaks Light's mind, causing him to scream, much like when he regained his memories. But Light is not the type to go down without a fight, resulting in one of the most iconic supervillain laughs of all time.
That's right. I am Kira.
In fact, this moment is so iconic that there are debates over which language dub voice actor had the best laugh. But Light is not the type to just give up and surrender to the police. Thinking on the spot, he comes up with one more plan and tries to put it into action. He monologues about the changes seen in the world in the 6 years since Kira's appearance, and challenges them to consider if arresting Kira is really the right thing to do. During his rant, we see even more of that god complex delusion that I talked about earlier. He talks about how he had to take the role of Kira, that he was entrusted and chosen to fix this rotten world. We know that not to be the case at all though. Ryuk dropped the notebook into the human world, and it happened to be picked up by the most intelligent, but also the most bored student in Japan. While he refers to himself as the god of the new world, Nier rejects this idea.
No, you're just a murderer, Light Yagami. In the end, you're nothing more than a crazy serial killer. That's all you are.
But this whole discussion, an issue that the reader likely grappled with throughout most of his or her first read-through of Death Note, is just a distraction. Like almost everything Light does, this is rooted in deception. Light is just trying to keep the conversation going long enough to enact his real plan. The emergency scrap of Death Note hidden inside his watch. If he can create enough distance between him and the investigators, he can open the secret compartment and scribble Nier's name into it. He suggests that he might have switched the Death Note from the task force with a fake as well. Aizawa is currently wearing that notebook in a special pouch under his clothes, so testing it would buy him some time. He walks away from the group and opens his watch as his back is turned, but Commander Rester notices him scribbling something down. This time, the hero is Matsuda, who finally makes himself useful by using his sharpshooting accuracy to fire a shot at Light's hand. The meaningfulness of this moment cannot be understated. Matsuda was always considered to be the least intelligent of the group, and Light always had the sense that he was the closest out of any of them to accepting Kira, based on some of the comments that he had made in the past. He's also been the most loyal to Light ever since the time he came under suspicion. Light tries to use this, encouraging him to shoot the others, but we see the scorn of betrayal lash out from him, and he nearly kills Light himself when he tries to finish writing Nier's name using his own blood, only missing his head by a couple of inches. And with that plan foiled, Light's brain kind of starts to break down. First, he begs Mikami to write their names down, causing him to realize that Light is no true god. As his own men start to close in on him, he starts calling out for Misa, who isn't even there and no longer has memories of the Death Notes. When that doesn't work, he starts screaming for Takeda, who is obviously already dead. I did poke around to see if there might be a specific medical condition that Light is going through, causing him to ignore the confines of reality as he begs for help, but I didn't find anything that seemed to apply. It seems that this is most likely just a psychotic break caused by intense psychological distress. Getting caught in a lie like this is the one thing he's been trying to avoid every day for the last 6 years at this point. I can kind of see how having to face it would make him lose his mind. None of this nonsense is of any help to him, but then, as he's trying to scramble away, he comes to Ryuk. In a pathetic final plea, Light finds himself on the ground, begging Ryuk to write their names into his own Death Note. And to the surprise and horror of everyone else in the room, Ryuk agrees to jot down a name into the murderous notebook. As Ryuk proceeds to make an execution with his Death Note, the police react in desperation, unloading a hail of bullets at the Shinigami before them, but they have no effect on him. Once again, Light thinks he's won, but this was just another foolish delusion of grandeur and self-importance. A true god would not need the help of another. This is a fitting place for the end of Light's character arc. He's certainly fallen pretty far from essentially bossing around Ryuk and Rem, and Ryuk even thinking that Light in some ways has surpassed the god of death in the early going. Now, he's completely reliant on a real Shinigami to save his life. If Ryuk were to do this, it would actually be quite on brand for how Light overcame his enemies in the past. That is, that he was not actually the one to kill any of them, at least not the big bosses. It was Rem who killed L, Takeda who killed Mello, and now Ryuk could be the one to kill Nier. But Ryuk isn't writing Nier's name into the note. He's writing Light's, just as he promised 6 years earlier on the day that they met. Ryuk thanks him for easing his boredom for so long, but acknowledges that his run is over, and the once great and powerful Kira spends his last 40 seconds whining about how he doesn't want to die. The last thing we see in the anime is a pan up from Ryuk looking over the city, stopping on the moon. If you'll recall, Light's name is spelled with the kanji for moon, but read as Light, a final nod to the most prolific human ever to pick up the Death Note. 1 year later, Kira's killings have stopped, and the world has mostly returned to normal, although there are some who believe that Kira was merely taking a rest. Nier is the next to take on the role of L. I guess that makes him L3. But although Kira died, the idea of Kira lives on. In my Jigsaw horror history, I talked about how he and Light both share traits of having a god complex, and due to their actions being used as teachings, both garnered sort of a religious following. In the Jigsaw episode, I talked about how he continued to live on as an idea after his death, and here we see a suggestion that this is also what happened with Light. one night, a procession of hooded Kira followers holds a candlelight vigil for their missing leader on a mountaintop. We can see that it includes people of all ages, including children, ensuring that there will be other generations raised under Kira's ideals. There is one other effect that Light's reign had. It wasn't on the human world, but rather on the world of the Shinigami. Since Light supplied Ryuk with apples throughout his run, Ryuk brought some apples back to the Shinigami realm, and the Shinigami King tasted how delicious they are and started handing out notebooks to other Shinigami in exchange for 13 apples. This resulted in more death notes being handed out and other Shinigami trying to drop them into the human world. For some reason, all of the ones that we know about go to Japan. As far as we know, nobody tried to straight up imitate Kira the way that Misa did, but there were people who put their own twist on it. The next such case emerged in February 2013, leading many to believe that Kira was back. And I bring this up because it can teach us more about what Light's legacy looked like in the world of Death Note. This Kira only kills elderly people and those with diseases, theoretically putting them out of their misery and relieving the burden on Japan's broken pension system. I won't get too deep into that here, but I think it's interesting that Nier refuses to call this new killer Kira out of respect for the original Kira. His reasoning is that if L was willing to risk his life to catch Light, then he must have thought highly of him. So he nicknames the new killer Cheap Kira, or C Kira for short. Some Kira supporters on Sakura TV share a belief that Kira is not an actual person or entity, but just a reflection of what people want in their hearts. First killing criminals, now killing elderly people who wish to die. Of course, that's not the case. This was another human with the Death Note. But all it took was Nier calling him out as a murderer to get him to stop and write his own name in the book 3 days later. This shows how Light was right about one thing. He's one of the only people who could do what he did and come as far as he did. Most just wouldn't have the stomach for it. Ryuk even comments that Light was successful due to his emotional strength and conviction. In May 2017, Ryuk gets bored again and tries to find a new successor to Light Yagami, and gives the Death Note to a student named Minoru Tanaka. During their first meeting, we learn that Kira has become immortalized in history textbooks. Tanaka explains that Kira was taught about in his ethics textbook in elementary school and his world history textbooks in middle school. In ethics, they taught us that Kira was evil, and in world history, he was described as being a mass-murdering terrorist, the worst in recent history. This not only gives us a little insight as to what Light's legacy ended up being on planet Earth, but it also tells us that Light was right about another thing. The winner is always the one to write history, which is also true in our own world. Anyway, Tanaka tells Ryuk to come back when he's ready in May 2019, and this new Kira becomes known as A Kira. Really interesting story, but not much more insight about Light Yagami. Maybe I'll do another video on Minoru Tanaka one day. So that is Light's story in the manga Death Note, which is canon. As I mentioned, I've been showing clips from the anime adaptation, which is mostly the same with a few minor differences here and there. The anime has a scene shortly before L's death where L realizes he's going to die, stands out in the rain, and listens to the sound of a bell. He can hear it, but Light cannot. It basically represents a death bell.
I wonder if it's a church, maybe a wedding, or perhaps
Which, by the way, you should subscribe and ring the death bell for notifications so that you too can hear the bell. L asks Light if there's ever been a point where he actually told the truth, and Light is careful not to break character. The scene represents L's admission that it's over. He just wanted to go out with Light knowing that he always knew the truth, and he just couldn't find a way to prove it. After the storm, he dries Light's feet with a towel, which plays into the religious subtext present throughout the series. In this metaphor, L represents Jesus from the Christian Bible. Specifically, the scene represents the Gospel of John, chapter 13, where Jesus washes the feet of his disciples, demonstrating humility and servitude shortly before being betrayed by Judas, which ultimately leads to his death. It's a foreshadowing of Light betraying L by killing him even after their friendship blossomed, sort of, while Light's memories of the Death Note were gone. And it fits right in with the religious symbolism that I pointed out early in this video, which is even more pronounced in the anime. In 2007 and 2008, the anime was condensed into 2 TV movies called Death Note Relight Visions of a God and Death Note Relight 2 L's Successors. Again, this is definitely not canon to the story of the manga. You could say that the Relights aren't canon to the story of the anime either, because there are little plot changes, like Light meeting Ryuzaki in a police facility rather than at Toho University. So in my mind, there are 3 versions of the story so far: the manga canon, the anime canon, and now the Relight canon. The first Relight has a framing device which takes place after Light's death of a new Shinigami appearing in the Shinigami realm, or at least he's new to us. The new Shinigami wants to talk to Ryuk and asks to hear his story in exchange for a Shinigami realm apple, and Ryuk tells him the story of Light Yagami. Some fans believe that this Shinigami is Light reincarnated as a death god, because it's stated that those who use the Death Note cannot go to heaven or hell, and this Shinigami has red eyes, like how Light's eyes are sometimes colored red for artistic effect in the anime. He walks with a limp, kind of like Light after being shot by Matsuda, and the way he tosses an apple to Ryuk is animated similarly to Light's throwing motion. Plus, Ryuk seems to address him as you in reference to Light, as he looks at Light's name in the notebook.
No, Light, you weren't actually a god back then. You were something else.
I do kind of believe that this character is supposed to be Light, however, I'm not a huge fan of it. Even though the Shinigami realm is stated to be extremely boring, it still seems like being banished there would be too much fun, and not a very fitting punishment for Light. I'd rather believe that he just actually went to Mu, the realm of nothingness, as punishment for his many, many crimes. Outside of the anime, there have been other adaptations of Death Note, like the Japanese live-action movies Death Note 2006 and Death Note 2, The Last Name, also from 2006. While these movies do tell a different version of the same story, the differences are much more substantial than the anime or Relight differences, leading to a really different Light character who is more overtly evil. Many of his earliest victims are much less brazenly criminal, like a foreign ministry director who may not have committed any crime but was responsible for a poor policy decision that resulted in the deaths of innocent kids, or a congressman who has been involved in some kind of court case but found not guilty. Because he's taking out suspects of crimes and not just guilty criminals, he seems much more corrupt earlier on. He's also much more bold about using the Death Note in public, even though it clearly says Death Note on it. He does this several times near the beginning, and for this reason, I think he's not quite as smart as the manga version of Light. His sport is basketball instead of tennis, and he's a law student in college when he finds the Death Note. It takes place in early 2006 rather than 2003, so the time setting isn't much different. It seems like the general public is much quicker to accept Kira as their hero, which kind of makes sense because it's a movie. There's just less time to tell the story overall. Light openly supports Kira in this one, whereas in the manga, he pretends to be anti-Kira from the very beginning. However, this Light still puts on an anti-Kira front at times, like for his family. Oh, and he also has an actual girlfriend this time around. Her name is Shiori, and she's anti-Kira. As a side note, when L speaks to the investigation, he employs a number of visual aids.
I know that shape. It looks familiar.
So in this one, Light discovers Naomi Misada's legal name through her engagement to Ray Penber and writes an elaborate cause of death for her into the Death Note, where she holds Shiori at gunpoint in a museum. Light sets things up so that L is watching the security feed as he appears to show up to try to stop her. She ends up killing Shiori before committing suicide. The whole thing was orchestrated by Light in order to further prove his innocence, which he had already done by taking a potato chip and eating it. His plan at the end also gets rid of Naomi Misada before she can prove that he's guilty and provides Light a reason to want to join the task force and catch Kira in order to avenge his girlfriend. I should point out that this probably wouldn't work in the universe of the manga or anime thanks to rule number 10. Whether the cause of the individual's death is either suicide or an accident, if it would lead to the death of more than the intended victim, the person will simply die of a heart attack. This is to ensure that other lives are not impacted. In fact, they double down on this with rule number 26. Even if only one name is written in the Death Note, if the victim's death causes other humans that are not written in it to die, the cause of death will default to a heart attack. The live action film tries to explain this as Light just putting Shiori and Naomi in the same place and letting fate handle the rest. Basically, he only specified that Naomi would be there with a gun and that Shiori would be killed with a gunshot.
Even though I never wrote down that Naomi would shoot her, it all went according to plan.
But in my opinion, it does technically violate the manga's version of the rules. Shiori should have just died of a heart attack, which would cast a lot of suspicion on Light. But at the end of the day, the point is that he killed off his girlfriend in order to get closer to the investigation so that he can kill them.
Didn't you love her at all?
I don't know.
They're trying to make him out to be more of a sociopath. This story point isn't inherently bad, but it ends up being forgotten pretty quickly. Misa is still in the live-action version as well, and she forces herself into a relationship with Light just as she did in the manga. If you think about it, it's very weird how nobody questions the fact that Light almost immediately moves on from his girlfriend, who was killed and he supposedly loved and wanted to avenge in order to date Misa. This version of Light also seems to have the ability to grow facial hair. When he comes out of confinement, which only lasts a little over 2 weeks in the movie, you can see the stubble on his face. That's a good point though. The anime did such a great job of getting down the little details of Light's aging from 17 to 23, but somehow forgot to give him a beard when he was taken into custody. However, other details, like the ability to see the evil intentions in Light's eyes when he's Kira, are lost in the live-action adaptation. Instead of Higuchi getting the notebook when Light gives it up, it goes straight to Kiyomi Takeda, who is a news anchor from the get-go in this version. She never knew Light from school. The method that they use to catch her is a combination of how they plan to catch Higuchi and how Nier planned to catch Light in the manga. They coax her into writing a fake name in the notebook while Matsuda is on TV about to expose her secrets. It's not as exciting, but it is a good way of condensing the story down while still incorporating familiar elements. Movie Light is portrayed as even more evil towards the end. The movie has an amazing twist ending, so if you haven't seen it, I do recommend watching the films before getting it spoiled. L more or less figures out Light's plan to have Rem kill him, so he writes down his own name in the Death Note and schedules his death 23 days out. Once his name is written, the details and timing cannot be changed. changed. So when Rem writes L's real name, it doesn't kill him, he just fakes his death. Light, thinking that he's killed L, plans to write the names of all the other investigators, including his own father, which even Misa finds abhorrent. Only this doesn't work because L and the task force have already replaced Misa's notebook with a fake. So Ichido comes back to the headquarters and tells his son that he's under arrest. So L sacrificed his own life to beat Kira. This doesn't really change anything in terms of Light's character. He still has his mental breakdown at the end, but he gets to have his final confrontation with L, his rival and enemy from the very beginning, rather than Nier, who he never respected the way that he respected L. Many people found it more fitting to have L be the one to defeat him. This is partially because L is such a fan favorite character. In fact, there's an entire subsection of people who refuse to acknowledge anything past L's death in the anime, because they believe that that one decision ruined the rest of the series. I imagine that the majority of those people believe that the movie has the superior ending, but I am not someone that thinks that the series died along with L. Death Note probably wouldn't be my favorite story if I didn't enjoy the Mellow and Nier arc. But which ending do I think is superior? Honestly, it's kind of complicated. When it comes to the debate between which version has the better ending, I think both are perfect endings. Killing L was a great twist for a serialized method of storytelling, such as a manga released in 12 volumes or an anime released over 37 episodes. Because when we move on to the next chapter, it provides a fresh start. It doesn't feel weird for Light to suddenly have new enemies. Remember, the manga was originally published in Shonen Jump and was a bit of an outcast on that magazine, which was usually known for battle manga. Battle manga usually operate with a series of storytelling arcs with new villains to help keep the story fresh. There wasn't much more that could be done with Light versus L in the manga, so it was a perfect time to shock everyone by bringing their battle to a close and introducing new successors. But a movie is structured differently. The purpose of a movie is to tell one strong story. Technically, this is 2 movies, but they came out the same year, so this is obviously more of a part 1, part 2 situation. It would have been jarring to introduce a new antagonist halfway through the second film. And since the manga came out first and made Death Note extremely popular, it was the perfect opportunity to surprise everyone, change the story, and give L the victory that so many fans felt he deserved. And also, Soichiro got to survive. If anyone deserved victory, it was him. But it's still kind of heartbreaking to watch his only son, the boy who he had tried to teach the importance of justice to, die in his arms, because he had failed to grasp his teachings. There's also a musical. It starts in Light's class at school, and he suggests that law and justice are 2 separate things. Justice is subjective, and he longs for his own idea of justice, frustrated by the fact that it'll never be embraced. Light first discovers the notebook at the train station and tries it out immediately, to, as he puts it, pass the time. At first, he feels regret after using the note to kill a gunman in a kindergarten, but then realizes killing criminals would be for the better. At some point, Sayu gets him tickets to see Misa Misa in concert as a graduation present, where he witnesses Misa openly singing about her love for Kira. Afterwards, Sayu praises her big brother for always doing the right thing, unlike Kira, who she sees as a misguided anti-hero. Meanwhile, Misa Misa praises Kira because she sees him as justice. It's an interesting juxtaposition, with Light caught in between these 2 conflicting ideas of justice. This version of Light gets a lot of the information about the investigation from his father directly. This change is probably just because it's easier to convey information on stage via conversation, as details on a laptop would be hard to see. He does still hack into the laptop a little bit later though. When the FBI agents come to Japan, instead of being followed by Ray Penber, he kills one of the others, Haley Bell, who was one of the FBI agents in the manga and anime, but not the one who followed Light. But the effect is pretty much the same. Using the Death Note, he manipulates Agent Bell to write down the names of the other FBI agents. It's another example of a kill that would not work under the rules of the manga or anime. Someone being controlled by the Death Note cannot affect the life or death of other people. But since this is a musical, they needed to explain how Light killed the FBI agents in the simplest way possible. This gets the job done, but it opens up a huge plot hole. If people being controlled by the Death Note can kill other people, Light could have just controlled any of the other investigators working with L, such as his father, to do the same thing. But the scene is actually pretty cool. There's this moment of Light visibly going mad with power as Haley Bell throws himself in front of a train. Also, when Light kills the FBI agents, some of them die by accidents or suicide. This lets the investigation know that he can kill using other methods besides heart attack. In the manga, he holds on to this information until much later. Light never ends up joining the Kira investigation in this version, making it all the more suspicious when he shows up to meet the second Kira in Shinjuku. And he brings his Death Note with him? I guess it makes sense to have have it in case the second Kira becomes a threat, but 1 page would probably suffice. You know, just in case someone decides to search him. Once again, this decision was probably made so they can spend more time singing and less time over-explaining the rules of the Death Note. Misa tells Light that the detective following him is named Kanzo Mogi, and Light uses the note to kill Mogi shortly after. The Japanese live-action adaptation also killed off Mogi. He was the one to die at Sakura TV in place of Ukida. In the anime and manga, Ukita was the first task force member to lose his life. Strangely, Ukita is in the musical and survives. I don't understand why all these adaptations hate Mogi. Like, what did he ever do to deserve this? Later on, during Misa's confinement, Light is much more open with Rem about his plan to let her be the one to kill L in order to save Misa. In the manga and anime, this was more of a plan B in case Misa couldn't remember L's real name after confinement, but the musical doesn't mess around with that prospect. It is true that they absolutely have to cut corners to fit the entire story into a 2.5-hour stage production, but taking away all these little details adds up and makes Light seem like just a little bit less of a super genius. This version seems less about his cunning intellect and more about Light's ideals. Light and L spend more time singing about how far they're willing to go to make their respective vision for the world come true. When it comes to concocting elaborate plans and trying to outwit each other, well, there isn't quite as much of that. There's even a chorus who periodically comes on as the voice of the people to show how the general public is reacting to Kira's rise at various points in the story, and they're generally pretty quick to embrace Kira. Light and L meet alone at the warehouse on Daikoku Wharf, where Light allows L to touch the Death Note and see Ryuk. Then he divulges his plan. He believes L's actions to come to the warehouse have been predetermined because Rem wrote them into her Death Note, so he has nothing to fear by admitting that he's Kira. But he claims he just had to see L's face when he was defeated. Okay, I didn't see that coming. Turns out it was not a fatal gunshot. Light planned it so that L would attack him as part of a scheme to frame L as Kira. He wants to tell police that he discovered L was guilty, then L attacked and Light had to kill the detective in self-defense. The instructions in the Death Note dictate that L ends up shooting himself, which he does. So it seems Light wins this time, but then there's the issue of Ryuk. Because if Light were to become the god of the new world, he'd just be waking up every day and writing names, which is no more exciting than Ryuk's life back in the Shinigami realm, so Ryuk just decides to write Light's name in his Death Note anyways. I honestly always wondered why Ryuk left Light alive during the 5-year time skip in the manga and the anime. Light was in total control over that time span with no real threats, so there couldn't have been much drama for Ryuk to enjoy. So the musical is not my favorite Death Note ending, but it emphasizes the idea that Light could never truly be a god even if he had defeated L, because Light is only human and his judgment, his idea of justice, will never be perfect. He dies begging for his life, just like he did in the manga, which Ryuk even comments on as a very human way to die. It really paints the picture that no amount of flawless planning could have ever created the perfect world that Light envisioned. If he had defeated L, or even if he had defeated Mello and Nier, there was always going to be an expiration date on his life because he is human. In that sense, he's a lot more like a dictator or a conqueror than an actual god. Maybe he could defeat all who opposed him, but then he'd have to select the perfect successors to carry out his work. There have been many evil empires to reign throughout history, but eventually they always fall. So to recap our collection of Lights so far, we have anime manga Light, who is an incredible genius, Japanese live action Light, who is very sharp but a step below his cartoon counterpart, musical Light, who is less about IQ and more about ethics, and the next Light would see his overall intelligence dip again. I'm referring to the 2015 live action TV drama, which ran for 11 episodes on Nippon TV. This adaptation mixes up the formula by giving us a different kind of protagonist. Light is an unambitious college economics student working at a restaurant. He isn't a top student, and he isn't a former tennis champion, but he did play. However, he does eventually have kind of an awakening that displays some of that trademark intelligence. At one point later, L poses the theory that Light has a talented mind, but that didn't blossom until they met. Which is kind of narcissistic to give himself credit for Light's brain, but now that I think about it, I'm kind of the same way. I think creators who hang out with me tend to make better content, but I think that's more about spreading the infectious passion for content creation. Maybe L's passion for solving the case is really what reinvigorated Light. This Light is also a fan of Misa from the get-go. It takes place in 2015 and he's 20 years old. 10 years before the series, his mom was hospitalized and died, and Light has a very angry outburst when his father doesn't come to the hospital right away due to an important case at the police station. This is where Light loses his ambition to join the force one day and becomes sort of a typical student on autopilot through his life. Honestly, he's kind of a loser. More than anything, the strained father-son relationship is what makes this adaptation. Light first decides to try the Death Note when a bully from his high school comes back into his life and terrorizes him and and his friend, but his second use is connected to his father. In the manga, Oto Harada is the guy who took hostages in a nursery school, but this time, Light's dad is taken at gunpoint, and Light decides to kill Oto Harada to save his father. He seems to see the Death Note as a curse more so than the other Lights. He appears to be truly remorseful, even after killing the criminal who was about to kill his dad. After this, he throws the Death Note off a building and contemplates suicide. Unlike manga Light, who is happy to have found the Death Note, this one appears to hate it. The only reason he ends up keeping the notebook is because Ryuk threatens to give it to a horrible criminal if he doesn't. As a result, TV drama Light is more human, more easily rattled. He nearly freaks out when a friend asks to borrow his notebook, he clumsily lashes out at Ryuk in class, and nearly blows a gasket when he discovers L wants to stop him. He doesn't possess any of the traits of a great liar that we saw with the original Light. He also seems to be a lot more mistake prone, whether that's bringing the Death Note out in public or talking about it out loud in the dining room while Sayu is around. There are some unique ways that this Light shines through though, and yes, pun intended. For example, he isn't provided with a full list of rules written in his Death Note. All he can do is experiment on criminals and figure things out on his own. In that sense, he's kind of at a disadvantage compared to his manga counterpart, but he's still able to figure out the basics through experimentation. He also deflects suspicion in a way that manga Light doesn't, by just fitting in a little bit better. He has a real friend group. On the page, Light was a popular guy and was able to organize a group of friends in Aoyama, but this Light actually spends time with his friends regularly like a normal college kid. Both Lights and the Japanese TV audience get a curveball when his plan to kill the FBI agent Ray Penber doesn't work, and Ray survives because that wasn't his real name. He eventually does catch up to Ray, or Mark Dwelton as he's known in this version, using the usual trick with the transceiver, this time in an outdoor restaurant instead of on the train. But Ray pulls out another surprise by not writing his name, then faking his death and catching Light, who is only saved thanks to Misa coming in clutch with her Shinigami eyes, somehow. Actually, just going off the English subtitles, it's never fully explained how she knew where to find it. I was hoping for more clever subversions of familiar events. It would be cool if all the major scenes were present, but they all had an unexpected twist like this. After all, this is the third adaptation in 10 years, so you kinda have to shake things up to keep things interesting. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen too often. Light uses a lot of the same tactics, like the hidden compartment in the drawer. He takes a potato chip, he eats it. Actually, there is an issue with this scene. The idea is that he's not getting information about newly announced criminals during study time, so he can't be Kira. However, his hair covers his ears, so he could be wearing an earpiece or something. The true L would have questioned that. Another difference is that he doesn't try to hide his relationship with Misa at first. The logic is that hiding it would be more suspicious, but it's also suspicious that she would show up in his life right around the time that a second Kira popped up. As per the source material, Light volunteers to confinement to prove his innocence, but most of the Yotsuba investigation takes place while he's still locked up. He does participate eventually by playing the part of Misa's hair and makeup artist during her audition for the Yotsuba commercial, during which time he sneaks off and installs the cameras in the conference room. He's essentially filling the role of Weddy, who is not present in the TV drama. I think this one also does a great job of driving home the point that it was the power of the Death Note that corrupted him. Without the notebook's corruption, he seems like a pretty virtuous guy. When they corner Higuchi, Light pushes L out of the way to save him from being shot. And since he was initially a genuine fan of Misa, there's a point where he really cares for her and worries about her. This all connects back to the relationship he has with his dad. Without the Death Note, he's more or less the man that his father raised him to be, which makes it all the more heartbreaking when the obsession with power derails him into a sociopath willing to eliminate his friends, his girlfriend, and maybe even family in pursuit of his ideal world. Towards the end, he's brought on both Mikami and Misa to help aid him in getting rid of L. L's final play against him takes place in a parking garage, where he accuses Light of being Kira and acts as if he's going to execute him on the spot by writing Light's name. However, as we have seen in many a Death Note IP before, this is only a fake note designed to bait Light into stealing the notebook back and filling in L's name instead. After receiving L's real name in a text from Mikami and writing it in what he thinks is the real Death Note, L has all the proof he needs, and Light seems to be caught and intellectually defeated. Which, at that point, you're at your last resort. I don't get why Light doesn't just try to beat him up right here and break his neck. Or maybe use the watch scrap to kill him. I don't get why he just kinda gives up. Lucky for him, Mikami saves him by writing the name himself, and Light gives the police a mostly true story that L went mad and tried to write his name, causing Light to retaliate and write L's. It's kind of funny that it worked out the way it did with Mikami. In the manga, Light and Mikami writing the same name in their own death notes is what gets them caught. But in this series, doing the exact same thing is actually what saves Light. This time, L has things set up so that Nier immediately becomes his successor instead of Light. From this point on, he has Misa and Mikami both working for him at the same time in order to try to reduce the burden on any one person as much as possible while continuing to assist the police with their investigation. But things would go off the rails when the team is blindsided by a traitor hidden amongst them. The Japanese task force is known as the Kira Countermeasures Office in this adaptation, and it's composed of Soichiro, Aizawa, Matsuda, Mogi, and this newcomer who goes by Shoko Himura. Himura doesn't do anything the whole show until the kidnapping of Sayu, which she's involved in because she's actually the undercover FBI agent Hallie Linder. It's all orchestrated by Mello, who is an alternate personality of Nier. Yeah, if you've never seen the TV drama and this is your first time hearing all this, sorry to dump all that on you at once. But the thing is, it's not as big of a change as it sounds. Ultimately, the fact that Mello is an alternate personality doesn't really change anything as much as you'd think it would. Light, Soichiro, and the rest of the Countermeasures office still trade the notebook for Sayu, which Light is okay with because he's confident that he can obtain Himura's real name. Which he does. He manipulates her to return the notebook in a remote location. With both notebooks back in his control, Light thinks he's won, and this is where he starts his signature maniacal laughter. I guess he reaches critical mass a little earlier than his anime counterparts. And while that Light broke into his crazed cackling as a weird cope when he had been discovered, this one does it as more of a celebration. But it becomes a classic case of celebrating too soon. It turns out his dad had tracked him to this location and seen everything that had transpired. Clearly caught in a lie, Light struggles to explain what just happened, saying that Mello must have set him up by ordering Himura to give him the notebook. But Soichiro has seen enough. And I think this is the most powerful scene the drama has to offer. In an adaptation that's focused on their strained relationship, the chief now has to confront his own son about being Kira, and ask him when he became so comfortable lying to his face. It's not just a confrontation between cop and criminal. More than anything, it's a confrontation between disappointed father and disobedient son. Soichiro claims that he's gonna make good on his earlier promise to give his own life if his son is Kira by writing his own name in the note. This causes Light to beg him not to, which is interesting because letting his dad off himself is the easiest way for Light to get away from the situation with his secret still intact. But some part of him still kind of cares for his father. This is Soichiro's way of making Light feel the weight of what he's done. Light has become desensitized to killing all these people he's never met because he just sees them as criminals. He's even become comfortable killing people that he has met, enemies like L, for example, but when it's someone he cares about, there's an internal struggle. The scene confirms what I've suspected all along, that this Light is more human than all of the others, and it took his father to make him understand the weight of his crimes. Soichiro's final action is to try to burn the Death Note, which he claims is the final favor he'll do for Light as his father. But Light goes crazy and stops him, wearing an insane look on his face when he gets the fatal notebook back into his possession. Whatever last bit of humanity that was left in him seems to be gone now. Given the focus on the father-son relationship throughout this adaptation, it's fitting that Light has that difficult conversation with his dad. It is his failures as a father and Light's failures as a son that directly contributed to Light becoming Kira, and it's an emotional moment when the two have to face those failures. A moment that was avoided in the manga, where Soichiro passed away thinking that his son was innocent, dying happy but ultimately being deceived in his final moments. After getting rid of his father, Light makes up a story prompting police to go after Mello. The victory is only temporary though. Mello sends Light a picture of himself, Misa, and Mikami, claiming he's going to kill all of them, and basically making it clear that he knows that they're all working together. As the original story first established, it all ends at the YB warehouse on Daikoku Wharf, which is the location that Mello is using as a hideout. Police storm the building and shots are fired, and Light notices someone in a special investigation team uniform, which is basically the Japanese version of the SWAT team, splitting off and going upstairs, and he knows that it must be Mello, so he follows him. His suspicions are correct, but Nier reveals that he was only using the alternate personality of Mello as an act to provoke Light. But again, outside of this whole Nier and Mello are the same person business, it's a very similar setup to the manga. I'm not sure how I feel about it honestly, because in the manga, the fact that Nier and Mello were separate people with differing methods to achieve the same goal was the only reason they were able to surpass L and defeat Kira. If Mello hadn't kidnapped Takeda, the SPK never would have found out the notebook that they took from Mikami was fake. But this time, Nier and Mello are the same person, and he still beats Light because honestly it just seems like Light got sloppy at the end, which is less satisfying. There are some cool details in the ending though. As usual, Nier had swapped Mikami's notebook for a fake, which he plans to use to prove Mikami is guilty when he writes in it. And as usual, Light was a step ahead and the confiscated notebook was also fake. He even has Mikami test the real notebook on the day of, which seems to be an added detail to address a common complaint from Death Note fans, that if Mikami had tested the notebook once before going to the warehouse, then he would have won. But in this version, there is one character who never made it to the end before, and that person is Watari. He's still alive, and he had doctored news articles and posted them online design to make Mikami think that he had the real note. Nier has everyone in on his plan this time. The whole SIT team and Kira Countermeasures office come out of hiding to surround Light once he's proven guilty. The chief was in on it too, as was Himura and L, who had a video prepared for Light once Nier had cornered him. There's another fun twist to address previous complaints from fans when Mikami actually makes himself useful by starting a fire. It almost creates enough chaos for Light to escape, but in the end, the death notes are both destroyed in it. This causes Mikami to lose his memory, and so does Misa. I think the theme with this version of Light has been the focus on his relationships and the focus on making him look more human, and we get one more example of the latter at the very end. Instead of begging Ryuk to kill his enemies, Light begs him to make the trade for the Shinigami eyes, something that no other version of Light does, but in the end, he's too late. He ends up becoming a pile of ashes along with the death note. But for the first time, Rem, Watari, and Mikami all survive, and Mogi even survives for the first time since the anime. The immolation of Light in the TV drama would permeate into the real world, as there would not be another character named Light Yagami to appear officially in film or TV, but we still have plenty of more Lights to talk about. Like the Lights from Death Note Kira game from 2007 for the Nintendo DS. Okay, here's what you need to know about Death Note Kira game. It starts inside the task force headquarters during the Kira investigation, where L has them all play a game, the Kira game, to help them better understand the mindset of the real killer. The Kira game is a social deduction game where one person is assigned to be Kira and the other characters all play investigators. Nobody knows who Kira is, so they all have to communicate and vote him out. Sometimes there are also other roles, such as Kira's follower. It's basically like the party game Mafia, where everyone has to determine who the secret Mafia member is. Or Werewolf, where everyone has to determine who the werewolf is. Or Secret Hitler, where everyone has to figure out who the secret Hitler is. Probably the most well-known example would be Among Us. Each round, you play as a different character and different conditions have to be met. The Kira game is not just used to psychoanalyze Kira, it's also used for trivial stuff, like to make determinations about L's eating habits or to settle girl drama between Misa and Takeda. Each episode takes place alongside a real event from the anime, but none of it is canon. There would be a million inconsistencies. Think of it as more of a different universe where Light worked with the investigation from the beginning. This leads to story differences, like Ray Penber, Naomi Misada, and the Yotsuba board members actually meeting the task force and playing the Kira game with them. It doesn't always make sense. But for this reason, Light's personality isn't much different from the original. The only thing that's really different is the perspective of the player. You play as many different characters throughout the story mode, but it starts and ends with you playing as Light. In the manga and anime, I think many people start off rooting for Light because he's the character that we follow, but many will jump ship when he crosses over some moral boundary. But in the game, you're literally playing as Light in the end, and you naturally want to win the game, so it's much harder not to root for Light. There is something weird I have to point out. So there's this part in the original manga and anime where the investigation has tea at the Yagami household. This takes place right after the time jump, so it's October 2009, and Matsuda sees Sayu grown up for the first time and is hitting on her.
Jeez, Sayu, you're all grown up and pretty. Last time I saw you, you were this big.
Matsu, your face is going bright red!
Sayu is 20 years old in that scene, but in the game, it's moved up into the first half of the story because they need more characters to be in one place at a time in order to have enough characters to play the Kira game. So Sayu is 14, and Matsuda still kinda hits on her. It's very weird. I feel like they could've just made her older in the game or left this scene out, but they didn't do that. And Chief Yagami does get pissed at him, but Light doesn't even say anything. Come on, Light, that's your little sister. He's literally just thinking about what he's gonna do about his Misa Amane problem at the time. The game takes us up through the death of Watari and L, and the existence of Mello and Nier is teased before the end credits. And that's because there's a sequel. Death Note Successors to L was released later that year. This one does not have an English version and seems to be more of a rare find, so I can't really tell you much about it, but from what I can understand, the gameplay this time resembles a board game, and the story mode covers the Mello and Nier arc. This wouldn't be the last time Light appeared in video game form though. Jump Force is a 2019 fighting game featuring a roster of combatants from Shueisha's weekly Shonen Jump magazine. Think of it like Super Smash Bros, but with anime characters instead of video game icons. In the story mode of Jump Force, a mysterious energy merges the real world with the world of manga and anime, allowing fictional villains to wreak havoc on reality. The Jump Force is a group of Shonen Jump protagonists who band together to fight back and uncover the truth behind this threat. Light isn't playable in this, but he works with the Jump Force at first, pretending to be an ally while manipulating them, but secretly siding with the antagonists. It's a fitting role for his character, leaning heavily on rule number 6. A liar's worst enemy is the one who believes him. It's also a similar strategy to what he did in Death Note, working for the task force and convincing them that he wanted to catch Kira. There are these powerful artifacts called Umbra's Cubes, and when Light gets his hands on one, he plans to use it to create his perfect world.
僕はいつだって世界のためを思って行動している。今までも、そして これからも。
This technically leaves the possibility open for a sequel, but for now, that's all we've got on Light for the world of video games. So let's shift back to the world of film one more time. With Light and Death Note becoming a cultural phenomenon in Japan and reaching the entire rest of the world with its popularity, it was only a matter of time before the American film industry tried to cash in on it. And now we have come full circle, because the first CZsWorld commentary video that I mentioned way back in the open was my Things You Missed analysis of the trailer for Death Note 2017.
Shall we begin?
Light Yagami has been renamed to Light Turner, an American student living in Seattle, Washington, who does Jock's homework for Monet.
I'm looking at homework here for at least 15 different students.
He gets in trouble for this when a teacher discovers evidence of his side gig after Light is beaten up by a bully. He sees it as an opportunity for the school to suspend the bully, one of the students that makes life miserable for everyone, but they're only focused on punishing him. I don't know how they managed to find all the homework he was completing for other students, but didn't find the Death Note. Maybe they just didn't take it that seriously. Ryuk appears and encourages Light to use the note for the first time. This Light has a different outlook. He's okay with petty crime, like writing other students' papers, but not with major crimes involving violence. He lives alone with his father, but they don't really get along because they don't see eye to eye on justice. Light's mom was killed by a criminal, and his dad was never able to book the man who did it. His dad adheres to due process, while Light just wants to get revenge on his mom's murderer. So with his second use of the Death Note, he avenges his mother by writing down the name of her killer. He's fundamentally different from Light Yagami in that he uses the Death Note for personal reasons right from the beginning. You could say that Light Yagami only started using the Death Note for personal reasons when it was to protect himself, by killing Lind L. Taylor, killing the FBI agents, and killing Naomi Misura. Light Turner is also very careless with the Death Note, bringing it out in public and allowing his crush, cheerleader Mia Sutton, to see it. This is sort of supposed to be Misa, but she ends up being more of her own character. But Light reveals the existence of the Death Note to her on purpose, simply because he wants attention from Mia and the magical notebook is his ticket. In fact, he goes out of his way to prove to her that it's real. Obviously, that's not the smartest move, but what I find interesting is that it's the polar opposite of Light Yagami, who did everything he could to keep the Death Note a secret and was annoyed and distressed when Misa forced her way into the picture. But Mia's character is part of a twist that particularly sets her apart from her Japanese pop idol counterparts. Killing criminals is something that binds Light and Mia together, which is especially dangerous because now they're relying on the note to add fire to their relationship. It's like a Bonnie and Clyde situation, but Bonnie and Clyde's identities are kept secret. I think Light Turner is the obvious result of an American Death Note movie. It's a dumbed-down version of the story for a dumbed-down wider audience. And as a result, the main character is dumbed down too. I find it kind of interesting, as a what-if scenario. Light Yagami is an example of what if the Death Note fell into the most capable hands, someone who's going to stretch it to its limits to reshape the world. But Light Turner is an example of what if the Death Note fell into the hands of a selfish American teenager with book smarts, a dead parent complex, and a touch of loneliness. Light Turner gets a lot of hate from general audiences, but we already have plenty of brilliant iterations of Light at this point, even if each one is a little bit less genius than the last. It would have been kind of boring if they didn't spice it up this time around by making him more vulnerable and more pathetic. In this story, he creates the nickname Kira and has some of his victims leave behind messages in their cells written in Japanese. He's also openly in support of Kira.
What part of terrorists killing each other and criminals turning themselves in bothers you, Dad?
Why exactly are they doing that, son?
They're doing it because of Kira.
Right, and who's that? How does Kira get to decide who lives and dies? Who's guilty and innocent? Is there a complaints department if I don't like one of Kira's decisions?
Between the feeling he had when avenging his mother and the feelings he has now for his new girlfriend, this Light is almost entirely driven by emotions. Light Yagami also had moments of being affected by emotions, but generally does a better job at suppressing these feelings. Part of the reason I labeled him as a sociopath. This version makes the point much more obvious. A true god of death will not be swayed by human emotions. He almost has a realization about why he's in the wrong when he and Mia discover the Justice for the Wicked website, but once again his affection for his GF clouds his vision.
I don't know, how do we know that it's real?
What do you mean?
I mean, like, what if somebody f***ed your girlfriend and you put him on the list because you just want to kill him?
What would you do if some guy
Oh, I'd kill him.
It's another reason that his relationship with Mia is so dangerous. Now, any normal teen dating drama between the two is likely going to affect whether people are killed or spared. Another interesting aspect of this Light is that he's not the one to kill the FBI agents. At first, we're led to believe that this was the work of Ryuk, but later find out that Mia killed them behind Light's back. This makes him, in a way, more sympathetic than his Japanese counterparts, because Light Turner stuck to his initial intentions, only trying to kill criminals. You could actually make a better case for him being in the right. Light Turner never actually kills an innocent person at any point. That was all Mia. You could also make the case that Light Turner is not the American version of Light Yagami. Perhaps Mia Sutton is. She's the one who goes mad with power. She's the one who kills those who oppose Kira, and she tries to usurp control of the Death Note from Light. She's the sociopath who pretends to be in love with Light so she can get control of the notebook. In this version of the lore, you can save one person by burning his or her page before the person dies. So she writes Light's name and promises to save him if he gives up the Death Note to her. I'm not sure why she didn't just dictate that Light transfers ownership of the Death Note in the cause of death, then burn the page. Maybe there's a rule against that? This version of the story has different rules, and we never learn them all.
There's so many rules.
Mia executes her plan when she becomes a safekeeper for the notebook while Light is under heavy suspicion, and she also takes care of other things, like renting this outfit for the homecoming dance, which apparently includes a big ol' Abraham Lincoln top hat. So we can conclude that Japanese Light is not only smarter, but also better dressed. Okay, so the top hat is actually part of Mia's plan to distract L's men who are tailing Light, allowing him to slip out and try to get a checkmate against L. But this doesn't work, and he ends up being chased through the city by L himself. L reaches him and holds him at gunpoint when a civilian comes out into the alley, and this happens.
Don't move! Do not move! This man is Kira. I'm working with law enforcement in order to capture and eliminate.
Turns out this guy was a Kira supporter, happy to do his part to help protect his lord and savior. It's not the first time we've seen the support of Kira's followers come to benefit him, but I like this a lot better than Demigawa leading the waves of rioters to try to capture Nier. There's something about seeing this one-on-one interaction that shows us that regular everyday people can be brainwashed into supporting Kira as well. It's like the evil version of the carefully, he's a hero scene from Spider-Man 2. Both characters have risked their lives with the intention of helping their city, and now the city is protecting them back. Which is kind of fitting, because Death Note reminds me a lot of Spider-Man, in the way that it's become such a classic story that we're just seeing an endless supply of different takes on it. The core elements are always there, but each version presents a unique take. This also would have been a prime opportunity for Light to just kill L with the gun, but he doesn't do that, and I almost wonder if that's not his intention. He still hasn't killed any non-criminals. After this, he tries to convince Mia that they should just stop using the Death Note so they can be together. It appears that he's finally realized that what they're doing is wrong, and this is actually a fitting ending for this version of Light. The original Light was a sociopathic murderer who calmly wrote name after name without feeling remorse. This Light only begins using the notebook in the first place because he's a victim of his emotions. He's like one of the previous Death Note owners that Ryuk tells Light Yagami about in the manga, who writes a few names but then realizes they can't stomach what they've done and gives it up. He's seen what the Death Note is doing to him and Mia, and he wants out. So he sets up a scenario by writing her name, but specifying that she'll only die if she still tries to take the Death Note after asking her to leave their lives as executioners behind. And even after she grabs the book out of his hands, he immediately regrets putting her name down, as seen right here. But the Death Note is absolute. Mia falls to her death and Light's page drifts into the fire, saving his life. He ends up in a coma, but he had manipulated the events so that another criminal finds and returns the Death Note to him before that criminal ultimately commits suicide. This criminal also wrote a few names in to give the impression that criminals were still dying while Light was in the coma.
I made a lot of mistakes, and then I tried to fix them, but it didn't work. I thought it was simple at first. I was just gonna kill all the bad guys and the good guys would win.
Yeah, so he admits what he did to his dad, and L ends up finding a page of the Death Note. So it almost seems as if this is the first version of Light to actually have a redemption arc. Maybe. Like I said, this Light opens up an interesting discussion. He only killed serious criminals, and once he realized it was wrong, he tried to get out. Does that make him more sympathetic for you? Many people who watched the anime were on Light's side until he started killing the good guys. It seems like those people should be Light Turner supporters. I think many people will draw the line in different places in terms of how much they're willing to forgive. Even if you are willing to side with the character who only kills criminals, it's possible that Light Turner's mistakes are unforgivable. In the US, there's a term known as reckless homicide. This is where a perpetrator, aware of the significant risk their actions pose to others, causes a death with reckless or negligent behavior. You could make the argument that Light, allowing Mia to get a hold of the Death Note and kill the innocent FBI agents, would qualify as reckless homicide. Personally, I'm with Light's dad as usual. It's not Kira's job to decide who's guilty and who's innocent. Light is a criminal for the very idea of trying to take the law into his own hands, even if this Light is doing it for different reasons than the original. I think there's also an interesting setup here for what's going to happen next. It seems clear that Light wants to get out of his life of crime, but given that things didn't exactly go according to plan, it's hard to say how this hormonal teenager will react to his girlfriend choosing the book over him. Plus, with L and his father now very aware that he's Kira, he may have no choice but to use the notebook if he wants to survive. This version was originally planned to have 1 or 2 sequels, with confirmation that screenwriter Greg Russo was working on the script as recently as 2021, but it's unclear if that's still the plan. There was a rumor in 2022 about another live-action drama series on Netflix, but it's not clear if this is the sequel to the 2017 movie or something else. According to Deadline, the series will be an entirely new take on the original IP. Several producers of the 2017 movie are also attached to the series. There are some that believe the negative fan reaction to the 2017 film is causing Netflix to want to start fresh with a new series, but that doesn't really make sense. Why would they release a movie, get a negative reaction, start working on a sequel anyway, only to cancel it 5 years later? Clearly, they initially went ahead with the sequel because the 2017 film was popular and the reviews did not sway their decision, so why should they now? I, for one, would like to see Light Turner get a sequel. I personally think the 2017 film is alright. Not great, but definitely not as bad as people make it out to be. Like I said earlier, I think it's a dumbed down American version which offers something a little bit different, which is cool after several pretty faithful adaptations. The strength of this version is that it's different. And Ryuk, they did an incredible job with Ryuk. Now, in the 2017 adaptation, Light's father is a police officer, James Turner, played by an actor named Shea Wiggum. But this is certainly not the first time that the name Wiggum has been associated with a police officer. That honor goes to The Simpsons, an animated sitcom that also has an adaptation of Light as part of the Treehouse of Horror anthology series, aka the Simpsons Halloween specials. Lisa plays the part of Light, a student fed up with humanity's part in pollution and global warming. She discovers the death tome, but the twist is, you cannot kill the same way twice. She's first coerced to try it out when an internet-famous cat is held hostage by Snake. That's when she meets her Shinigami, who is perfectly casted as Mo Sizlak.
I am a Shinigami, a god of death. In my realm, I am called Steve Johnson.
Wait, your name is Steve?
Well, when I was born, eons ago, Steve was a very exotic name.
Instead of using the death tome to kill criminals, she uses it to kill the highest-ranking members of the corporation Globowarm, who are just straight up planning on melting the polar ice caps and submerging Japan underwater. It's an interesting choice to take the environmental protection angle. Each character to possess the death note in the manga had their own way of justifying their use of it. Light sought to make the world a better place by getting rid of criminals, Kira wanted to euthanize elderly people who were in suffering, and Minoru Tanaka actually didn't write any names in the death note, but used it to try to gain immense wealth. I know I added the Simpsons segment in here mostly as a joke, but I would actually argue that of those who actually wrote names in the death note, Lisa's version of Light is probably the most ethical. As I mentioned earlier, it ultimately amounts to a trolley problem situation. Do you kill a few people to ultimately save the lives of many more? The environmental angle is also perfect for The Simpsons, a series that is always vocal about environmental issues as demonstrated in The Simpsons movie, The Birds and the Bees, 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish, and many others. Also, remember how I talked about how all the FBI agents and random criminal names in the manga have really weird names because Oba didn't want to use real people's names? The Simpsons use that for a joke, with the Globowarm employees having names like Sleeve McDickle, Bobson Dugnut, and Carl Dandleton. Lisa has to come up with unique methods of death for each one, including a toilet alligator and a toilet lion, which I think is a reference to this line from the 2017 movie.
Rule 28. Each death must be physically possible, so no shark attacks while someone's on the toilet. As much as I love that idea.
Even though that rule doesn't seem to apply in The Simpsons, Lisa really starts running out of ideas at the end.
And the last guy, I don't know, liquefied in a giant blender.
Already did that.
That was pureed. This is a totally different setting.
When L makes his announcement, Lisa claims she's going to kill him, but she doesn't have time to explain why what she's doing is good and pure. Sure, I'll buy that. L turns out to be El Barto, aka her brother Bart, who figured out that she had a magic notebook by going through her diary, which is kind of similar to what Nier did if you think about it. But Lisa realizes she's being corrupted by the Death Tome's power when she nearly writes her own brother's name into it. Instead, she writes Steve Johnson's name into the book, thinking she'll be free from the curse, only to find herself transformed into a Shinigami. Like Light and all the others who used it, there is no escaping the misfortune that comes with using the Death God's book. Now that we've covered all the stories that Light is in, let me quickly clarify the ones that he's not in, and you'll see why in a second. Another Note, the Los Angeles BB Murder Cases, is a 2006 light novel. And just to be clear, a light novel is not a story with light in it, it's a Japanese term for a shorter novel. In the US, the closest comparison is a novella. The book takes place before Death Note in the anime/manga universe and features Naomi Miseta and L working together to solve a murder case in LA. It has a great twist, I highly recommend it. Let's shift focus back to the Japanese live-action movie universe. Remember how L won at the end of Death Note 2: The Last Name by scheduling his death 23 days out? There's a sequel called L Changed the World where we see what he does with his last 3 weeks of life. In my opinion, this is the worst Death Note thing ever made. It literally features L jumping onto a moving plane like an action hero. There is also a novel version of L Changed the World, which I have not read. Death Note New Generation is a 3-episode miniseries that came out in 2016 and is set in the universe of the 3 Japanese live-action movies. It sees the formation of a new Death Note task force formed by Japanese police to investigate a new wave of killings. It establishes a few characters that would appear in the true sequel, Death Note: Light Up the New World. This is another example where the word light is involved, but light is not actually in it. It's set 10 years after L Changed the World. I've made a number of comparisons between Light and Jigsaw from the Saw franchise, and in the spirit of that analogy, Light Up the New World is the Death Note equivalent of the 2017 film Jigsaw. The killings have begun again, leading people to believe that Kira is back, and a new set of characters set out to solve the mystery. This is another one that I very much recommend. In the Saw franchise, you tend to see a lot of two things: spirals and traps. And the final Death Note I'm going to talk about, ironically, contains both of those things. L, the prologue to Death Note Spiraling Trap 2008 for the Nintendo DS, was a prequel to the 2 DS games and features L solving a crime in the Caribbean with Naomi Miseta. It's Japan only, and I have not played it. So that covers everything Light and everything Death Note, but the video's not over, because Death Note's original creators have another character that I just can't avoid mentioning if I'm talking about every iteration of Light. After finishing Death Note in 2006, author Tsugumi Oba and illustrator Takashi Obata would team up again to write a new manga series, Bakuman, which began in 2009. The series follows 2 middle school students, Takagi and Mashiro, who team up and dedicate their lives to becoming established mangaka. In other words, they wanted to become comic book creators. Bakuman can be categorized as a slice-of-life series with aspects of drama and romance. This is obviously very different from the dark thriller, crime, and horror categorization for Death Note, but the common through line is that both series are masterful with how they handle suspense. Bakuman takes place in the real world, where Death Note is only a manga series, but there are several characters who seem to be spiritual successors to Death Note characters. One author, Eiji Nizuma, who is the main rival of our protagonist, shares a lot of similarities with L. This has led some to believe that Takagi, the calculating, intelligent story writer, is supposed to be similar to Light. However, I see Takagi and Mashiro as inserts for the creators Oba and Obata themselves, but there is a character who, in my opinion, shares profound similarities to Light Yagami. Takagi and Mashiro are asked to judge a competition for new writers, and there's one work that stands out above the rest. It's called Classroom of Truth, and the author is an 18-year-old student named Toru Nanamine. Nanamine is assigned an editor who's excited to work with him, but Nanamine is arrogant and sees himself as being above the editor. His brand of narcissism certainly comes off as familiar. There's supposed to be a healthy relationship between the authors and editors, but Nanamine is not interested in listening to anything his editor has to say, because Nanamine, like Light, is hiding a secret. He gets his ideas from an anonymous internet server of 50 other writers, which gives him a huge advantage when it comes to idea generation, but this practice is frowned upon in the manga industry. If it wasn't already apparent that Nanamine's character design is similar to Light, it will be obvious when you see his shadowed eyes and arrogant smirk. There's also the idea that for both characters, their main tool is a pen, but they both receive help from a computer. Light has a community of followers posting the names and photos of criminals, and Nanamine has a community feeding him manga ideas. Both characters are calculating types who like to be several steps ahead of their opponents. Nanamine posts a manuscript online and pretends he doesn't know this would be a problem for the magazine, but we later find out that he plans to do this to drum up his popularity and get himself a disciplinary meeting with the chief editor, where he successfully ambushed him with a new manuscript. It's not all that different from the quote-unquote mistakes that Light makes in order to try to get closer to L. By slowly growing L's suspicion of him, he put himself in a better position to uncover L's true identity. Nanamine at one point even states that he admires the protagonist because they think out everything ahead of time. But like Light, Nanamine lives a double life. In public, he acts bubbly and chipper, but behind closed doors is a cold, sinister villain with questionable principles. It's very similar to the way that Light pretends to be an energetic young prodigy when working with L, but when he's alone in his room, we see his dark side come out. The only difference, really, is Nanamine doesn't take a potato chip and eat it. Nanamine's method of using a server of voices to generate ideas is seen as morally reprehensible by the other characters. And for a hot minute, Bakuman becomes a battle of ideals between Nanamine and those who know about his method. But he puts on an act around the magazine's editorial department to throw them off and make himself look innocent. Sound familiar? He believes his method of writing is superior in the same way that Light sees his method of justice as superior. And both characters are so cocky that nothing can shake them from their beliefs. Light plans to have others accept his ideals through fear. After years of killing off criminals, the general public becomes afraid of being killed by Kira if they stand in opposition to him. Nanamine also tries to get others to agree with his methods by fear, whether it be threatening his editor that he'll take his talents to a different magazine, threatening his assistant with being fired, or threatening his rivals by saying he'll surpass them and their series will be cancelled. Nanamine's proclamation is that he'll climb to the top of the magazine.
このやり方でジャックのトップに上り詰めてみせます。
I can't help but get the same feeling I had when Light declared his own aspirations.
And I will become the god of this new world.
Their flaws are similar too. Nanamine's first story, Classroom of Truth, is about a survival game where those who tell a lie disappear, kind of like how Light makes those he perceives as criminals disappear. However, Nanamine is, ironically, a serial liar himself, much like how Light Yagami is actually the worst criminal of them all. Outside of Classroom of Truth, Nanamine also publishes a one-shot starring a character that looks like this. Just saying, that can't be an accident. When one of Nanamine's creations is serialized, it fuels a rivalry between him and our central duo, who collectively go by the pen name Ashirogi Muto. Similar to Light's constant mental tennis match with L, each of them tries to predict each other's moves and stay one step ahead of the opponent. If L were in Bakuman, he would probably recognize Nanamine's childish bravado and disdain for losing as traits that he shares with Light. His secret slowly unravels as more people become aware of what he's doing. Ashirogi can literally only combat him in a battle of wits and try to beat his manga in the rankings. He has success at first, but things gradually fall apart for him when people from his server lose faith in him and start dropping out. By the end, his supporters are dropping like flies. The struggle is analogous to the circumstances leading up to Light's downfall. Light thrived when he had the full support of the Japanese task force, but after his father passed away, Aizawa became suspicious of him first and decided to talk to Nier, leading him to switch sides. Mogi just so happened to be there when Nier met with Aizawa, so he secretly began investigating Light as well. Ide trusted Aizawa, so he agreed to help too. If each of them had not helped keep an eye on Light and Misa, Light would have had the privacy to freely contact his allies and likely would have won in the end. The last person to jump ship was Matsuda. Without his heroic work with the gun, Light would have written Nier's name on the scrap of paper, and who knows how things would have turned out if that happened. There are just so many similarities between the two characters. Another example is Nanamine bringing in a secret weapon to help his series get the edge over his rivals. He hires an experienced background artist to be his super assistant, which drastically punches up his artwork. It's also a character we recognize but haven't seen in a while, which makes it one of the best reveals ever. In Light's case, he handed the pen over to Mikami, who was essentially his super assistant. But probably the most notable and iconic parallel between Toru Nanamine and Light Yagami comes during their respective downfalls. As more people drop from the group, Nanamine quickly falls in the rankings and finds himself on the verge of his series being cancelled. After receiving his lowest ranking yet, he completely loses it.
全然ダメじゃん。負けたー。
Nanamine's series is cancelled shortly after, effective January 29th, meaning that its last full day of being active would be January 28th. Light Yagami's date of death was January 28th. There is kind of another Light Yagami cameo in Bakuman. Ashirogi's next series after this is called Reversi, and it's clearly supposed to be an insert for Death Note. Reversi's main character, cz'sworld, is a super intelligent high school student that gains the power of a demon, allowing him to essentially brainwash people, which he uses to try to make the world a better place based on his twisted ideals. It's very on the nose on how it's supposed to represent Light in Death Note. There's also a touch of Lelouch Lamperouche from Code Geass, which Death Note has often been compared to. It's just a little strange because, remember, Death Note already exists in this universe. No No one seems to notice though. I'm so happy that this video gave me an excuse to revisit Bakuman. It's an absolutely inspiring story, and as a content creator, I've never seen anything more relatable. The authors have to submit new chapters every week, and it's always a grind to get them done on time. They have to put their whole entire lives into their craft in order to succeed. I've seen other YouTubers who have reviewed Bakuman draw similar parallels to their own lives. There's this moment at the end of the Nanamine arc where Mashiro goes to a class reunion, and when he arrives, the others admire him and see him as a star. He's taken aback by his fame at first, after spending years drawing at his desk. One former classmate even tells him that her little brother got in trouble at school for imitating one of the childish crimes from Ashirogi's series Perfect Crime Party, a reference to a series of incidents that seem to take place every year or two since Death Note's release, where students around the world are disciplined for possessing replica Death Note books at school. Ironically, many of these cases took place in the United States, where there are other issues regarding safety in schools, but sure, let's focus on banning the magic notebook. Mashiro's former classmates invite him to go on a ski trip, but he's unable to participate with anything because his schedule is totally full with getting his pages done. And by the end, everyone is discussing the trip, and he finds himself alone. When he meets back up with Takagi, he has the realization that they're different than the others, but that's okay, because it made them who they are today. It was time well spent, and they still have goals to achieve. It gave me chills to watch this scene again, especially since I was watching it at 1 a.m. after spending the previous 15 hours working on the most ambitious video I've ever made, a video that you are currently watching. I don't normally give recommendations in these videos, but if you're an artist or creator, or any type of creative really, and you care about what you create, like you really care more than anything, Bakuman is full of these moments. So what is the legacy of Light Yagami in our world? I remember as I was first watching the series, when discussing the morality of Kira with other people who were familiar with it, it almost felt like we were discussing a real issue from our world. There's a lot of nuance here. It was pretty clear to me that Light became a villain because it's not possible for a human to have the impartial judgment of a god. But were his initial intentions honorable? Was L in the right for trying to stop him? Did you root for Light, even knowing that what he's doing is wrong? Personally, I wasn't necessarily rooting for his ideology. I tend to have a pretty forgiving mindset. If you don't give a person room to redeem themselves after doing something wrong, then what's stopping them from continuing to do evil things until they're ultimately identified and killed? You also don't want a world where people are so afraid of breaking the rules that nobody ever challenges them. What if the laws themselves are actually unjust? For example, jaywalking was illegal in my city before 2023, but those who did it anyway helped show that there was a demand for change. Jaywalking safely is a victimless crime, and legalizing jaywalking helps discourage drivers from acting aggressively towards pedestrians out of a false assumption that cars have the right of way. But under Light's rule, jaywalking would eventually become a crime punishable by death, and that's not good. There are also crimes that may be illegal in one country or state, but not in another. How do you decide which of those are the correct version of the law? That being said, there may be a version of Light's ideals that I agree with. Maybe some crimes are so severe that a harder stance would be a good thing. Before you disagree, consider this. Imagine if he had only gone after kidnappers and those armed criminals who take hostages. With enough cameras on the streets, any kidnapper could be identified and killed before any harm comes to the child. Would that be such a terrible world? There are probably issues you could point out about that system, but it's likely that it would drastically cut down on those types of crimes and make the world a better, fairer place. But even if I knew that Light was a villain, probably by the time of the Naomi Misara incident, there's just a part of me that wanted to see him succeed anyway. I know this because every time he almost got caught, I was nervous for him. This could be the result of the charm and charisma stuff that I talked about earlier, or it could just be the effect of the story being told through his point of view. With most any show you watch, you get attached to the character and you want to see that character succeed. There are so many examples of characters that are villains, but because they are the main character, they have legions of adoring fans. Patrick Bateman, Pearl, Walter White, Carrie White, Billy Butcher, Anakin Skywalker, Mort Rainey. They all either get sympathy or their crimes are overlooked. In Light's case, it's probably a combination of being the central character and being incredibly charismatic and likable. There are definitely far less evil characters than Light who I don't like as much, and who I didn't root for in their respective stories. Hell, there are some good characters who I don't like just because I find them annoying. I think there's also an argument to be made for Light fitting into the archetype of literally me characters, a categorization on social media of characters with a burning discontent for society who many viewers self-identify with, hence the name. While I was making this video, a commentator that I watch named Anna Isabel did a section in her new video on these characters, and I found myself applying basically every trait she talked about to Light. Not just because I was in the midst of making this video, but also because she threw in a clip of Light.
Machiavellianism and skewed philosophies are also common traits written into these characters, helping them justify their often morally dubious means of taking action or enacting change, which could involve being an asshole at best and, The odd murder at worst. And don't get me wrong, these things are what make them compelling. The fact that they're not your squeaky clean saviors adds layers of complexity to the stories they tell. Sometimes they're even just a straight up villain in the grand scheme of things, but it's fascinating to watch how they grapple with their morality, or lack of one.
She also talks about how they're often portrayed by conventionally attractive actors, often becoming icons for their charm rather than cautionary tales of the ideas that they represent. It seems many of these pages could apply to other characters in this genre. Maybe another factor in this equation is the audience sympathizing with Ryuk. Ryuk thought that Light was super interesting and simply stuck around with him for entertainment. I loved watching Death Note, so I didn't want to see the series end, and so some part of me still rooted for Light. I looked at a series of internet threads about Death Note from over the years since it ended. I was curious at what point people stopped rooting for him, if at all. I was expecting to see less support as we got closer to the present, seeing as how we now live in the overly political cancel culture world, where some people basically do wish death, or at least eternal suffering, on anyone who doesn't agree with their views. But I was surprised to find that the debate over Light still seems to be alive and well in the present. The divide in public opinion on if vigilante justice against criminals is a good thing or not seems to be kind of a timeless question. Also, while making this video, there was a story about a prisoner in the clink for a high-profile murder who was stabbed many times by another inmate, which sparked a debate over whether this was a good thing or not. I guess it's just one of those social issues that will always have two sides to it. After everything I've said in this video, I think it's obvious that I'm not on Team Light. But this may come as a shock, but I don't necessarily think that makes Light evil, because there seems to be a ton of proof that by default, Light Yagami opposes Kira. The true evil here is the notebook. Light probably would have lived his entire life as a good person if he had never discovered the notebook. When he loses his memory of it, he immediately reverts to being a good person. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
What is truly evil is the power to kill people, and any person who has come to possess this kind of power is cursed.
And just as Light is not inherently a bad person, L isn't exactly a perfect saint. There were a number of unethical things that he was willing to do in order to catch Kira, many of which he would have done if Soichiro hadn't stopped him. All he really cared about was solving the case. He literally held Misa against her will. Then, in an effort to disprove the 13-day rule, he was even willing to use the Death Note to kill criminals, the very thing he was investigating Light for allegedly doing. So for all the reasons that I've outlined in this video, I don't think the great debate between Team Light and Team L will ever truly reach a consensus. As I've established, having the Death Note is a curse, so in order to make sure that I don't follow in Light's footsteps, or for that matter, Nanamine's footsteps, and go down a YouTube career filled with evil, I'm gonna be burning each of these rules. But before I do, there's one more rule I'd like to introduce. Rule number 9, always unrelenting. While I may not personally consider Light as literally me, this is one trait I can certainly get behind. In fact, if I were to make a new lineup of characters under this archetype, they would be a lot of my favorite characters in all of fiction. Andrew from Whiplash, John McClane from Die Hard, Moritaka Mashiro from Bakuman, Jim Hopper from Stranger Things. The best part about Light's unrelenting passion is that you can appreciate it no matter which side you're on. When he's Kira, he has an unstoppable drive to become the god of his new world. And when his Kira memories are forgotten, he uses that same determination to solve the case no matter the odds. Even in confinement, he somehow finds the willpower to carry on. It's actually insane that he was able to survive 53 days. In a Vsauce series called Mindfield, the host, Michael Stevens, tried confining himself in an isolation chamber and barely lasted 3 days without losing his mind.
Psychologists say that fewer than 3 days in a room like this can lead to brain damage. I will be staying in this room for 3 days.
Light's only human contact would have been audio updates from the task force, so it's pretty miraculous that he made it through with no idea as to how long it might last. In the end, Light never gave up, but he did get kind of cocky down the stretch. He was just so confident that he had defeated Nier, and I think it's an appropriate ending for him. His cockiness shows that he is human, and thereby not fit to be a god. And even though his plea to Ryuk comes off as pathetic, there was never a moment when he stopped trying to win. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell for all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.